Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Cabbage Head Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Becomes Dullahan. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was an accident. Really, the first time was genuinely an accident. Izuku had never meant to end one of his friends, but no one had believed him when he said it was his fault. How could it be? He was quirkless, he didn't have a power that could hurt others, and he certainly couldn't end anyone, right? Izuku was barely 7 years old. No one believed that when he said Hibiki Nara's name, calling him from across the playground. The boy dropped dead instantly. Izuku's mother had laughed nervously when he said it and brushed him off as a worrywart. The next morning, Izuku woke up without the ability to speak. It wasn't for having lost his voice, not really. It was because he lost his head. He was blinking at the ceiling, but he could tell he was on the floor. He didn't remember falling asleep on the floor. When he tried to roll over or sit up, nothing happened. Or rather, he was still staring at the ceiling, but he could feel his body moving. Panic set in, and he tried to scream. Really, he did. But nothing came out. His mouth opened and there was no sound. His body fumbled to the floor. His vision went sideways as his head was knocked across the floor. That's when he saw it, his body, headless and crawling around the floor like a newborn doe on shaky legs. He was alive, watching his body from a distance as it struggled to find his head. Thankfully, the morning he woke up headless was a Saturday. His mother didn't come in to wake him up for school. He spent 2 hours struggling to grab his own head from the floor while panicking and silently screaming in horror. At 7 years old, Izuku had ended a person and lost his head in less than 24 hours. But finally, he grabbed hold of his detached skull and wiggled it back onto his neck by sheer force of will alone, as much force of will a child could muster, that is. When his neck reconnected, Izuku gasped. He hadn't realized he hadn't been breathing while his head was detached, but that made sense somehow. His mother came in shortly after, but no matter how hard he tried to show his mother the horror he just endured, Izuku couldn't get his head to detach a second time. She told him to stop making up fairy tales and leave his weird dreams for his sleep. 9 years later, Izuku crouched on a rooftop, watching the darkened city breathe. Streetlights changed, flickered around the edges of his vision as he observed the streets. It was around 1 a.m. on a Friday night. Izuku was on patrol, or at least he should be. But tonight, he had a meeting. Supposedly, there was some up-and-coming villain group that wanted to make a deal with the infamous vigilante, Dullahan. After Izuku discovered his quirk, and found no one who would believe him, he spent most of his childhood abused and bullied for his quirklessness and fairy tales about being a hero. He bore the scars to prove it. His friends had all turned into enemies. His mother started ignoring him because she couldn't have a normal conversation without him bringing up his imaginary quirk. So he put all his effort into training his quirk and striving to become a hero. That failed when every hero school in the country refused him entry. His quirk had limits, which made it impossible to prove without compromise. He could only detach his head at night. Asking for a nighttime test had earned him laughs and shaking heads. He could, of course, just name a person and end them, but he wasn't a murderer. Izuku didn't want to end anyone, so he wouldn't use that kind of power. Plus, he'd get arrested, and that defeated the purpose of being a hero. So at 14, he decided to run away from all the people who'd abused him, and instead of bashing his skull on the wall of heroism, he became a vigilante. He'd been training for almost a decade, anyway. On top of that, Izuku was immortal. At least, he was effectively immortal. At night, when his powers activated, he could take any amount of damage of any kind and suffer no effect. He could be injured during the day, though, but he found his quirk had a pretty big healing factor outside of nightlife, which was useful. His death powers still worked regardless of the time of day, but he finally understood the activation requirements. He had to know and call out a person's true name with some kind of intent. His quirk activation had been a fluke, as manifestations usually were, but he still refused to use real names, ever. Izuku sighed. It was almost 1:30 when he finally stretched his arms above his head and stood up. The roof ledge was precarious, but his balance was impeccable. Their meeting was taking place in the middle of Musutafu. With no assigned spot, Izuku had no idea how this supposed group of villains were going to find him. Perhaps they had a tracker. No, that didn't make sense. Izuku could sense when he was being watched or observed, and the direction of the observer. His sixth sense was off the charts for that sort of thing. He was in his full vigilante gear tonight, kitted out and ready for anything. Black cargo pants with a nice black dress shirt and dark green silk tie. He wore black combat boots and a long dark overcoat that made him look exactly like his vigilante namesake, the headless horseman from Sleepy Hollow. That was the aesthetic he strived for, at least. He had a large hood on the overcoat that shadowed his whole face and a black fabric mask that covered the lower half from below his eyes all the way down his neck. The mask had Velcro at his shoulders so he could detach his head if he wanted. But Izuku usually avoided that. So far, his vigilante name was a mystery to the world, as was his quirk. A swirling purple portal opened up to his left. Izuku unhooked the whip from his belt and took out his hunting knife with his free hand. 3 bodies walked through as the portal closed behind them. A pale blue-haired man covered in disembodied hands, a goth-looking effer covered in burned scars, and a well-dressed man covered in twisting purple mist. Dullahan, the hand-covered villain, asked, "Who's asking?" Izuku growled, "We are the League of Villains. I am Tamura Shigaraki. This is Dabai and Kurogiri." Shigaraki was the only one of the 3 whose name rang true in Izuku's mind. His quirk told him that much. None of that reassured him that these villains were actually here to make a deal with him. On top of that, Izuku didn't usually make deals with villains. After all, he was out here to arrest villains, not team up with them. The only reason he'd considered it this time was their supposed cause. They were going after All Might, who was mentoring the class of heroes he'd be studying with if he'd been accepted at UA High. Dusty here is being dramatic. The scarred one, Dabai, tucked his hands in his pockets. "Are you the one haunting the streets of Musutafu?" Izuku relaxed his fighting pose and tucked his whip away at his belt. But he kept his knife out as an open threat. "I am Dullahan. You weren't exactly specific with your intentions. What do you want from me?" "We're recruiting," Shigaraki called, putting his hands up in a sort of wide preacher pose. Izuku found it far too creepy to be any good sign. "We could use the ghost of Musutafu on our side. We're going after All Might and all the false heroes on the charts. You're going to help us take them down." "No." Izuku flipped his knife and put it back in the sheath on the back of his belt. This was a waste of time. He'd known the vague etchings of their goals, but now that he knew what they were fully after, there was no reason to be here. "Excuse me," the hand-covered villain asked, his tone dark. "I said, no. I have no intention of making myself a target of the heroes, nor do I have any reason to take them down. After all, I'm on their side, not yours. You're not a hero, jackass." Dabai rolled his eyes. "You're like us, thrown to the rats and filth of the streets. Why not take a boot to the neck of every a-hole that ever put you under theirs?" Izuku scoffed. "I'm nothing like you. Do you think you're better than us?" Shigaraki groused, his teeth disgustingly sneered from under the large hand covering his face. What the hell was with the hands, anyway? "No, I just don't need to end heroes to feel good about myself." "Dullahan," Dabai put an arm out in front of Shigaraki, stopping him from marching toward Izuku. "If nothing else, we could use your help. You're known for your uncanny ability to sneak into anywhere, everywhere." Izuku sighed. "What do you want? What's your price?" Shigaraki brushed Dabai off. "Tell me what and where it is, first." "The UA school schedule for Class 2A. Izuku barked a laugh. "You think I can just waltz into UA High and expect not to get caught and somehow escape with not only a class schedule, but my ass intact? You're insane. You can't afford the price for that kind of retrieval." "Name your price." Izuku bit his lip. "Look, handyman, you can't afford it, and I'm not doing it. That's a end mission." "Name your price," the handsy villain insisted. Izuku growled, deep in the back of his throat. Fine, if they wanted him to name a price, he'd name a damn price, a stupidly high one. 75 million yen. I also need transport and some weapons as a bonus. Done. Izuku narrowed his eyes. Not that they could tell behind his hood and mask. "One more thing. You're pushing your luck here, ghost." Dabai grumbled. A name. A name." Shigaraki leaned his weight on one foot like he was jutting his hip out to the side, annoyance on his face. "What name?" Izuku pointed at Dabai. "His. You have my name. It's Dabai." "No, it's not. I have a hunch about you, and I want your real name." This was an insurance policy. The whole time, Kurogiri had been silent and deathly still. He was nothing more than a butler, transport. He was likely not a hazard unless commanded to be, so Izuku wasn't worried about that. But Dabai had burning teal eyes that reminded Izuku far too much of a certain hero that had a fire quirk, burned scars, blue eyes, and a name meaning cremation. Yeah, Izuku had a hunch. Dabai scoffed. "This is ridiculous." "Oh, for FS sake, just tell him, Dabai. No one gives a shit about your real name or whoever you were before you burned up like bacon. You can whisper it to him if you're that embarrassed." "Embarrassed? You're insufferable, crusty, do you know that?" Yeah, whatever. Look, we agree to your terms. Money, transport, weapons, and Dabai's name. We need the schedule for next week ASAP, so you're going in tonight." "That's impossible. I haven't even agreed to give the ghost my damn name," Dabai argued. Izuku and Shigaraki ignored him. "You're going in tonight, Dullahan." "No, I'm not. It's already past 2, and I'm not risking an end mission with half a night to do my job. I'm going in tomorrow night. Meet me back here at 10 p.m. "Ugh, fine." Shigaraki threw his hands up. As he turned away, a portal appeared beside Kurogiri. Before passing through, he slapped Dabai on the shoulder and grinned behind the face hand again. "Go on, Dabai, tell him your name. We'll leave the portal open for you." Then he went through the portal with Kurogiri, but the swirling purple gate didn't close, as promised. Dabai growled. Izuku could almost hear the villain's teeth grinding. Izuku leaned on the roof ledge, his arms crossed. He had all night to wait, and he didn't care how long it took. The longer this took, the more Izuku's hunch was proved valid anyway. Eventually, the villain spat on the floor between them and spoke. "Talia Todoroki." Izuku grinned behind his mask. Yeah, that's what he thought. "Tell Handyman he'll have his class schedule. I'll meet him here tomorrow night. He better have a down payment sent to me tomorrow before the retrieval." Whatever. F off. You tell anyone my name, I'll effing end you. I have no interest in your family drama. I just wanted insurance. How is my name insurance? So long as you never cross me, you'll never need to know. Izuku dove off the building before Dabai could respond. He simply stepped off the edge and free fell to the ground. Were it daytime, he'd probably be dead, or at least gravely wounded. But because the sun had yet to rise, and his quirk was still active, Izuku landed on his feet without injury or trouble, like a cat falling off a railing, always landing on its feet safely. When Izuku made it back to where he was living, a condemned apartment block, he printed out blueprints he found on the dark web that covered most of UA High. Of course, knowing the infamous Nedzu was in control, the building construction likely changed often enough. This was reported to be accurate last year, so it would have to do for the moment. The class schedule would likely be found easily on one of the teachers' desks, or on their computers, both of which would be in the teacher's lounge. So, he had to get into the building and hope the halls hadn't changed so the path he was about to memorize would still be viable. This was dumb, incredibly stupid. His quirk allowed him to bypass any lock or door, sure. That was just a part of his nature. He'd learned that at a very early age, of course. His mother had always wondered how he continuously got into the snack drawer, despite keeping it locked so he wouldn't pig out on sweets. But even if he did get in, and got to the teacher's lounge, and got the class schedule, did Izuku really expect to get himself out of this massive school without being detected? Nedzu's security systems were known to be the best in the country. The school also swapped to a dorm system for last year's entry class, the class he would have been in. The class he was now about to steal a schedule for, 2A. Dorms meant more security and higher risks. Regardless of all that, Izuku did think he could manage it. His quirk allowed him entry past every security system and door, so he could get in without detection. And if he managed to get back to the doors, he could get out. The problem was running around the halls without detection on the security cameras. Given the Chimera's reputation, Izuku also assumed there would be pressure sensors and possibly other measures in place like atmospheric sensors or maybe even motion alarms. If any of that triggered when he went in, he'd get caught. Theoretically, his quirk could bypass all of that as they were considered locks in a way. But he was still a living, breathing person who could be seen on cameras, and if the cameras had separate systems for detecting movement, he'd be screwed. Damn, Izuku sighed. This is end. But he spent the rest of his night planning out the mission anyway. When the sun came up, he checked all of his doors and windows were locked, boarded up, and alarmed, and went to bed. After running away, he'd become nocturnal as a result of his quirk and habits as a vigilante. It made his life easier, but it did prevent him from living a normal life, and any civilian work or excursions had to be done in the late afternoon so he could actually sleep most of the day. Izuku had gotten used to sleeping with a neck brace on, if only to prevent any accidents, or waking up with his head on the damn floor. Honestly, it was more embarrassing and annoying than inconvenient. He'd managed to master moving his body without his head. And despite losing his ability to speak or breathe while his head was detached, Izuku didn't struggle to think, and he wasn't at risk of dying. Not any more than he would be on a normal day. Anyway, his routine was simple. Wake up, toss his neck brace aside, clamber out of his city bed and make some city coffee, drink it while reviewing news or an upcoming job, clean up, get dressed, and get whatever work done he had to do before heading out for patrol. Tonight there wouldn't be any patrol, though. He had to get ready for this stupid mission. Izuku rubbed his eyes and ran through his routine so he could get back to the work table and run through his plan twice more before the evening kicked off. Entry via portal into the grounds, then entry to the building by one of the staff entrances on the back of the building. Once through, he'd have to find his way to the teacher's lounge. Then he'd have to either find a schedule on one of the desks, or hack into one of the teacher's laptops to get it, and then exit back the way he came. He didn't trust the villains to pick him up on time, so he planned to exit out the back gate, just in case his ride didn't show up. He sipped coffee while going over the plan in his mind several more times and getting his gear prepped. A fresh knife was set out on the table along with a second whip. He also wanted to take a small crossbody backpack with a few tools and his own laptop in case he needed it. Lastly, he'd need a new set of boots with the treads smoothed and black latex gloves to avoid fingerprints. His hair would also be wrapped up in his hood and a hat to prevent any DNA being left in the school upon his departure. The only questions that remained was his plan of attack should he be captured. He could play dead. That was his usual go-to. That's why he was often nicknamed Ghost. Too many villains had seen him die. They'd seen him fall off buildings, get stabbed and shot, and a couple had even swore they'd seen him lose his head. Izuku smirked to himself. Honestly, it was sometimes just entertaining to watch the villains he routinely tormented and arrested squirm in discomfort as they dealt with the reality of killing a teenage vigilante. Then he'd show up the next night or a few days later in perfect health like nothing happened. 9:30. Izuku was back on the roof where he'd first met Shigaraki and Dabai. He had all his gear and felt mostly prepared to head into the madness he had somehow convinced himself he could accomplish. The city was quiet in the way cities were at night. The sound of traffic lights clicking and the rush of the subway trains were the only noise that filled the lack of voices and bodies. He often wandered up to the rooftops at night just to enjoy the silence and maybe think about the life he left behind. His mother never filed a missing persons report or came looking for him. No one at his middle school had made a scene when he stopped showing up the week before school ended. He hadn't left anything important behind, so there was no real reason to think about it, right? That didn't stop Izuku from feeling like he was missing out on something he could have had, perhaps in another life, maybe friends. The whoosh and swirl of a portal announced the villain's arrival. Izuku shook those silly thoughts out of his mind and slipped back into his vigilante persona. They'd done as Izuku requested and dropped off half the payment via portal earlier in the day, so Izuku was satisfied with moving forward. He was a little concerned they knew where he lived, but oh well. You actually showed. Dabai was the only one who walked through the portal. Well, you paid half. I earned my keep. Good. He reached back into the portal and pulled out a briefcase which was tossed at Izuku, who caught it. Your requested weapons, and Kurogiri is on standby for transport. He'll drop you off and pick you up. Izuku nodded. He was fully geared up, and that left nothing of his face or body revealed like last night. But even more so as he had latex gloves on and a hat to add to the cover of his already shaded face. Dabai inspected his look for a while, as if checking for cracks or weak points in the fake armor he put on. There wasn't any Kevlar, but Izuku felt shielded. He tucked the briefcase of weapons into a hiding spot on the roof and turned back to Dabai. Right, Kurogiri will bring you to our hideout when you're done. You better catch that portal or you're not getting paid and we're taking back what we already gave you. Get me? Yeah, I got you. Good. Wait for the portal to swap out and you're clear. Tell Kurogiri how long you need. Then Izuku was alone again. He took one last glance off the roof at the city. The portal shrunk into nothingness and spread open again. Izuku could see Kurogiri's bright yellow eyes at the very center. He was there, listening. Izuku could feel the weight of it on his brow. 26 minutes. No more, no less. If I'm 30 seconds late, assume I've been apprehended. The glowing eyes bobbed in agreement and vanished into the spiraling gate. The campus was only slightly different from when Izuku toured it for the entrance exams almost 2 years ago. The dorms were a new addition, sitting in a couple neat rows along the back of the school. The main building, the giant H-form covered in glass, sat imposing in the center. Izuku shook his head. He didn't have time to stand around. He clicked on his timer, 24 minutes, locked and loaded. He took out his whip but kept it wound in his hand, just in case. The staff door was right in front of him, and he was thankful Kurogiri had plopped in him the one tree-covered area near the main building. Izuku sprinted across the lawn to the door when the cameras turned away on their cycle. He took a deep breath and placed a hand on the door handle. His quirk was active, the lock clicked, he was through. First door down. 22 minutes remained. He was seriously wasting time. Izuku bolted through the halls, checking every corner for cameras and only moving when he was sure they weren't directed at him or where he was standing. There was no way to know for sure if he would get through this without being seen, but he continued on, regardless. The hike up to the third floor and down to the end of the hall was quiet and uneventful aside from the camera avoidance. He made it to the teacher's lounge and placed his hand over the lock. Again, it clicked and he slid the door to the side. No door could bar a Dullahan from doing his job. No lock could stop him from getting to his goal. The lounge was dark, empty. He didn't spot any cameras in here, which made sense. But that didn't mean it wasn't alarmed in some way. If there were pressure sensors or motion sensors, he was screwed. But Izuku couldn't worry about that now. He had a job to do. 16 minutes. Izuku quickly inspected each desk in the room, finding only one out of order. Who the hell had a desk this messy? It was piled high with papers and folders. He could risk spending the time cracking into a laptop, or he could try and dig into this desk. Izuku opted for the messy desk. Someone with a desk this nasty wouldn't miss or even notice the forms Izuku stole, would they? Why am I doing this? He muttered to himself. It took way too long to scan through all the paperwork on the messy desk. And just as he found what he was looking for, something clicked in the walls. Without his quirk, he wouldn't have noticed it. Something was watching him. No, someone was watching him. Up, to the left, there, the vent. Izuku narrowed his eyes. He glared at the vent grate for a long moment before realizing he was staring into the beady eyes of the very chimera he'd been trying to avoid the whole time. After a brief frozen moment, Izuku stuffed the schedule in his pocket while bolting out of the room and back down the hall. The school's alarm blared to life, all the windows shuttering and a few of the doors latching shut. Izuku didn't care. His quirk didn't care. Every locked door he came to clicked back open for him, and in minutes he was back outside. The portal was open. He could see it just beyond the trees. He pushed his legs harder, faster, but he could feel too many eyes on the back of his neck. Stop. A gruff male voice called. You're under arrest. That was a woman's voice. Izuku flicked his whip out and cracked it to one of the nearest trees to pull himself forward, to propel himself towards the portal. But he was too late. Something grabbed his ankle, yanked him backwards, and crashed his chin into the concrete. Phoo! His vision spun wild, upside down, sideways. His head was knocked clean off his shoulders from the force of his chin landing on the concrete. The screech and tear of Velcro filled his ears. Speech and breathing cut out. His body went limp. Maybe he could play dead, but he knew that would be useless. No normal fall would knock someone's head off. What the sit? Eraser. The voice's voice again. You ... what the F? I didn't ... that's not possible. Izuku wanted to sigh. He sighed in his mind. There was no real reason to hide the truth now. He was caught red-handed and there was no way to escape. Eraser, midnight, what happened? Izuku actually recognized Netsu's voice. Oh dear. Well, that's interesting. Izuku rolled his eyes. He couldn't see the staff with his head rolled to the side and facing the trees, though. For a split second he saw a portal open up. Shigaraki's head poked out. He spotted Izuku's lifeless body and grimaced before vanishing again. Okay, maybe he was off the hook with the villains. They thought he was dead. Shame, he'd lose all that money. Izuku's body rolled to the side and stood up under his command. What the hell? Izuku recognized Eraserhead's voice now. What a way to meet your hero. Oh my god, it's a zombie. Do you think my quirk will work on zombies? No, Midnight, dear. I think this is something quite other. If my hunch is right, the little vigilante isn't actually dead. I've been following him for a while now. Izuku wondered why they were speaking about him and not to him, but Netsu quickly picked up on that. Can you hear me, Dullahan? His body grabbed hold of his head, easily lifting it and settling it back onto his shoulders with a twisting squelch and crack of his neck. Izuku gasped his breath back into his lungs. Yes, excellent. What a fascinating quirk. No one's ever bypassed my security system so effectively. You must tell me how you've done it. I didn't. Izuku stretched his neck and rolled his shoulders. Why was he telling them any of the truth? Well, they just watched him reattach his head, so lying wasn't exactly going to help him or work right now. Speaking of what they just witnessed, Eraserhead looked horrified as he kept flicking his eyes between Izuku and Netsu. Midnight had a hand to her mouth, confusion on her features. So, you really are a Dullahan. That's why I picked the name. Izuku grumbled. Brushing his hood and hat off, he unstrapped his mask and took an easy breath. You're just a kid. Eraserhead finally snapped out of his shock. What of it? You're a kid. Why are you a vigilante? How did you get in here? Izuku sighed. He'd told them enough. He shut down and held his hands out for the coming handcuffs. Eraserhead shook his head and slapped a pair on his wrists as he heaved Izuku up off the ground. He was carted with a hand on his shoulder to an interview room of some kind in the administrative wing. The first thing they did once he was sat down was take the schedule from his pocket and search him. They took his whips and knives and told him to stay put. If Izuku wanted, he could just walk back out the door, even after hearing the lock click, but he decided to obey. Why? Because he didn't actually feel like getting beat up by a bunch of hero teachers. Even if he could get through doors, that didn't do much for the wall of trained muscle prepared to recapture him. It would be stupid to think he could take on the UA staff on his own. One or two, maybe, if he really wanted to. But now that the alarms went off and the whole school was awake, there was no hope of getting past them all. They left Izuku alone for probably an hour or two. He couldn't tell exactly since there wasn't a clock in the room. Part of his quirk allowed him to tell time pretty impeccably, but it was never exact or to the minute. He felt like it was around 12:30, but it could be 1, maybe. When the door clicked open, Eraserhead walked in with Detective Tsukachi, a man he'd been avoiding for years. This detective was known for his arrest record and his ability to capture vigilantes. Well, that made his night a little worse. So, you're the infamous vigilante Dullahan, the ghost of Musutafu. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Izuku sniffed the air. He knew this man's full name as it was public record, but he didn't plan to use it. Eraserheads was a deeply hidden secret to the public, so he'd have to do some digging if he wanted that, which he really didn't. After all, a name was power, and Izuku didn't want power over one of the few heroes he actually admired. Still, the man only stood by the door with his arms crossed and exhaustion on his features. Izuku ignored the hero for now. Likewise, detective. You know who I am. Well, that makes my life easier. Are you aware of my truth quirk? I am. Good. The man sat himself down across from Izuku and pressed record on a voice recording app on his phone. Interview 1. Detective Tsukachi Naomasa, Eraserhead, and the vigilante Dullahan. Please provide verbal answers to all questions. Let's begin. Izuku settled back in the chair, but the first thing he did was toss the cuffs on the table, unlocked and clattering across the metal surface. Tsukachi looked shocked, but Eraserhead just clicked his tongue. He figured they would get to his methods of entry and escape soon. What is your given name? Tsukachi asked. Izuku shook his head. I don't use names unless absolutely necessary. You will not get mine until you figure it out for yourself. But you can call me Ghost if you want. Very well. We'll take a blood sample and have your medical records pulled. You won't find much. Izuku grumbled. They might find his name, but his medical record said nothing more than quirkless. The doctors never cared to update it or bother with truly helping him for any of his wounds. How old are you? Izuku shifted awkwardly. 16. Where are your parents? Don't know, don't care. Dad ran away when I was 4. Mom never came looking for me. Their names? Izuku didn't respond. Tsukachi sighed. Tell us about your quirk. Ask Nedzu. He seems to think he has it figured out. He says your quirk is copying the ancient Fey myth of the Dullahan, the headless horseman. Is that accurate? Ghost, I need a yes or no. It's accurate enough. The interview went on like this for probably half an hour. Tsukachi would ask a question. Izuku would either give him a vague answer, deflect, or refuse altogether. Eventually, they got to the point of this whole encounter, why he was here at the school in the first place. What was your mission here? Why steal a class schedule? Izuku didn't actually know the real reason. Or rather, he didn't know the importance it held to whatever mission the League was launching. But he never asked, and he didn't care. There was good money involved, which was now forfeit, and that had been all he needed to know going in. Come on, kid. We need to know what you were going to do with the information you stole. Izuku rolled his eyes. He shoved his mop of green curls back over his head and sighed towards the ceiling. I got paid for a retrieval, that's all. I didn't ask what it was for, and I didn't need to know. They let me set the price, and despite knowing it was likely an end mission, I was dumb enough to think I could pull it off. Almost did, too. Izuku glared at Eraserhead's capture scarf hard enough to make the man shift his weight from foot to foot. Tsukachi clicked off the recording and stood up. We need to speak about our options. We'll be back. Options? What options? They were going to try and put Izuku in jail and he'd escape. He'd never been put under quirk suppressant, but since he was fairly sure his quirk was mutant type, he didn't really think they'd work much on him. Even without his quirk, he was an expert at picking locks, so he didn't really imagine a simple jail cell could hold him. The local joint they tossed the vigilantes and juvenile detainees into was far inferior to anything Nedzu could come up with, to say the least. They left him alone for another long while. He did close his eyes to nap for a bit, only to startle awake when the door clattered open again. This time, it was Eraserhead with Nedzu on his shoulder, no sign of the detective. Izuku could feel eyes on the back of his head. The two-way mirror behind him was making the skin behind his ears prickle. So, Tsukachi was still watching, even if he wasn't in the room. Why did UA have an interrogation room? That was a damn good question. So, Nedzu hopped of Eraserhead's shoulders onto the table and paced back and forth in front of Izuku. We have 2 offers on the table, and each carries its own caveats. However, I have one question for you first, if you would be so kind as to indulge my curiosity for a moment. Izuku motioned for him to go on. The Chimera grinned. Izuku shivered. Why, exactly, did you become a vigilante? Seriously? They wanted to know the why behind his actions. Izuku sighed. No hero school would accept a quirkless runt with a city record, no matter how forged that record might have been, designed to see me fail. It doesn't matter now. Just throw me in jail so I can go back to my life. You clearly aren't quirkless, and there is no going back to the life you had before, kid. Stop calling me that, Eraserhead. I'm not a effing child. You don't know anything about me, so kindly F off. The older hero sighed. I meant there's no going back to being a vigilante. You either take Nedzu's offer or you go to jail. It's that simple. Izuku barked a laugh. Throw me in there, see how long that lasts. Locks and doors don't affect me. What the hell does that mean? Exactly what I said. Figure it out. Ask Nedzu. I think he has some ideas, don't you, Chimera? Izuku had no issue using Nedzu's name. It wasn't his real name, after all. His quirk told him that much. I do. Izuku leaned forward, a devious smirk on his lips. Well, share with the class. We're all waiting. Eraserhead rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed with Izuku's antics. Izuku scoffed. Like he cared what some stupid hero thought of him. Even if he admired this one above most of the others. None of them ever saved Izuku. He might technically be on their side, fighting crime, but he wasn't a hero, that's for sure. You are, quite literally, a Dullahan. Nezu drew Izuku's attention again. You are a headless horseman, with all the abilities of one. Your quirk is fascinating. Can you remove your head from me once more? Izuku rolled his eyes. Of course, morbid curiosity won out for the Chaos Lord. Nezu was quite infamous within the underground for how much of a mad genius he was. Still, the little vigilante obliged. Both hands to his temples, he twisted his head to the left and then off his shoulders. Eraserhead's face was horrified, but Nezu was grinning like a wild beast. Izuku was pretty sure that was the kind of look he should fear, but he didn't. Excellent. Considering your silence, I presume you cannot speak while your head is detached. Izuku blinked. Right, you can. He gestured to Izuku's neck. Izuku crunched his head back in place with a resounding crack as he adjusted his neck. I think I need some air. The tired hero across from him turned to leave the room, looking a bit green around the gills. Izuku chuckled when he finally got his voice back. Can't stomach a little decapitation, Eraserhead. The hero rounded on him so fast. Izuku actually leaned back in the chair. Eraser's hair was floating above his head, his eyes bright red, glowing, and his capture scarf in hand. You think this is funny? Yeah, kind of. It was, wasn't it? After all the years people made him feel uncomfortable, it was his turn to make them squirm and sick to the stomach. This is a waste of time, Nezu. Just throw the brat in juvie and call it a day. I'm afraid we can't. What? Excuse me. Both Izuku and Eraserhead cried out at the same time, then proceeded to glare at each other. As I said, he's a genuine fairy myth. The Dullahan is not stopped by any locks or doors. He cannot be barred from his duties. That's an integral part of the myth. It's why he got past my security system so easily. It's a part of what he is. Locks just don't work on him. Putting him in jail would just be providing a few days' meals before he decided to walk out the front door. Izuku didn't respond to that. It was true, and Nezu had hit the nail on the damn head. But Izuku would have preferred getting a few days of free meals before going back on the streets. At least he could have had a full belly for a few days. Had he finished this mission, he'd be rich, or at least rich by his means. But that didn't happen, and he was now stuck in a room with a grouchy old man and a rat. Great, just great. I'm going to assume there are a ton of other facets to your quirk, and that you will tell us none of them. Well, they don't call you a mad genius in the underground for nothing, Nezu. So, here are your revised options. The little chimera clapped his paws together and paced the table with renewed vigor. Revised? Eraserhead asked, coming over to slap his palms on the metal tabletop. Izuku ignored him. You go to juvie for however long that lasts, and we keep catching you over and over as you escape over and over for the next however many years, or Izuku wasn't sure option 2 would be more fun, but he still listened, if only because he was too lazy to get up and leave yet, or you stay here and become a hero student. The room was dead silent for all of 30 seconds before Izuku burst into a fit of laughter so hard he actually fell out of his chair and landed on the floor clutching his stomach. What a grand idea. Put the problematic vigilante into a class full of hero brats, and expect him to learn to be a real hero. You wanted to be a hero bad enough that you became a vigilante. What was the point of that if not to be a hero in your own right? Izuku stopped laughing long enough to look up at Eraserhead. The hero was right, in a way. However, look, Eraserhead. Izuku stood up and leaned on the two-way mirror behind him, right in front of Tsukachi, or at least where the observation ping was coming from. It moved a second later. I get what you're trying to do. You can't control me, you can't capture me, so you're trying to turn me into a hero that you can control. I'm not some goody two-shoes heroing that will prance around and ask how high when the commission says jump. Forget it. That's not who I am anymore. So, let's just go back to our fun little game of capture and release so we can all get some damn sleep. What do you mean by anymore? Nezu asked. Izuku ground his teeth. I'm not a stupid kid with a dream anymore. Besides, All Might crushed those dreams with his scrawny bare hands. I might not want to see the heroes fall, but I'm sure as hell not. A portal spun to life just beside Izuku. A large hand reached through. Izuku rolled to the side and popped up onto his feet in a fighting stance. Eraserhead smacked the alarm on the wall and rushed to his side. Shigaraki himself strolled through with a nasty grin behind his hand-covered face, as usual. So Kurogiri was right, you aren't dead. No wonder they call you Ghost. But sadly, you're a loose end that I'd like to tie up, so come along. F you, handy man. I told you, I don't team up with villains. But you're not above taking our money and stealing for us. Money is money, no matter how bloody. Enough, Eraserhead barked. Shigaraki, you're under arrest. Surrender yourself and this won't be painful. Painful for who? The smiling demon asked. The most disgusting sensation of clawed fingernails slithered up Izuku's spine. He couldn't explain how he knew what was about to happen, but he knew, without a shred of doubt, that if he did not intervene, Eraserhead would die. Izuku's body reacted on instinct. Maybe that hero spirit he had as a child wasn't completely gone. He thrust himself between Shigaraki and Eraserhead, left arm up in a defensive pose. The villain grabbed his arm and pain shocked through it. He could feel the man's quirk tearing his flesh to shreds, but he stood firm and grabbed Shigaraki's collar to prevent the villain from getting around him. Tamura Shigaraki. His voice split in four, 2 high tones and 2 low tones, merging together to create the sound, the call of death. And death came. The light faded from the villain's eyes instantly, and he dropped dead at Izuku's feet a second later. The portal vanished. No one moved. Izuku's arm was bleeding down his coat, but he didn't care to stop it. This wasn't the first time he'd ended someone, nor even the second or third. But he still hated using his power this way. Even as a self-defense, he hated taking life. Perhaps that was silly. After all, he was a Dullahan. He was death walking, chasing. He was the Night Rider who came for those who were called to the depths of hell. Maybe it wasn't wrong to take Shigaraki's life, then. Maybe he was supposed to die, if Izuku deemed it so. Ghost. Something small grabbed his sleeve. Izuku jumped back and shook his head. He couldn't speak. He was too scared he would say someone else's name and end them, too. It's all right, Netsu said, calmly. You're safe. Can I have a look at your arm? Oh, right. Shigaraki's quirk. Izuku slipped his arm out of his coat and hissed at the pain. Netsu carefully took hold of his hand to inspect the little circles of decaying flesh on his arm. It looked like someone took acid to his arm in the shape of Shigaraki's fingerprints. Effing gross. His quirk is called decay, and I don't think it needs any further explanation. Izuku nodded. Yeah, pretty self-explanatory. Tsukachi came rushing into the room with another officer, Sansa, on his heels. They were both guns drawn and ready to fight. Eraserhead kicked Shigaraki's body so it rolled onto its back. The kid beat you to it, Suki. Ghost took down Shigaraki. Yeah, let's have a chat about that. Eraserhead turned to him. How did you do that? But it was Netsu who answered. In the myth of the Dullahan, the duty of the headless horseman is to ride to those whose time had come, and announce their names to the 4 corners of the earth. When the name is spoken aloud, the person dies instantly. Names of power. Izuku repeated from earlier, his voice frail and quiet. So you just ... said his name, and he died? Tsukachi asked. Izuku nodded. Your quirk comes with an insta-kill. This time, Izuku shrugged. Well, Netsu sighed. This isn't too bad. I'll need to have recovery girl clean out the decayed bits, but otherwise, it doesn't appear to be getting worse. Does it hurt? Yes, Izuku growled. Netsu, do you seriously want a kid with the ability to end anyone just by saying their name in this school? It's not that simple. Izuku snapped at Eraserhead. Then explain it. Because you have given us a whole crock of nothing since you walked in here. It's not just about the name. It's the intent. I can say your true name just fine so long as there is no intention for you to die. But I still refuse to use anyone's real name, just in case. You only called me Detective ... But wait, you have been addressing Netsu by his name. It only works if it's your true name. How did you know Netsu wasn't my real name? I just ... know. I can tell if your name is real or fake. Eraserhead looked him up and down for a moment before stepping closer. Netsu gave him a wary look and Tsukachi seemed unsure what to do. Izuku didn't back down from the weight of the hero's glare. My name is Aburo Shirakumo. No, it's not. My name is Tetsuya Ashikuro. Eraserhead, stop it. I don't. Shouta Aizawa. Izuku shoved him backwards with both hands. I don't want your goddamn name. Do you understand what you've done? A name is power. You have given me power over your very being, to allow you to live or call you to death. I don't want that kind of power, and you can't take it back. Then give me your name in return. We'll be equal. No. Izuku shoved him again. Shouta stood firm. That boy doesn't exist anymore. I'm nothing more than a ghost chasing death. Just leave me alone, please. Netsu tugged Eraserhead's pant leg as he walked toward the door. The adults filtered out of the room, leaving Izuku to himself and his battered arm. They took Shigaraki's body with them. This is what he wanted, wasn't it, to be left alone? After all, it's not like they could save him or stop him. He could leave whenever he liked unless they physically held him down with something he couldn't move that didn't have a lock on it. So why wasn't he leaving, then? Why hadn't he just walked out the door? There were several villains who tried and failed to capture and keep him over the years, an immortal plaything for their entertainment. But each time, they couldn't figure out a way to keep him locked up. So why, in UA High of all places, was he struggling to push his legs toward the door? Izuku collapsed back into the chair with his head in his hands. Maybe Netsu was reconsidering his offer. Maybe they'd just throw him in a hole and forget he exists. Maybe Izuku wouldn't hate that idea so much. It would keep him from ending another person, intentional or not. It would keep the world safe from the roaming ghost haunting the city. Izuku was so effing careful, every moment of his life. But he could never be careful enough unless he just stopped talking. Maybe he should start carrying his head under his arm like the myths. He couldn't detach it during the day, But if he detached it at night, he could leave it detached without issue. Aside from his loss of speech, going back to the underground now would prove problematic. He just ended Shigaraki, and Izuku was fairly sure Kurogiri had seen it happen. He wouldn't get away with that, not without consequences. He had no idea who was funding this league of villains. But if they could pay Izuku's prices, there was no telling what they could do to Izuku for ending one of them. What a miserable weekend he was having. When Nezu returned, he was alone. Izuku didn't feel any eyes on him besides the little chimera, so the others must have been busy dealing with Shigaraki. Ghost. He was listening, but he refused to lift his head from the table. I have an idea I'd like to run past you. Izuku tilted his head to the side, resting his cheek on the table to look at the principal across from him. The little chimera was poking his head over the table edge, standing on the chair. He nodded. The deal includes you giving up being a vigilante. You should know that first. Izuku wasn't sure if that was a deal breaker yet. The chimera went on. I would like you to stay here and become Aizawa's personal student to train in underground heroics. He only has one other personal student right now, and you would be one of only 2 going into the underground in this class. But I think it would suit you far better and far more legally than being a vigilante. Why would Aizawa want him as a personal student? On top of that, if that was the only offer now, why was Nezu here delivering it, not the tired hero himself? Izuku wondered if he was outside the room fuming at Nezu for even suggesting Izuku become his student. There were far too many questions regarding this offer that came to mind. But for now, the only important one was, do I get off the hook for ending Shigaraki if I agree to this? I'm afraid the cameras were acting up in here earlier. The poor villain just mysteriously dropped dead. What a wondrous miracle. Izuku tried to hide the smirk on the corner of his lips, but he failed. Nezu winked at him. He didn't want to give up being a vigilante. He didn't want to force himself to become a hero when heroes had only ever betrayed his trust and crushed his dreams. There were so many things pulling him back to that abandoned apartment, to the comfort and solace of his loneliness, even if the League came after him for ending one of their own. He didn't trust heroes. He didn't trust the society that had broken him down and crushed his dreams. Except he'd figured out why he hadn't walked out yet. This was the most human interaction Izuku had had in years. And he realized while sitting here, alone, that he didn't want to lose it. Izuku liked being alone, but he hated being lonely. And there was a distinct difference between the two. Growing up, he'd only ever been lonely. Hated, picked on. No one had cared if he succeeded in life, or if he was just a kid that should probably be cared for. He knew Nezu was just trying to put an end to one more vigilante, to stop one more illegal hero on the streets, but he wasn't trying to toss Izuku away. Yes, part of that was the inability to actually lock him up in jail because of his quirk. But not all of it. I need an answer, Ghost. Izuku shook his head to clear the swirling thoughts. Why yes, I accept ... if you'll indulge one condition. What's that? The person I was is dead. Destroy my file. Or at least have me pronounced deceased. Nezu gave him an odd look. Are you sure? That's all you want? It's a bit of a big request, isn't it? I'm afraid Izuku Midoriya was pronounced dead 8 months ago. Oh, Izuku leaned back in the chair. So, his mother had filed a report of some kind. But no one cared to look. Enough time had passed and she had him pronounced dead. The posthumous pronouncement did nothing for her. He was quirkless on registry and therefore did not warrant a stipend from the government like any other kid would if they died under mysterious circumstances. Izuku wasn't shocked that Nezu knew his name, or who he was. He'd already stated he'd been following Dullahan for a while now, and Izuku hadn't tried to hide his face once captured. Plus, Nezu likely stole a sample of his blood while inspecting his arm, which only confirmed his identity. I will need to give you a new identity, though, but we can worry about that later. I'm still willing to indulge one condition if you'd like to pick something else. No, whatever. Izuku rubbed his hands over his face. I need my sit from my apartment. I assume I'm not allowed to leave campus now. Not for a while, no. I will have your belongings brought to you. Come along. Let's get you settled in. You will be guarded for the first few days while you get acclimated. You mean I'll have a watchdog to make sure I don't end anyone? Izuku grumbled. Nezu didn't respond. He followed the principal out of the interrogation room. The hall outside was full of life. Tsukachi and Aizawa were off to the side, talking quietly. Officer Sansa was by the door, back straight and eyes on a swivel. Standing across the hall from them was Ectoplasm and Midnight. Izuku had only seen them in passing on the news. He never really met them before. Ectoplasm will be your guard for the next few days. Midnight, could you take our little ghost here to get checked out before Ectoplasm takes him back to the dorms? Of course, Nezu. Come on, sweetie, let's see to that arm. Aizawa looked up from his conversation long enough to give Izuku a hardened glare, which the vigilante returned with just as much vitriol. They were not going to get along, not right away at least. Eraserhead was a hard-ass hero, and Izuku had heard his teaching style was similar. Izuku was a rock in the dryer, making noise and dents constantly. The tired hero probably hated that. But Izuku didn't plan to change himself to suit the needs of his new teacher. F that. Leave the bandages on for a few days, and you'll be fine. Recovery girl planted a kiss on his forehead, activating her quirk. A rush of relief spiraled down his arm, taking the pain from the decayed flesh on his arm. Izuku nodded his thanks and walked back out to meet ectoplasm once the nurse dismissed him. Midnight had vanished, probably to go back to her job. The hero teacher stared him down for a moment. At least, Izuku sort of assumed he did. It was really hard to tell with that helmet mask thing on his face. Izuku blinked a few times but waited to see what the teacher would say. In the end, he said nothing. A clone split off in the pair of ectoplasms. Ectoplasmi. There was one on each side of Izuku as they led him out to the dorms. A member of Classa was expelled last year. You'll be taking his place. Izuku wasn't sure which ectoplasm had said that, the original or the clone. Actually, which one was the clone? Izuku wondered if they were identical on a genetic level. Maybe both of them were clones ... or neither of them were. Okay, that line of thinking was giving him a headache. Oh, the boy was found peeking in the girls' locker rooms in the dorms while it was occupied. Should you be telling me this? Izuku asked. I mean, F that kid. He'll end up becoming a villain, but like ... why tell me? Aizawa, and by extension Nenzu and Yue, have a zero-tolerance policy for any kind of villainous behavior. Cool, I'm not a villain. I'm also not a pervert. Shouldn't be an issue. Ectoplasm made a sound that could have been taken as a grunt, but it was too bubbly. What did that mask do to his speech, anyway? Izuku had far too many questions. The hero led him to the two dorms and Izuku stopped at the end of the walk, feet frozen on the sidewalk. Absolutely not. He figured they'd be putting him with the teachers, to guard him. Or maybe in a visitor's dorm, where he wouldn't be stuck with a whole building full of a-holes his age who would be more than willing to bully him like always. Oh hell no. Izuku threw his hands up. Ectoplasm stopped and turned. Izuku had no way to know what the man's face was doing or if he was asking for an explanation. Already giving up, kid. Aizawa walked up behind him with a travel mug in hand and a smug grin on his face. You're not putting me in a student dorm. This is ridiculous. Aren't you the ones worried I might end someone? You're my student now, which means you live with your classmates just like everyone else. No special treatment, even for vigilantes within Stock Hills. Izuku growled with his hands clawed in front of his face. Why effing bother? You know I could just walk out the gate if I wanted to. But you won't. Aizawa leaned forward with one eyebrow arched up. Unless you want to prove Nenzu wrong. He seems to think your abilities would benefit the good guys. And you yourself said you're not a villain. So please, prove us wrong. The man made a sweeping motion towards the back gate of the campus, which was about 20 yards to their left. Izuku ground his jaw. This man was going to be the death of him, the absolute death of him. There was no way he would let them think he was some common criminal. And there was certainly no way he was going to walk back out there to certain death for ending Shigaraki. Not yet, anyway. With a huff, he turned back to Ectoplasm and gestured aggressively towards the dorms. Aizawa followed them. The sun was coming up over the horizon. It was probably almost 7 in the morning. Hopefully Herolings slept in on Sundays. Your stuff was moved into your room while you were with Recovery Girl and Midnight made sure you had all the necessities. Thank her next time you see her, Izuku grunted at his new teacher, agreeing that he would without actually saying it. Aizawa grabbed the door handle and swung the door wide, leaving Izuku to stumble on the porch with his guard dog behind him. What? Alright Hellspawn, listen up. Oh, great, no such luck. Herolings didn't sleep in on Sundays. You've got a new classmate. He turned to Izuku and mumbled. What exactly am I calling you? Ghost. Izuku grumbled. That's not a name. Izuku glared at Aizawa, refusing to look at the students inside the building. He was just to the left of the door and still unseen. There was a bit of commotion starting up inside. Voices and mutterings as they waited for their teacher to announce the new student. Everyone say hello to Ghost. Don't bombard him with questions. I've got grading to do. Ectoplasm is staying with us for a few days while our new problem child gets acclimated. The older hero went inside, calling over his shoulder, if you need me, don't need me. He does care. Ectoplasm whispered over Izuku's shoulder. He's just a literal hobo. Izuku grumbled. He used to be my favorite hero. Now I just wanna. He made a strangling gesture. Ectoplasm chuckled. Hi. Izuku stumbled back from the door when a girl's face popped around it. She had short-cropped brown hair and rosy cheeks, and a smile that could rival the sun. Izuku was blinded, and not in a good way. Behind her, a tall guy with glasses and dark blue hair was waving with these choppy motions. Welcome to Class 2A, Ghost. Is that your legal name? Anyway, I am Class President Tenya Ada, and this is Ochako Uraraka. It's a pleasure to meet you. Please, come in. The girl, Uraraka, bounced outside. She went for his arm, the wounded one, but Izuku's brain just sort of melted. He reacted on instinct. His leg kicked out, grabbed her ankle while his good hand grabbed her arm and pushed her sideways into an armbar with her leg kicked out. What the hey? I was just trying to take your hand. Ghost, ectoplasm warned. Ooh, sorry. Izuku released her a second later when he realized what he'd done. It's good to see you have hero training, but why did you do that? Ida asked. Hiroraka was busy rubbing her arm. Izuku didn't really know how to answer that. To say the truth, he was just accustomed to being greeted with violence. Bullies, villains, other vigilantes, civilians, even. Izuku had never really been given kind physical contact, nor did he expect it from anyone, ever. My arm is injured. I just reacted. He shrugged. Oh, I'm sorry. Hiroraka bowed. I hope I didn't hurt you. Izuku blinked. No, I'm fine. Ectoplasm ushered them all inside and closed the door while they spoke. Wait, where did his clone go? Izuku was seriously going to have a constant headache around this hero, wasn't he? You're obviously not from UA, so which hero school did you transfer from? Hiroraka kept the conversation going. Izuku wished she wouldn't. More students were filtering into the common room, which just looked like a big open space with a sitting area, TV, study tables, and a few bean bags and games laying around. The kitchen and dining area was off to the back left, with an elevator and entrance to the dorm rooms to the back right. Izuku had no idea where his room was, or where anything was, actually. I didn't. Izuku explained while looking around. There were a few students on the couches by the TV with eyes on him, but they didn't seem keen on coming over. They looked shy. One had the head of a bird, one looked like his head was made of rocks, and the other had several extra limbs. Interesting. He spotted a girl with a possible frog quirk studying off to the right, along with a cute girl wearing his hair in a giant ponytail. There was also a set of floating clothes, which Izuku attributed to an invisibility quirk. A girl, maybe. The kitchen was full, probably the late risers making breakfast. A redhead with shark teeth was cooking eggs while a bright pink girl quietly danced nearby with headphones on. How many students were there? You didn't, what? Ida asked. You didn't transfer from a hero school. I didn't attend hero school or high school. I don't think I graduated middle school, technically. He assumed Nedzu knew since he'd pulled the Vigilantes records. So if he was fine with it, Izuku wouldn't care. Wait, what? But you can't have been accepted into UA without. I wasn't accepted. Izuku grumbled. This isn't a reward, class president. I'm a prisoner. Ectoplasm sighed. You're being dramatic. Come along. I think you've said enough for the time being. He ushered Izuku towards the back of the common room, leaving Hiroraka and Ida in stunned silence. How many hero brats do I have to get along with? 19. You don't have to get along with them, you just have to work with them. I can live with Tha. Deku. Izuku's feet caught on the rug. Ectoplasm nearly lost his footing when Izuku froze up. A rush of fear crept up into his gut from somewhere dark and buried. That voice grated his ears to the point of pain just behind his eyes. There was no effing way he was being put in the same class as. F this. Absolutely not. Tell Aizawa he wins. I'll prove him wrong. F this. He turned on his heel to head right back out the door, but someone grabbed him, and it wasn't Ectoplasm. Izuku yanked his hand free. What the hell are you doing here, Deku? Katsuki Bakugo asked. Izuku growled. Call me that effing slur again and you'll see why the hell I'm here. Katsuki actually took a half step back. You two know each other? Ectoplasm asked. Yeah. Izuku's lip peels up in disgust. We know each other, don't we, Kaken? The blonde winced at the mocking use of his old nickname. We grew up together. Best friends forever, weren't we? Izuku elbowed him out of the way and Katsuki didn't stop him. Where the hell is Aizawa? Right here. What's going on? The teacher rounded the corner. This farce is over. Tell Nedzu to toss me in juvie. There's no effing way I'm being put in a class with him. Izuku gestured to Katsuki without using his name. Why is that? Izuku scoffed. Why don't you tell them, Kaken? The class was starting to crowd around them or peek around the couches from the common room. Izuku crossed his arms and settled his weight on his right hip. The blonde didn't seem capable of answering. His face was an open wreck of shock and hurt. Izuku didn't care. He deserved it, and worse. Actually, I have a better idea. Izuku tossed his coat on a nearby chair and walked back to Katsuki. He leaned down enough to force the blonde to stare him in the eyes as he unbuttoned his shirt. Katsuki's eyes widened in horror, knowing full well what Izuku was about to show off. A second later, he grabbed Izuku's collar, stopping his hands, but this time, Izuku didn't snap back when touched. Don't, Katsuki gasped. Izuku slapped his hand away and growled in the blonde's face. It was a mirror to what Katsuki used to do to him. He ripped his shirt open and grabbed Katsuki's chin. Aizawa's hand was on his shoulder a second later, but Izuku ignored him. What kind of hero can't stomach their own quirk? He used his free hand to shrug the shirt down his arms, leaving his scar-riddled skin open for the whole room to see. Starbursts covered his shoulders, chest, and back. The large handprint on his left shoulder sat proud and red on his skin, even fully healed. Ghost. Aizawa's voice was hesitant. How? Ask him. Izuku barked. Ask Kaken how I got the scars. Ask him about Alder in middle school. Ask him about gym class. Ask him what his quirk feels like on human skin. I bet he can't tell you, but I sure as hell can. Katsuki was quietly crying by the time Izuku finished speaking. He threw Katsuki's face backwards, making the blonde stumble and land on his ass on the carpet. You're accusing. It's not an accusation, Eraserhead. Izuku put his coat back on and shouldered past his new teacher, but the man grabbed his shoulder to stop him again. Izuku snarled, glaring up at the man who dared try and call his bluff. Well, it wasn't a bluff, so he was sit out of luck. Dezu asked me why. He asked me why I became a vigilante. A few gasps and murmurs filled the room around them. You want to know why? Izuku pointed at Katsuki. Because he told me to throw myself off a roof. With a sneer, he practically hissed the next sentence. So I did. What a shame it didn't work. In truth, Izuku hadn't been sure if it would work at the time. He'd discovered his quirk at 7, but by 14 his dreams were shattered and that roof looked too good to refuse. He figured if he jumped during the day, when his quirk wasn't active, he could die. Well, he'd been wrong. He had to lay there for hours while his body knit itself back together, but he didn't die. Move. Now. Aizawa snapped him out of his thoughts. Ectoplasm. Take Bakugo to his room and stay with him. Ghost, with me. Izuku was being pulled by the arm. The clamor of students' complaints and requests for information followed them down the hallway. Aizawa grabbed a random door and shoved them both inside before slamming the door shut after them. This must be his newly assigned room since all his stuff was in here. Izuku's shoulders finally dropped a little, unseen tension finally releasing now that he wasn't being stared at by 36 pairs of eyes. Oh, that's what had him on edge. Too many observation pings crawling across his skin. Why didn't you tell us about your history with Bakugo? How would I have known what class he was in? I didn't even know if he'd been accepted to UA. I left middle school before graduation. I purposefully tried to forget that life. I didn't follow him on effing Facebook. Eraser. The teacher sighed. I should have given you a class roster. Probably. But we're a little past that now, don't ya think? Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose. Izuku could see the gears turning in his head as he debated what to say. Izuku grabbed the desk chair and collapsed into it. What a weekend. He really needed to get a handle on his whirlwind emotions or this was not going to get any easier. It's I in the past. I shouldn't have caused a scene. F it. Just forget it. We're a little past forgetting, kid. Aizawa mimicked his words. It was years ago. Eraser. Less than 2. You cannot just show the whole dorm scars caused by another student and expect us to just let this go. There's no closure for something like this. It doesn't matter what you do to him, he clearly regrets it. I've never seen him cry like that, not since we were toddlers. He can say he's sorry until he's blue in the face, it won't change what happened. Ghost, he hurt you. He needs to face consequences for that. Izuku sighed deeply. Yeah, he'd like Katsuki to face some damn consequences. But would that really make him feel better? Not at all. On top of that, if Izuku burned Katsuki down for what he did, would that really make him any less villainous than his former classmates? He hurt me under the direction of every adult in our lives. If you take that out on him, you'll be no better than them. Would I like an apology? Sure. Will that change that my teachers made classmates use me for target practice? No. If he acts like that with his friends, how can I expect him to be a hero? If you treat him like a villain, then that's all he'll ever be. Trust me, I understand that better than anyone. I can't just let him off the hook, kid. That's not how this works. He used a quirk on you. Yeah, he did. So did 15 other students and several teachers. I was registered as quirkless. That's life for us. He was taught what he did was right. That doesn't negate his responsibility for his actions. Don't you think I know that? Izuku shoved the chair back as he stood up. I hate him. I want to hurt him. I could so easily just say his name and I could have done it 100 times in the last 10 years. Izuku took a shaky breath. But what good would that do? What good does it do anyone to punish him for what he was taught was acceptable? Abusers shouldn't be heroes. Izuku barked a shrill laugh. Is that so? Really? Why don't you go tell Endeavor that? Or maybe All Might? How about Native or even Death Arms? I could give you a laundry list of abusive heroes. At least Kaken seems to regret what he did. None of them ever said sorry for their actions. The Hero Commission just covered it all up. How do I know? Izuku cut Aizawa off. Well, I happened to meet Endeavor's long-lost dead son the other day. All Might personally left me on a effing roof the same day Kaken told me to end myself, which was just after I was attached by a villain and received no medical care. I could go on. The point is there is no real meaning to the word hero anymore. I can't speak for what the Hero Commission does, no matter how much I wish I could change it. But I can change how our next generation acts as heroes. Izuku paced the room with his hands on his head. Aizawa hadn't moved from his place by the door with his arms crossed tightly on his chest. The man's expression was hard, but Izuku could see there was actual concern in his eyes. Then do better. Be better than the teachers we've had in the past. Don't punish him, teach him, change him. Aizawa rolled his jaw, his teeth grinding in frustration. Izuku stared at him with an expectant look for a solid 5 minutes before the hero spoke. If I promise to be a better teacher than you've had before, would you stay? Izuku was still unsure why they all cared so much if he stayed or went back to being a vigilante. Obviously, they don't want another vigilante out there doing illegal heroics. But why did they care about Izuku so much? Was it just because he was still a teenager? Again, far too many questions and not enough time or energy for all of them. Yeah, sure, whatever. Just don't make me work with him on group projects. I think I can manage that. Can you be civil with him? You mean can I be in the same room with him and not say his name with the intent to end him? Yes, yeah, I can be civil. Aizawa nodded. But he is going to apologize to you, and he's going to be put in some kind of anger management or something. I'll figure it out. Okay, try to relax for the day, kid. The tired hero left. Izuku spotted one of Ectoplasm's clones outside the door as he left. So, he was still being guarded. Well, he didn't expect them to just trust him after they watched him detach and reattach his head ... and the whole ... dead body thing. Yeah, he shouldn't expect them to trust him one bit. Izuku stripped his vigilante gear and tossed it in the laundry hamper. He'd wash it later. He grabbed a pair of workout shorts and an old t-shirt and flopped on the bed. What a mess he got himself into. His whole routine would have to change ... shit. He'd have to swap off nocturnal living if he was supposed to go to school, or was he supposed to go to school now? Izuku groaned as he tucked an arm over his face. He was exhausted, but if he went to sleep now, he wouldn't function tomorrow, when he'd really need to. So, he'd have to force himself to stay awake all damn day, so he could sleep tonight. That meant he couldn't lay around in bed all damn day. Ugh, Izuku's stomach was growling in protest. When did he last eat? Probably before the mission, which meant like 12 hours ago. He should get food, but that would require him to first ask Ectoplasm if he could raid the kitchen, and secondly, actually raid the kitchen. There were far too many people in this building, and although Izuku knew no one was staring at him right now, he still felt watched. Okay, there was a high probability Nenzu was somehow watching him, but outside of the freaky chimera, he knew he wasn't being watched. His quirk didn't seem to care about the logistics of it. He was getting a damn headache all over again. In the end, exhaustion won out. Izuku set an alarm on his phone and took a 45-minute nap. Once he was up, he felt slightly more energized. Except when he woke up, he wasn't alone. The feel of eyes on his right shoulder made his head snap around. Katsuki was standing on his balcony with the door open, body stiff and his arms crossed so tight Izuku worried he might damage his uniform shirt. We need to talk. Izuku hoisted himself to his feet so he could open his laptop on the desk across the room. He mostly ignored Katsuki while logging into the Wi-Fi and checking a few important things like his email and the police bans. Yeah, guess we do, he finally replied. Katsuki didn't move. Izuku stayed hovering over his desk. Eventually, he ran out of sit to check and closed his laptop. He walked over to the blonde and leaned on the balcony doors beside him. Neither of them looked at each other. They shared the small space in silence for a few minutes, staring out across campus. Izuku hadn't seen Katsuki in almost 2 years, since he ran away before the end of middle school. Everyone probably believed he was dead. And then his mother got him pronounced dead 8 months ago, so maybe he was, in a way. Izuku was curious if Katsuki believed he'd actually taken that jump all this time. He did. It just didn't work out the way Izuku had planned. I'm sorry, Katsuki whispered. The afternoon sun was bright in their eyes, and even with the lazy breeze coming across their faces, Izuku still felt blindsided by the sudden apology. Aizawa had sworn he'd make Katsuki do it, but Izuku didn't think he'd had time to talk to the blonde yet. Judging by his entry on the balcony, it was more likely he was avoiding in order to stay away from Izuku for the time being. So maybe Aizawa hadn't talked to him yet. I don't forgive you, Izuku sighed. I don't think I know how. I know. Katsuki shifted awkwardly, changing which foot his weight rested on. I don't expect you to, ever, but you still deserve to hear it. Only if you mean it, Kaken. I do. No hesitation. Good. Have you changed? Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to. You know how my quirk is. Izuku nodded. Even if he changed his whole personality, his explosion quirk would always give him a short fuse and biting tongue. Izuku finally lifted his head to face Katsuki. Their eyes met and Izuku found some strange form of tenderness within them. Izuku knew, deep in his soul, that he would hate Katsuki for the rest of his life. He knew that, and yet there was some strange intimacy in knowing that they were both bound by blood and scars. Even if Izuku spent the rest of his life imagining the way Katsuki's name would feel in his mouth with the intent to end. Even if he imagined the light fading from those ruby irises 100 times. There was a comfort in knowing he had that power over one of the people who hurt him most in the world. judging from the distant look filling his eyes. Izuku was fairly sure Katsuki knew it, too. "You really jumped." Izuku nodded. "I got attacked by that sludge villain. All Might intervened. Long story short, I got dropped on a roof and told my dreams weren't realistic. That was the same day you ... you know. All Might told you he ... what a effing a hole." "Yeah," Izuku shrugged. "Anyway, it didn't work. 6 hours on the concrete while my body stitched itself back together and I'm still kicking. I'm glad. I know that doesn't change anything between us ... but I am glad you're alive." Ghost. Izuku sighed. "I did die, in a way. But I think we all do that a few times in our lives." "You did too, didn't you?" Katsuki grunted his agreement. "Yeah, in a way, they had both died and become new people." What an odd realization for two 16-year-olds to have. Izuku shifted his shoulder against the door, watching a few students meander across campus. The weather was nice. Izuku actually missed being out during the day. He was a creature of the night now, but the sun still felt warm and comforting on his skin for the first time in ages. Katsuki interrupted the silence again. "So, you're not quirkless?" Izuku shook his head. "No, my quirk. It makes me sort of immortal." "Sort of? Like I said, I spent a nasty 6 hours on the pavement when I jumped. I still get hurt, it just heals me. Though, at night." Izuku clicked his tongue. "It's like I'm a phantom, a ghost." Katsuki mumbled. My vigilante name is Dullahan. That's basically what I am." "What, some creepypasta death freak?" Izuku chuckled. "Yeah, I guess so. It's a fey myth. They're one of the heralders of death. The headless horseman. My quirk is pretty spot on." "Hold up." Katsuki pushed off the balcony door. "You're saying you can, what, detach your head or some shit?" "Well, yeah, that's one thing I can do. I can also bypass any lock or door. It's why I'm here. They can't throw me juvie, I'd just walk out the front door. I can also call a person's true name and end them instantly." "You." The blonde froze. His eyes widened in realization. The truth was, Izuku hadn't always called his best friend Kaken. He started calling him that after their quirks manifested. After Hibiki's death, when Izuku started acting weird, and the bullying began when they all thought he'd never manifest a quirk. "You've never ... you always had these dumbass nicknames for everyone, that's why. I was scared I would end someone else." "Someone else?" Hibiki-kun. That wasn't your fault. But it was. That's the day my quirk manifested. The next morning I woke up with my head on the ground and my body floundering around like a dead fish. By the time Mom found me, I'd fixed it, and she didn't believe me. No one did. I ended Hibiki. Katsuki was silent, his eyes fixed on the ground with burning intensity. Izuku sighed. "I could have ended you 100 times. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have done that to a lot of people." Izuku rubbed a hand over his face, feeling another wave of exhaustion come over him. "But I was never the villain, was I, Kaken?" "No." Katsuki didn't hesitate. "I was." 2 days later, Izuku rubbed a hand over the side of his face, exhausted. The change in sleep schedule was still hitting him hard, but at least he was better off than his first weekend. It was now Tuesday evening. Class 2A, for the most part, were all relaxing in the common room while eating dinner. Apparently Tuesdays were taco nights. Everyone helped out. And when they finished, they all sat down around the couches and put movies on low volume while chatting about a variety of subjects. Izuku was still learning everyone's names, and he didn't really intend to learn them all, just as a precaution. Actually, he was taking more to Katsuki's nicknames than any of the class appeared to enjoy. Currently, they were having a debate about the villains that infiltrated their school the year before, twice. This was before Izuku had even heard of the League of Villains, and they didn't become a household name in the underground until earlier this year. They were mostly defunct now that Izuku had ended their leader, but none of the students knew that. Eraserhead had given him a report about their movements, and the underground had shifted a lot in only a couple days, which was scary. Izuku knew he'd face consequences for what he did, but he was currently trying not to think about it. "Oh, come on, you can't tell me Dabai isn't evil." Momo and Ida were having a debate about the League's intentions and ideologies. Leave it to the smartest cookies to bring moral ideologies into the conversation. Izuku rolled his eyes. "I don't believe any villain is truly evil, except maybe Shigaraki. They're still just human." Izuku actually agreed with Ida on that one. Shigaraki was something else. Or well, he had been. Evil seemed like a good word for what Izuku felt slithering its way out of Shigaraki's aura. "But Dabai did try and burn us all to death at summer camp, and he kidnapped Bakugo," Achako pointed out. "Wait, what?" Izuku perked up, looking at the spiky blonde next to him who was sporting an annoyed scowl. "You had to bring that up, pink cheeks." "It's fine, Ghost. The League just roughed me up a bit, nothing I didn't deserve." "Oh, we're gonna talk about that in a minute, Kaken." But first he leaned over the back of the couch towards Achako. He was sitting on one of the counter stools next to Katsuki behind the couches. "What really makes you think Dabai is evil, though?" "Just his willingness to end. Anyone can do that. You don't have to be evil." Good people can end, too, for very good reasons. Heroes don't end, Tailman insisted, said Tail flicking angrily by his side. Izuku rolled his eyes. Right, that's why Endeavor has an off-the-charts capture-to-end ratio. The worst in the country. Worst in this country's history. Actually, he ends at least 7 villains for every one he captures. Every eye in the room was suddenly looking at one student. Said student, who Izuku didn't yet have a name for, had half red, half white hair. He was sitting on the floor beside the coffee tables, munching a bowl of mixed taco salad calmly. He looked up when he noticed all the eyes on him. What? The teen asked. Did you know, Ribbit? Sue asked. Know what? That my father was a murderer. Sure, he ended my older brother. Izuku's brain stopped working. Like he actually felt the gears grind to a halt. He was pretty sure several other students had the exact same experience, but not for the same reason. How stupid could Izuku be? Of course that was the youngest Todoroki. That bright teal eye, the fire quirk. Izuku had been tripped up by the white side. But that could easily be from his mother, couldn't it? Izuku didn't know their whole story, but he was damn sure it wasn't pretty. You're his brother. The words came out before he could stop them. Izuku slapped his hands over his mouth. Suddenly, all eyes were on him. Whose brother? Todoroki asked. Nope, he was not going to have that conversation. That was most certainly not his place. Absolutely effing not. But Katsuki put his damn combat boot into it, like he did everything else. The blonde was too smart for his own good. What the foo ... Oh my god. Katsuki glared at him. No, he leaned back. Nuo, how did you? He told me. Izuku shrugged. It was part of the deal that landed me here, his true name. Whose name? Ida asked. What's going on? Who are you talking about? Nina asked, ever the gossip, but not in a bad way. Todoroki set his taco bowl down and looked up to Izuku. Actually, quite a few students did. Izuku felt far too observed once again. The last couple days he could get by with knowing other teens weren't actually staring at him, but right now, it felt like 18 pairs of eyes were boring into his soul. Tell them, Katsuki nudged his shoulder. Well now you gotta spill, ghost. Kirishima was on the edge of the couch, literally. Come on, Ochako insisted. You can't just leave us hanging like that. Izuku rolled his eyes. How could they not put it together? It was so simple in Izuku's mind. The same eyes, the same quirk, the rage and power. Dabai and Endeavor were more alike than most people realized. And probably more than the two of them realized either. Despite the annoying stares from his little heroing classmates, Izuku stood firm for a few more minutes, at least, until Todoroki gave him this curious look. Izuku sighed. Fine. He shifted a little in his chair. It's pretty simple, really. I can't ... say his name. Here he gave Katsuki a look. The blonde twitched a little. But I mean ... put the pieces together. Fire quirk, uncontrolled rage and anger. I mean ... the biggest clue was the eyes. Color, sure, but the hate behind them is ... all too real. The room was silent for a while. Everyone seemed to be piecing the madness together and trying to make sense of what Izuku had just said. He wasn't sure they would all quite catch it the first time around. But Todoroki did, surprisingly. But his reaction wasn't what Izuku expected. By a long shot, the dual-toned teen started laughing. He couldn't control it, so he put his taco bowl down and clutched his stomach. The laughter was weird, like he didn't laugh much at all, or even know how. Judging from the concerned looks around the room, Izuku assumed that was true. Great, you went and broke icy hot. Good job. Katsuki playfully jabbed his ribs harmlessly. Izuku rolled his eyes again. He's not broken. He's laughing. Why are you laughing? That's laughter, Zero asked, looking terribly confused. I think so. Momo leaned down and tapped Todoroki on the shoulder. Are you okay, Todoroki? Why yeah, he snickered. It's just, he's alive. Again, he fell into a giggle fit before controlling it enough to speak after a few moments. Taoya's alive, and he's a villain. It's too funny. It's so great. Endeavor is going to lose his sit. Then he couldn't speak anymore. He fell over and burst into laughter. Izuku couldn't stop himself. He started laughing, too. Todoroki was right. Endeavor was going to lose his ever-loving sit when he found out his eldest son was a villain. Izuku hadn't even thought about that before. Oh god, the look on his face would be priceless. He'd so need a picture of that, for a variety of reasons. The first being to sell to Jurin or a number of other villains, including Dabai. What's all the ruckus about? Eraserhead walked in the room while rubbing the side of his head and drinking from a travel mug, likely coffee. At this hour, it was like 7 in the evening. The rest of the class were in varying states of understanding. A few of them got the joke, the truth. They understood, and were trying hard to stifle their laughter. This was mainly Katsuki, Tsu, and Zero. The rest were showing a range of confusion and concern. Izuku waved a hand in front of his face and shook his head to the hero who walked in. Dabai is Icy Hot's older brother. The class didn't know, apparently. I may have just revealed state secrets. At least it wasn't All Might's secrets. What secrets? Eraserhead narrowed his eyes. Nothing. Let's circle back to how Dabai is a Todoroki. Oh, we're going to talk about state secrets later. Now how exactly do you know Dabai is Endeavor's son? Oh, simple. He told me so. He told you. Eraserhead deadpanned. When Shigaraki was asking my price for stealing the Tua class schedule, a few students gasped. They knew he was a vigilante now, but they didn't know how he had gotten here, or why he was staying in their dorm. Not yet anyway. Part of my price was Dabai's true name. I thought you didn't want names. Eraserhead was questioning his morals. He could feel it. Oh please, Eraser, we both know I needed insurance and collateral. This was a damn end mission, and I failed. Besides, now Icy Hot can blackmail his bastard of a father. Todoroki himself snorted so loud he had to cover his mouth. I can, he whispered. Holy shit, I could. A wide grin appeared on his face as he went back to his meal. Heroes don't blackmail their parents, Eraserhead grumbled. But I'm not against that plan. Sensei, Ida cried. Heroes don't use blackmail. Have you met Endeavor? Their teacher whined, like he actually sounded like a frustrated teenager for 2 seconds. Izuku tried not to laugh. He's intolerable on his best days. And try using his name as a colleague and he throws a fit like a child. I'm not Enji, I'm Endeavor. Like you're actually a beach. I was just trying to be polite. Ugh, Izuku was going to fall apart. This was too great. Maybe being stuck with 19 other teenagers wouldn't be so bad if their teacher was not actually an uptight hole. He never thought Eraserhead was, but he came off as an uptight hole when they first met. Now Izuku could see that was just part of his dark, mysterious hero persona when he was on duty. That's highly inappropriate, Sensei. Momo cleared her throat. But I must say it's quite true. Momo, Ida gaped at her. Izuku barked a laugh. What? I've met him a few times. You all know my parents are hero civil law lawyers. They'd made a lot of his mistakes disappear, and I never agreed with it. Oh, have they? Where do they live again? Izuku asked. Eraserhead grabbed his shoulder. Izuku looked up to find the man glaring with his quirk activated, hair floating. What? I wasn't gonna break in, steal their files on Endeavor and release them online or anything. The man didn't even blink. Okay, fine. That might have been my plan. Why do you have to ruin my fun, Eraser? It's my job. I'm a teacher, and your warden. Izuku groaned. Eraserhead reached out and ruffled his curls, much to Izuku's annoyance. All right, Hellspawn, I know you all have homework to do. Hop to it. Tomorrow is midweek, which means hero training, and you have a new student to test out. Izuku frowned. Oh, don't give me that, Ghost. I don't ruin all the fun, do I? Ugh, I'm not going easy on them, and I'm not fighting fair. That's not very hero-like. Ada mumbled. Well, then I guess it's a damn good thing I'm not a hero. He smirked. The class president looked conflicted as to what to do with that. The class knew he was a vigilante after his little episode with Katsuki, so they couldn't really argue him being a hero student. That had actually been an interesting night. After they spoke, they went down to make dinner since Izuku was starving. The class were incredibly silent and horrified at seeing the two of them speaking calmly and arguing over which way to make ramen. But eventually, the troublesome duo just came out and said they'd worked out their sit. The problems weren't solved, and Izuku would never forgive Katsuki for the things he did when they were kids. But they had decided to move on, past it. It didn't make them friends, but they were classmates. They had to work together, even if they were still trying to find a way to like each other again. But even if they knew he was a vigilante, they'd not yet seen him fight. They also hadn't seen his quirk, but he'd only been there 3 days. There was still time for them to find out the insanity that was his quirk. Actually, he had a pretty good idea about that. The evening wound down pretty fast after Eraserhead told them to get their homework done. Izuku didn't yet have homework since Nedzu was still crafting him a custom curriculum, but he did have other shit to worry about. Namely, what the hell was going on in the underground. So, by 10 o'clock, Izuku was waist deep in the deep web, trolling the worst forums looking for any sign of news of Shigarki's death or the consequences thereof for Izuku. So far, he hadn't found any news about the villain's death, which was surprising. But the League of Villains might be keeping the news close to the chest so they could pay Izuku back first. The police hadn't released any news on it yet, and they probably didn't intend to. Keeping it a secret meant the League didn't get any publicity, which was probably a good thing. Around 10:30. He was about to crash when his phone rang. Eraserhead had given him a new phone, since they'd confiscated his own as evidence, or whatever. Booed, they failed to find his work phone. Speak, Izuku grumbled, a bit tiredly. Where the hell have you been? Jurin. Izuku checked his phone. Yep, that was Jurin's number, saved in his phone, too. Why the hell was the Underground's biggest supplier? Informant calling him at 10:30 on a Wednesday night. Yes, headless freak, Jurin. Where the F are you? He looked around his UA dorm room and clicked his tongue. I decided to go back to school. Jurin's barking laughter filled the speaker. Whatever. I don't need to know what madness you're up to. Look, I've got a job for you. I'm a little busy, Jurin. Like ... can't really get away, kind of busy. We both know that's bullshit. So, here's the deal, this slimy bastard, Overhaul, he's a real piece of work, even for a villain. His quirk lets him literally overhaul a person. Like rip them apart from the inside out and reform them into. It's nasty. Anyway, Jurin ranted about the man's germophobia and OCD for a while. Izuku tuned back when he got to the point. So this effer has 2 kids he's using for experiments to make some effed up drugs and weapons. He, what? Izuku's voice slipped into a darker overtone. He could almost hear Jurin shiver on the other end of the receiver. Izuku's brain snapped into protective mode. His hand gripped the phone a little tighter. Some bastard was keeping kids and using his quirk to make weapons out of them. Absolutely effing not. Jurin knew Izuku's viewpoint on child abuse, views he had for very good reasons. The supplier had called him for a reason. He's got a little girl with a rewind quirk. It's like a remote. You just turn it on and rewind anything, anyone. The boy ... his quirk is ... a lot like yours. Like mine. How? You're not much for chit-chat, are ya, ghosty? Call me that again and you won't have a tongue to chit-chat with, beach. Fine. Be a grumpy little spook. Whatever. Look, the boy turns into a big old black wolf, but his quirk's got something to do with some old myth of a guardian. Izuku had done extensive research into English, Gaelic, and Scandinavian myths when he was starting to understand his own quirk. After all, he was basically a fae himself. He'd certainly read myths about guardian wolves before, but he'd need to see this boy's quirk first before making assumptions as to which myth it was based around. Text me the address. I've got time. I knew you weren't that busy. Oh, the girl's name is Eri, the boy is Kota. They're a package deal from what the guards say. Never separate unless that bastard is using his quirk on them. You know what I'm going to ask next, Jurin. That wasn't the supplier's real name. Izuku knew that. But he did want Overhaul's true name. He really wanted it. He'd never wanted another person's name quite as much as he wanted this name. Kai Chisaki. True. Izuku grinned. Oh, I'm sending along a friend. Back up. Izuku frowned. I work alone, Jurin, you know that. This one's going to be tough. Their place is built like a fortress. For once, trust me, please. Fine. Izuku sighed. Who? Nagant. Lady Nagant. She's in Tartarus. Are you sure about that? Izuku didn't even want to know what that was supposed to mean. There was no telling how Lady Nagant broke out. And judging from the non-existent chatter about it, he was going to assume no one yet knew she was even out. That meant it was likely the doing of someone very high up in the food chain. And Izuku did not want to know what kind of drama that would stir in the already messy pot. Whatever, he could use a good sharpshooter anyway. Izuku was a close-range fighter. Having someone covering his ass might be useful for once. What do I owe you for this lovely package deal? Nothing. This was repayment. Our books are clear, yeah. Jurin owed him for a few specialty weapons Izuku was able to liberate for Jurin's clientele. He'd owed Izuku for quite a while now. But this ... this seemed like an appropriate repayment. Agreed. I'll text you the address. Izuku hung up. He always hung up first. And he usually cut Jurin off, too. It was not only a habit, but part of his vigilante persona. A moment after he tossed his phone on the desk, it buzzed with a text message. Jurin was true to his word. Almost always. Izuku quickly changed into his vigilante gear. Black cargo pants with a nice black dress shirt and a dark green silk tie. It was a bit of a shock they let him keep it, but there really wasn't a reason to take the regular clothes. His combat boots were still shiny enough, so he strapped them on and grabbed his overcoat on the way out the door. He grabbed a simple black medical mask to cover the bottom half of his face and flipped the hood up on his coat as he walked out of his room with his phone in hand and whip strapped to his hip. They had taken his whip and knives, but Nedzu had snuck them into his dorm room yesterday with nothing but a little mouse smiley face on a piece of paper taped to a knife handle. Nedzu likely knew a day like this would come. There was no real way to keep Izuku inside the school unless he wanted to remain, so the least they could do was make sure he had defensive weapons ... or offensive weapons. Both were preferable. He did grab his school phone as well, just in case. 45 minutes later, Izuku was crouched on the outer wall of the Yakuza hideout. Effing Jurin. Not telling him Overhaul was the leader of the only remaining sect of Yakuza in the city. Izuku sighed to himself. Welp, here goes another end retrieval mission, right? What a damn shame. Still, Jurin knew Dullahan would never refuse a job that involved weird quirks and kids. If there was one thing Izuku was, it was predictable in terms of his morals, what he stood for. No one in the underground knew he was some abused quirkless child. But if they did, maybe they'd understand why he was up on this damn wall, waiting for his backup to arrive. He didn't have to wait long. The soft clack of boots announced Nagant's arrival. He didn't offer to help her get up the wall. She was perfectly capable of that herself. She actually did a flip off a nearby tree and landed beside his crouched form, bright white boots shining in the moonlight to his left. Dullahan, Nagant. Oh, what a lovely night for a break-in. The woman plopped herself down on the wall, crossed her legs, and started twisting her dual-colored hair into bullets. Izuku had read her file on one of his excursions in the Commission's database. Don't ask how he managed to get access to that. It was not something he was going to repeat. Using his quirk to bypass electronic and digital locks was mind-bogglingly stupid and incredibly painful. Never again. Lady Nagant was basically Hawks, but from a slightly older generation. She was groomed, trained, and made into a popular pro-hero by the Hero Commission. But the first time she questioned their orders, she was punished, stripped of her title, and thrown into Tartarus prison for a crime she didn't commit. How'd you get out, anyway? Thought they threw that key away years ago. Izuku grumbled. He wasn't unhappy to have her here, quite the opposite, actually. But he was suspicious. That's a long story. The short version would be that I did Stain a favor when we were teenagers. We grew up together. Anyway, it took him a long-ass time to find the right quirk. Well, he found someone who can duplicate bodies, and the duplicate won't die or return to goop unless it's fatally wounded. So, you have a double in prison for you. Isn't that twice his quirk? He's with the League, right? Yeah, took a handsome penny to get me out, but Stain owed me big time. So, here we are. Juran said there's some kids being abused in here, and he wants the research. Izuku chuckled. Why am I not surprised? I'm sure he figured I'd burn it all down. Bingo, kid. Izuku rolled his eyes and stood up. He flicked his overcoat out behind himself and unstrapped his whip and hunting knife, one in each hand. So what's with this whole dark and moody aesthetic? I'm not hip on the new vigilante style these days. You supposed to be some old world mysterious spook or something. Headless horseman. She blinked. Izuku grinned behind his mask. Stay on my ass. I hope your aim's still good. I'd prefer not to get shot tonight. Insult my aim again and you might just get a bullet in the ass anyway. That would prove me right, though. Nagant laughed. Her arm snapped backwards as she loaded a bullet made of twisted hair into the chamber and cocked the rifle to ready it for firing. Just as Izuku was about to jump down into the backyard, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Oh, great, that was his school phone. The screen lit up their faces and Nagant even leaned over to check who it was. Oh, sit, Eraserhead's calling. I was rooting for him when he was at UA. I hear he's the best underground hero. You better get that. Izuku declined the call. Did you just Did you just send Eraserhead to voicemail? Yep. You can't ghost Eraserhead. Hey, kid, wait. Izuku jumped off the wall, landing silently in the darkened garden. Nagant landed beside him. Izuku was not in the mood to speak with Eraserhead. Plus, he was sort of busy right now. There was the consideration that his phone likely had a tracker in it, but he wasn't particularly worried about that right now. He had a job to do. They both turned and nodded to each other once. Izuku went to the right and Nagant to the left so they could come at the back door from opposite angles. Just as they approached the dimly lit porch, a guard walked out with a lit cigarette already in hand. He was entirely unaware of their presence. Nagant signaled to him from across the patio. I'll distract. Knock him out. It wasn't sign language. It was a form of combat language that heroes used. Izuku was glad he thought to learn it young, when he'd wanted to be a hero. He nodded, agreeing with her plan. Hey bozo. She stopped into the light and pointed her gun at the guy's face. What the? Izuku wrapped his whip around the man's neck and tugged, yanking him off his feet and backwards until he was in the crook of Izuku's elbow and suffocated. It took all of 10 seconds and the guy was out cold, but still breathing. Izuku drug him backwards into the bushes. He'd be out for a while. He should have stopped to grab some zip ties, but there weren't any hardware stores open this late anyway. Juran gave me the rundown on the Shy Hasekai. That's what they're calling themselves now. This one is Yu Hojo. His quirk is Crystallize. Good. I was not keen to go in blind, but I often do. Izuku walked over to the back door and waved his hand to the lock. He didn't need to wave his hand, but it often misled people, so he did it out of habit. The lock clicked and he opened the door. The hell is your quirk? Nagant asked, following him into the low light of the hallway. They were whispering, barely audible over the buzz and hum of fluorescent lighting in the ceiling. Dullahan, that's your name, not your. She pivoted on her heel, her gun immediately in the face of a weirdly short guy with a damn bag over his head. The bagged head tilted, large eyes blinked, but he didn't move. All three parties stared each other down for 5 seconds. When the bag-headed guy's hand moved, Nagant's arm clicked and another rifle tip appeared. She fired. The bullet went right through the center of the guy's head. He collapsed with a soft thud, dead. So, she had a suppressor on her rifle, interesting. The crack of the bullet had been no louder than someone popping their lips. Well, I was going to try and be light on ending tonight. I really don't need another felony on my list. Izuku muttered. Let me do the ending. She smirked. Besides, I'm the felon, right? Well, your file was bullshit. If that's to be believed, you were never a felon. I commend your commitment to the role the commission assigned you, though. The woman snorted. She quickly twisted and loaded another bullet, then motioned for him to lead on. Good, she knew her role. She would cover his ass and he would get them to their goal. Izuku peeked in a nearby room and grabbed the bag-headed guy before he could bleed all over the floor and shoved him into the closet he found. Then, he moved a rug over the stains and called that good for now. Basement level. We need the labs. It shouldn't be heavily guarded at this time of night, but we may encounter more shy Hisekai. Those two are in the 8 bullets, his most powerful enforcers. I'd very much like to find Overhaul. We don't have time for that, Nagant insisted. Oh, I only need enough time to say his name. Izuku pushed onward with Nagant right on his heels. This time, she chose not to ask questions about his quirk or why he said such weird things. It was probably for the best anyway. She'd only be left with more questions. They took a detour down a hallway when some random thugs passed by, probably on night watch. They were low level, not worth the time it would take to dispose of them, and since there are 3, it would also be harder to control them, meaning they'd risk the element of surprise. Nagant motioned to a section of wall with a cutout in a little flower pot. She whispered, "That's it." "What's it?" "That's the door." Izuku shrugged. They waited for the thugs to pass down the hall and approach the door. Sure enough, when Izuku stood before it, the door unlocked and the wall opened inward. Well, wasn't that interesting? A secret door. Izuku would have been looking for a big vault door in a hideout like this, but perhaps this kind of door was better camouflage. Regardless, they shut the door behind themselves and scurried quietly down the stairs to the basement with no further resistance. The basement was, quite literally, a lab environment. A dozen or so study rooms with varying tools and equipment. He could tell one room was most certainly a genetics lab, or at least served as a discount one. The basement was one big T-shape. The labs were along the long hallway they came down, with a cross-section at the end. The left was what appeared to be some kind of testing chamber for weapons. He'd seen some of that equipment in forensic shows when they shot bullets into various synthetics for testing. To the right were locked cells. The largest, at the end, had a large window in the wall. Inside, he found 2 children. Neither could have been older than 10. And that was pushing it. A young girl with white hair, red eyes, and a little horn on her forehead, sat laughing and smiling on one of 2 beds in the room. The boy had brown hair and a fake scowl, dramatized as he marched across the room like a dinosaur. They approached the room slowly, but given there was no reaction from their arrival at the window, Izuku assumed this was a 2-way mirror. He found some strange familiarity in that boy. It was like seeing a long-lost cousin at a family reunion after years apart. You knew they were your family, but you couldn't remember their name. For the second time, his school phone buzzed in his pocket. Actually, when he took it out, he realized he had several missed calls from Eraserhead. "Oh, he's gonna end you." Izuku rolled his eyes and answered the call. "Ghost, you better hope to every god that might exist I don't activate the tracker on your phone. That's probably not a good idea right now, Eraser." "You," answered MHM. The 2 kids in the cell were now playing with a board game on the bed, and they looked wide awake, which was weird for how late it was. Sadly, Izuku figured that was because they were trapped underground. Their bodies didn't have a proper circadian rhythm anymore. That was not good for children so young. "Where the hell are you? Don't you dare say you're out there trying to capture villains. I swear to every god, I will drag your ass back to this school. I am most certainly not out capturing villains." That was not a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Oh well, he did his best. "We really shouldn't be standing here like sitting ducks, kid." "Who was that?" "No one, Eraser. I'm busy. I need to go. I'll be back to school soon. Oh, and I'm bringing a couple new students. Tell Nedzu I'm pulling the one condition he owes me." Goes click. Nagant had to stifle her laughter in her hand. "Jurin said you always do that." "It's so rude." "Maybe, but it's effective. Come on." Izuku approached the door. He could feel the lock trying to fight him, which was a new experience. So, it must be treated with some kind of quirk-resistant material, or made of quirk-resistant metal. Those were new materials, and primarily used in super expensive buildings and hero schools for safe training. Still, nothing could resist the call of the Dullahan, and eventually, the lock clicked and Izuku opened the door without much effort. Nagant stood in the doorway with her foot out to make sure the door didn't close and her gun arm pointed down the hall. Both children looked up with fear in their eyes. The reaction was almost instant. The young boy jumped across the room, and mid-jump, his body twisted and transformed into a large black wolf with glowing red eyes that appeared out of a misty black smoke. Izuku crouched down, bowing his head. "Hello, little Grim," he greeted. In an effort to show he meant no harm, or perhaps that he was like them, Izuku put a hand on both sides of his head and with a familiar crack, he pulled his head from his neck and held it under his arm while watching the 2 children. The girl was cowering behind the bed while the boy, Wolf, was in a defensive stance, growling at the strangers. Those big red eyes softened when he realized what Izuku was, though. He might not have ever been told about the Dullahan, but beasts of death knew each other, or perhaps he had assumed they did. After all, Izuku had recognized the child from a distance, even if they'd never met before. The wolf tilted its head and plopped down on its butt with a soft ow, as if asking who Izuku was. Izuku took that as his permission to replace his head. So he did. Thankfully, Nagant didn't turn around until he'd managed to crack his neck back into place. We don't have all night, kid. I'm aware of that. Calm down. He looked back to the wolf and offered out his hand. I am Dullahan. We are quite alike. You and I, we are both heralders of death and guardians of the afterlife. Do you know your name? The wolf cheffed. Izuku took that as a no. You are a church grim. What a beautiful coat you have. The wolf sniffed his outstretched hand and eventually nuzzled his head under it. Good. He stood up and looked across the room. Eri was hiding behind the bed, with only the top of her head and her eyes peeking over it. The moment Izuku looked over to her, the wolf jumped across the room and curled up around her protectively. It's all right. We're here to rescue you. We're going to take you far away from the bad man who hurt you. He was trying so hard not to let his usual sass and vulgarity come through when talking to a couple of scared kids. That wouldn't help at all. The girl whimpered. The wolf nuzzled his snout under her arm. A moment later, he began shrinking, his form returning to the young boy he was moments ago, with his arms wrapped around the girl. It's okay, Eri. He's like me. He's safe. Safe? She asked, the tension in her shoulders releasing a little. We need to leave, Izuku insisted, still holding out his hands. We're going somewhere safe, away from this awful place. But you need to come now, before the guards come back. But, Eri, please. The boy picked her up. Or well, he tried to. He was only slightly bigger than her, like a year or two older. I'll keep you safe. Get on my back, like when we play, okay? She took an agonizingly long moment to think about it, but finally, she nodded. Izuku sighed in relief. Once more, the boy jumped over the bed, transforming into a wolf, but he wasn't simply a wolf. Izuku finally noticed it now that he was closer. His tail wisped behind him, as if it faded into black smoke, rippling and foggy. It was beautiful, almost dizzying to watch. His eyes were bright red. They glowed like Eraserhead's quirk, but it felt more like hellfire than power. The wolf knelt down, front paws on the ground, and Eri climbed onto his back. The dog huffed. Let's go, he ordered Nagant. The woman rushed back into the hallway with Izuku right behind her, and Eri atop her wolf by his side. Izuku wished he had a way to leash the wolf, if only so he could keep them close. He could use his whip, but that would likely only upset the kids. He just didn't want to lose them. Izuku was certain there was no way they were getting out of this mess without running into trouble. But Izuku was not leaving here without. As they approached the stairs, someone was taking each step one by one, slowly. White sneakers approached them, followed by a man wearing a dark green jacket with purple feathered trim and, of all things, a plague doctor mask. What the F? He stopped just behind Nagant. Oh, sit. He quickly placed his hands over Eri's ears. The girl winced a little but didn't pull away. Who the sit is that? He growled at Nagant. That's Overhaul. The moment he appeared in the light of the hallway, Eri buried her whole body into the back of her wolf. Kota took an angry stance, growling at the man approaching them with all his teeth bared. Well, what's this? I spy two big rats, dirtying up my clean stock. What a mess. Overhaul sighed, and slowly peeled off the glove on his right hand. Izuku immediately realized it was another 5-point activation quirk. There was zero way he was allowing that hand to touch any of them tonight, especially not after taking Shigaraki's decay to the arm. The man tutted his tongue, like an upset English teacher. Izuku's left eye twitched. This man reminded him far too much of one of his teachers back in middle school. The cruelties of them all, really. Tachiro-sensei liked smacking a ruler on Izuku's knuckles when he was too loud. He'd go so far as to make them bleed. Too loud consisted of writing, breathing, thinking, and existing. Do the rats have anything to say before I clean up the mess they've left in my immaculate house? Nagant's arm raised, pointed directly at Overhaul's head. Don't move. I have no issue putting a bullet through your head. Overhaul had the gall to walk right to the tip of her gun, inches from touching his forehead to the barrel. Izuku assumed that wouldn't actually happen, if only because the man was far too horrified at the idea of germs to touch another person without his quirk active. Why? Izuku asked. Everyone looked at him. His tone was empty, void of emotion, but he was slowly slipping into that multi-tone call he reserved only for those he called to death. Why did you kidnap these children and keep them? This Grim is my kin. And the kid was orphaned. Parents were ended by some psycho villain. No one cared if a little wolf wandered off and never came home. Cry me a river. Are you his uncle or something? No. Izuku brushed a hand over Eri's head to soothe her before stepping around Nagant. I am Dullahan. Ah, the faceless vigilante with morals. I should have known. I heard you were dead. Lost your head when the heroes tried to capture you. You know someone tried to pay me to capture you. Overhaul your mouth shut. I would love to know what's so dangerous about your voice. It's not my voice you should worry about. Izuku motioned for Nagant to stand back. She took only 2 steps back and guarded the kids while standing sideways to watch both ends of the hallway, just in case. It's the intent behind the words. You're just a kid. What intent could you possibly have? Overhaul laughed openly for a moment. Then, he peeled the other glove off his hand and tossed them aside. Whatever, I don't care. I'll do what the underground wants and collect the reward. When the hand grabbed for Izuku, the teen slipped away by crouching under his arm and spinning to the side. Overhaul groaned in frustration as he grabbed the wall to rebalance himself. Tell me why you did this, and I won't hurt you. Hurt me, Overhaul snorted. As if you're just a stupid teenager. As if you're any danger to me. Izuku sighed as he dodged another grab attempt. Izuku was tired of this. Overhaul was never going to explain himself. Not to Izuku at least. So, there was no real reason to continue this conversation or this fight. Stop moving, Overhaul growled. You stupid brat. Izuku stopped moving, but not because of the order. The villain stumbled to the side, caught himself, then charged at Izuku. Kai Chisaki. One single heartbeat, then nothing. The light faded from his eyes. His body crumpled to the ground, sliding to a stop at Izuku's feet from its running momentum. Izuku sighed. What a waste of life. That quirk was so powerful, it could have been used for great things. And yet, he was using it to hurt people. What the hell did you just do? Oh, right, he wasn't alone. Izuku shrugged to Nagant. It doesn't matter. Let's go. Oh no, absolutely not. We're not just waltzing out of here after you just said his damn name. And he died and not address this. Yes, we absolutely are. So either move, or I will make you move. Don't forget, I read your file. I know your name, too. The shiver that ran down the woman's spine was visible. She looked between him and the wolf, unsure what to do with them now that she was realizing they were more alike than they seemed. Izuku smiled behind his mask. Get the damn research. We're leaving. Izuku's molten tone left no room for argument. Nagant moved. She bolted into the labs and quickly began downloading the files on the computers while flicking her eyes back to Izuku every so often. Their incursion had been silent thus far. No alarms, no running guards. So Izuku took the time to kneel beside the wolf and check on Eri. The girl was still cowering in the scruff of her companion's furry neck. Izuku brushed a hand through her hair. In that moment, he realized Eri wasn't her real name, or perhaps not her whole name. Kota's wasn't full either, but he could tell Kota was true, so maybe he would continue to call the wolf Grim instead. It's okay, you're safe now. He can never hurt you again. You're sure? Eri asked. Kota turned his head to nuzzle into Eri's face and the girl giggled. Yes, Eri, I'm sure. I made sure he can't hurt you ever again. Kota turned his head back to the body of Overhaul on the ground. His ears perked up like he caught sight of something. Izuku checked the hallway. There was nothing there, no one coming. He didn't feel any eyes on him. Kota sniffed, his head tilted up. Then, his muzzle opened and he let out a low growling howl. It was quiet enough that Izuku wasn't worried about someone hearing them from upstairs. But Izuku wondered what Kota saw that he couldn't. Maybe he'd ask later. Nagant scurried back out of the labs, her gun pointed at the stairs. I got it, let's go. The trip back out of the hideout was relatively uneventful. They had to knock out a couple thugs, and even one of the 8 bullets, but silence and surprise was their advantage and they didn't get into a real fight. Izuku was not going to count their blessings until they were back at UA, and he was adding one more name to the list of people he was likely going to face consequences for ending. But that was a concern for tomorrow Izuku. Tonight Izuku was worried about getting these 2 children back to UA, to safety. This is where we part ways, kid. Nagant dropped down off the wall and waved the little flash drive beside her face. I got what I came for. And so did you. With Overhaul dead, the Yakuza is defunct in Japan. Jiren will be happy about that. Though, don't expect to rest easy if the what's left of the Shy Hisekai find out it was your quirk that ended their leader. I'll add him to the list. Izuku grumbled. Oh, I'd love to know how long that list is. You really should stop burning bridges, kid. You're still standing on M. She flicked his forehead and skipped off into the darkness. She was gone in a couple blinks and Izuku turned back to the 2 children who were looking at him with wonder and fear. As to burning bridges, Izuku didn't truly believe he could die by fire, not anymore at least. Burning a few bridges with himself atop the flames didn't sound that bad, or scary, really. But he had other problems to worry about right now. Come, he pointed towards his side. Kota was quick to pick up his walking pace and match it so they were shoulder to knee on the walk back to UA. I'm likely going to be in trouble for this rescue, but I don't really care. No child deserves to be tortured. Or you? Eri asked. Tortured? Izuku nodded. Similarly, but not exactly the same. For me, it was my friends who turned on me, my own family. But like you, the reason was for something I could not control. Chisaki-sama said we were cursed. Izuku stopped. Kota skid to a stop beside him. Don't you dare ever think that way. Whatever he told you was a lie. You are not cursed. Quirks are tools, and we as humans have to choose how to use those tools, for good or evil. Overhaul used his to harm you, he was the cursed one. There were so many expletives Izuku wanted to scream at the sky, but he knew neither of these kids would understand his rage. He lied. But he's gone now, you won't ever be hurt again. Promise? Eri asked. Kota whined, agreeing. Izuku nodded again. I promise. When Izuku arrived back at the school gates, Eri put her arms up. Izuku picked her up and settled her on his hip. They'd had a quiet conversation on their walk back. The walk took them a lot longer than when Izuku was running across the roofs. Almost 2 hours. They were all exhausted. Along the way, he found out that Eri is 7 and Kota is 9. Kota had become Eri's guardian. He'd picked her. Izuku figured that meant as a guardian church grim. He was likely saying that Eri was his chosen church to guard. Not all church grims guarded churches, after all. Some guarded people or other buildings, or even grave sites. So that was settled. These two were a package deal. There was no pulling them apart. If someone tried, Kota's grim instincts would likely go into hyperdrive. He'd quite easily burn the world down to get his person back. Izuku understood, in a way. If there was someone whose name screamed in his soul so loudly he had to call it, there would be nothing on this earth that could stop him from claiming that soul for death. Kota shook himself off like a wet dog, despite being dry. His body flipped sideways, warped, and the child once more appeared from the black smoke of his wolf body that vanished into the mist. What a curious transformation. Dullahan, you can call me Ghost. Little Grim, can you call me Kota, then? Names of power. I don't want to accidentally hurt you. Would you prefer a different nickname? Kota shook his head. Grim is fine. Is that what I am? The myth of the church Grim is quite old. Big black wolves or dogs with bright red eyes. They guard churches, or grave sites, or even people. Yes, you are a church Grim, but you can call yourself whatever you want. Chisaki-sama called him a werewolf. Eri was curled under Izuku's chin, speaking quietly. I see why, but no, that's not quite right. You are like me, Little Grim. Ghost, Eri asked. Izuku looked down. What about my name? You tell me, dear. My quirk tells me when a name is true. Yours is not. You don't identify as Eri. It's what Chisaki-sama called me, but it never fit right. I like it, though. Then keep it. It's okay if you like a name, even if you don't like the person who gave it to you. Maybe someday she would identify as Eri. For now, Izuku decided he'd find her a nickname, too, just in case. Eri smiled and hugged him tightly. She was getting tired. It was almost morning. Izuku needed to get inside before sunrise, if only to be cautious. The gate opened, but Izuku didn't open it. There, standing behind the gate, was a very aggravated-looking Eraserhead, with Nezu sitting atop his left shoulder. The little chimera was wearing the brightest smile. Kota hid behind his legs with one hand on the bottom of Eri's shift. They were both wearing hospital scrubs, but Eri's were in the form of a long hospital gown where Kota's was a top and pants. It's okay, that's Eraserhead and Nezu. They're heroes. What's a? Eri yawned. Hero. The look on Eraserhead's face softened the instant he saw the two children clinging to Izuku's body. He probably thought Izuku was out capturing villains and annoying the police and heroes. But tonight, Izuku was more concerned with saving children who'd been treated like he was growing up. Who's this? Nezu asked. Am I to assume this will be your one condition? Izuku nodded. This is Eri. He bounced the girl in his arm, but only enough to gesture to her. And behind me is Little Grim. He can tell you his name. I'm Kota. Are you sure we're safe here, Ghost? I'm sure. You kids are safe here. Eraserhead walked over and ushered them all in after checking the area outside the gates. Though I'd prefer to know if that safety comes with a target, Ghost. It doesn't. The person who hurt them can't hurt them anymore. We need to have a real talk when these little ears are asleep. Come on, let's get them back to the dorms. Nezu hopped down and walked beside Kota. The young boy took the chimera's hand but never left Izuku's side. I'll have Cementos make an extra room in the dorms. For now, they can stay with Izuku. I'm sure he doesn't mind. Not at all. Thank you, Nezu. Awkward silence was the perfect description for their walk back to the dorms. It was about 4 in the morning, so the campus was dark and quiet. Eri had fallen asleep in his arms and Kota had pulled his shirt up over his mouth in a continued effort to hide while he clung to Izuku's overcoat as they walked. Having forgone Nezu's hand after a while, Eraserhead seemed to be having a tough debate with himself, his facial expressions changing every few seconds. Nezu just wore that damn smile the whole time. By the time they made it back to the dorms, Eraserhead had to pick up Kota as he was just about asleep on his feet. Poor kids. Izuku felt bad for stealing them in the dead of night, but that was the safest option, and also when his quirk worked the best. Thankfully, no one came to meet them at the door. Oddly, one of their classmates, the one Katsuki called Eyebags, was sitting on the couch reading with a mug of coffee in hand. He didn't react more than to look up, arch his eyebrow, and smirk before returning to his business. Izuku had been told this one, Shinso, was Eraserhead's other private student. They'd yet to really meet except in passing during meals and classes. But again, Izuku had only been here 2 days, and they had yet to have physical training that week. Izuku settled Eri into his bed once he reached his own room. Exhaustion was starting to take hold of him as well. Izuku was still getting accustomed to living life on the average person's day-night cycle. Kota rubbed his eyes and yawned. I can stay with Eri. Of course, Little Grim. Izuku took him from Eraser and placed him on the bed. In a whiff of smoke, the wolf appeared once more and curled himself around the girl. They almost looked like a yin-yang sign, white hair on black fur. Izuku smiled. When he tucked them in and turned, he found Eraserhead staring. Izuku patted his shoulder. Come on, let's talk. Eraserhead grabbed his arm once they were out of the room and dragged him back to the common room where Nezu was waiting. The smile was gone, and in its place was a cross-armed glare. Oh, come on, seriously, Nezu. You, too. Can I not have one person on my side? He threw his hands up. I'm on your side, Shinso called across the room, not looking up. Stay out of this, Shinso, Eraserhead ordered. Don't make me give you extra laps in training. Ghost, I can accept this as the one condition I promised you, but you need to understand that we need an explanation for why you left in the middle of the night and came back with 2 children. Obviously, we have concerns. Izuku rolled his eyes at Nezu and walked into the kitchen to grab an apple. Well, give me a effing second to get my shit together. I did just save 2 abused orphans from the Yakuza, you know. You what? Eraserhead snatched the apple from his hand before it even got to his mouth. Hey, I was eating that. Explain. Now, Izuku growled. I got a call from a friend ... EW. No, scratch that. I got a call from an informant. The Yakuza were doing weird-ass experiments on those kids. I have morals. You all know my past now, where I stand on the whole torturing kids thing. We all stand in that same position, Ghost. Nezu climbed up onto the kitchen counter. Go on. Right. Look, I had time, I was awake, and it wasn't going to hurt anyone. Besides, I took out the Yakuza while I was at it. Well, most of it, I guess. The leader, Kai Chisaki. You said his name. Nezu pointed out, worry in his tone. Yeah, he's dead. Doesn't matter if I say his name now. He's dead, you ghost. Eraserhead put his hands on his hips like a disappointed mother. Izuku made a face. He hated that reminder of his family. Yeah, I did. He tried to overhaul my face, or whatever his gross-ass quirk is. He made a wiggly hand gesture with his hand in front of his face, then snatched the apple back from his grumpy teacher and leaned on the counter next to Nezu. Besides, what's one Yakuza boss's body compared to saving 2 kids? Eraserhead narrowed his eyes. He shoved his phone in Izuku's face. One boss. There are 2 bodies found at the hideout an hour ago by police investigating the uproar, one of which had a bullet in their skulls. Wanna explain that one? Oh, that wasn't me. Then, who was it? Eraserhead was losing his patience. Izuku was not. Nagant. The room froze. He could have dropped a pin on the tile floor and heard it echo across the whole building. Maybe he should have kept that to himself. Izuku took another bite of his apple. It echoed pretty loudly. Shinso was staring at him, but he didn't seem to get the gravity of that name. So anyway, I have 2 kids now, one of which is like me, which I think Eraser noticed. Church Grim, Fey Wolf, he's Yuri's guard, inseparable now. And you expect this school to house, feed, and educate them? Nezu asked. Well, one condition. They stay. But I'll mind them. After all, Grim is going to need training in his quirk. And I think Yuri will need Eraser's help in training hers. Some kind of wacky rewind thing. Super powerful. They were using her to make weapons. Weapons ... out of a rewind quirk. What would that do? Izuku put up a finger, telling Eraserhead to hold on. He took his phone out and dialed Jurin. The supplier picked up after 2 rings. What weapons were they making? I assume you had time to review the data Nagant got you. Always perfect timing, Dullahan. Izuku put the phone on speaker. So anyway, it seems like Overhaul was pulling Yuri apart, over and over, then putting her back together, to get samples for some F-ed-up, sit are the kids there. Izuku told him no. F-ed-up quirk deleter bullets. They're only temporary right now, but if they kept going, it might have been hell on earth. I'll make sure this gets locked away. Frankly, if this got out, I'd be out of a job, and society would collapse. Thanks, Jurin. Again, books are clear. Send me a copy of all the files. And whatever you have on Overhaul and the Yakuza. Yep, click. Okay, so, this Overhaul guy was using his quirk to pull those kids apart. Nezu asked. Yep, right. They stay. Now then, that's resolved. Let's address the other elephant in the room. Why exactly do you have the Underground's most nefarious supplier on speed dial? Let's circle back to that. Nezu, never. The important thing is I may now have 2 groups of holes after my ass or my head. Probably my head. You know, for ending their leaders. You're just racking up the points here, kid. Eraserhead sighed. Thought our deal here included you quitting your vigilante extracurriculars. Oh, I never agreed to that. I said I accepted being a student here, but that wasn't me saying I would quit saving lives. Eraserhead sighed. If you send me to voicemail ever again, I will personally see to it that you never get out of detention. Am I clear? Izuku mocked a salute. Yes, sir, Eraserhead, sir. This is your fault. The teacher glared at Nezu. This is your fault. I take no responsibility for this. But you agreed to teach him. I will put you on top of that fridge, Nezu. Don't test me. You wouldn't dare. If this kid brings the villain underground on our heads, rat, I would dare. I would dare. Nezu looked scandalized. The little chimera even had a paw on his chest. Izuku rolled his eyes. Enough, both of you. Honestly, play hickory dickory dock some other time. I need to crash. Apparently, I have training tomorrow today. Go argue about me in your offices. I'm going to sleep. When I call, you answer. Are we understood? Izuku waved his hand. No more running off in the middle of the damn night. Go sleep. Eraserhead took Nezu. Izuku didn't care if they left, went to the teacher's dorms, or back to the school. He did not care. Izuku wanted sleep so bad. But there was an issue. There were currently 2 toddlers in his room. Great. Welp, couch it was. Izuku hopped over to the couch where Shinzo was reading and collapsed himself into the purple teen's lap. That is to say, he mostly collapsed on the couch and put his head on Shinzo's legs. SHHH, just go with it. You've only got 2 hours to sleep, you might as well stay up. Shinzo huffed as he returned to the book he was reading. It looked like some kind of shonen manga. Izuku was too tired to check. Instead, he let sleep claim him for a couple hours. Reality would have to settle in eventually. But for right now he could forget everything that happened this evening and catch up on some sleep. GH. Izuku woke up to the disgusting lap of an animal tongue across his face. Grim, the dog plopped itself on its butt right in front of him and huffed. Really, this better not become a habit. Kota's head tilted to the side, confused. Izuku sighed. So you were serious about the dog? Shinzo chuckled. Yeah, that's Grim. He's ... Well, it's complicated. He's 9. He's a kid when he's not a wolf. I'm going to pretend that made any sense at all. It makes about as much sense as my head being detachable. Izuku grunted as he got to his feet. I'm sorry, what? Nothing. Come on, Grim. It was easy to assume the little wolf was calling him to fetch Eri, ever the guardian. Kota saddled up to his side, leading him back to his room. Izuku ruffled the fur behind his ears. Do you prefer being a wolf? Kota titled his head back, snorted, and nodded his head. Izuku took that as a yes. He did wonder why, though. Perhaps less human interaction. Izuku would have liked that, too. Eri was sitting up in bed when Izuku walked in, still rubbing her eyes. She yawned and stretched her arms above her head. Hey, chickadee. Good morning. Mornin', ghost. Did you sleep okay? I know it's only been a few hours. I might have some extra clothes here ... Let's see what might fit you. Actually, Izuku found a stack sitting on his chair with a note from Midnight. These should fit. There was a cute pink dress for Eri and a t-shirt and shorts for Kota. Izuku smiled. At least the teachers seemed accepting so far, even if it was last minute. Okay, I'll leave these here. Do you two know how to brush your teeth and wash up? Eri nodded. Chisaki-sama wanted us to be self-sufficient. Self-sufficient. Izuku clarified. All right, let me get ready and then I'll leave you to it. I'm going to make breakfast. Come out to the kitchen when you're ready. Grim, I expect you to clean up and get dressed, too. The wolf actually rolled his eyes and pretended not to hear him. Izuku quickly got himself cleaned up and put on his school uniform. Once done, he set out to make breakfast after making sure the kids had everything they needed to get ready. It was 6, class was in an hour and a half. He expected the dorms to be hopping by the time he got to the kitchen, but it turns out he was early. Shinzo was on his 3rd cup of coffee, but this time he was at the counter with his backpack beside him. You like pancakes, Insomniac? Yeah, tell me something. Why do you use Bakugo's nicknames for people? You don't seem like the type. You did slam him for calling you a slur when you walked in. Izuku grabbed the pancake mix from the cabinet and a pan before answering. My quirk, names of power. I don't like having power over people unless it's necessary. So they were serious about the you-know-what. Let me just ask if they were serious about everything last night. Yep, everything. That doesn't really explain why saying his name after his death wouldn't matter though. That's what you said, right? Izuku busied himself with mixing milk and eggs into the pancake mix powder and putting a bit of oil into the pan as it heated up. The sizzle was just right. Izuku dipped 3 pancakes into the pan as he debated what to tell Shinzo. In all reality, it didn't matter anymore what he said. Besides, he never really liked lying. Maybe that was part of his quirk for some strange reason. But he'd never really taken to lying, just skirting around his words in a creative way. Sort of like what he told Eraser last night about their deal. He's never actually agreed to stop being a vigilante, not in so many words. Still, he didn't like the idea of telling the whole truth. But if he did, maybe he'd make some friends ... or enemies. Which was better. Well, you know, if I speak someone's true name with specific intent ... well, they die. He shrugged and flipped the pancakes. What, like a death curse? You know, everyone I meet has something different to say about my quirk. Kaken called it creepypasta. They both chuckled. Anyway, yeah, death curse. My vigilante name is my quirk name. Dullahan. You ever read anything on Fae myths? Not much, but I've heard of Dullahan. There's an old anime called Durarara. In it, there's a Dullahan, her name's Kelty. Chiyu, someone stole her head. Shinso paused, nervously. Can that happen? Well, my head has only ever detached at night, so I'm not sure if it could happen during the day. But if someone took my head, I'd be pretty stuck. I can move my body independently, but it's not perfect. And I still need my eyes to see. So your body is like a floundering fish. Pretty much. I also can't speak or breathe when my head's detached. Though I also can't die. So it's not like Kelty. Shinso asked. What do you mean? Sorry, I've never seen that anime. Oh, well, her body could move and think on its own. That's how she got to Japan to look for her stolen head. Well, I mean, to be honest, I've never been without my head for more than a few minutes. I guess I just always assumed my body would have trouble without my head. I've never tried it. Izuku plated the pancakes and poured another 3 into the pan. Shinso stole one and munched it plain. It doesn't bother you? Izuku asked. What? You being a Dullahan? Not really. I think it's cool. Though, Kelty's motorcycle is like ... her familiar. Something. They call it Twist Bodder. Izuku choked on his own spit at the pronunciation of the Celtic phrase. Oh dear. Twist Bodhar. It's what's the term? Stagecoach. No, death coach. Sorry, I'm bad with translation. Anyway, they're silent coaches, often led or driven by the Dullahan. No, I don't have one. I've never really tried to find one. Considering it's just a myth, I always figured I just never had the luck of finding whoever has Koist Bodhar for a quirk. Even if I did, well, I wouldn't think it'd be appropriate to call them a familiar. Shinso nodded a few times and stole another pancake. Or he tried to. Izuku smacked his hand with the spatula. Oh, hey, what's your deal? Those are for the kids, not you. You asked if I liked pancakes. I'll make you some after Eri and little Grim eat. Speaking of them, the little wolf silently paraded himself into the kitchen with Eri on his back. Izuku got a laugh out of that. Eri was in the pink dress he'd left. And hopefully Kota was all cleaned up behind his wolf mist. What smells good? Eri asked. Pancakes that your new dad won't let me have. Izuku glared at Shinso. I am not a father. He pointed the spatula at the taller teen. We're not doing that. You're the one who adopted 2 kids last night, on a whim. It wasn't a it wasn't a whim. They needed help. I helped. Whatever you say, teen dad. Move over. I'll plate while you cook. Izuku sighed. But he was right. Izuku had just adopted 2 kids on a damn whim. Eri was still half asleep, clearly not having gotten enough. Izuku felt that exhaustion in his bones. Kota was tilting his head back, nuzzling Eri's leg to try and wake her up. It wasn't working very well. Shinso joined him at the counter and started plating pancakes. The girl held up her hands, asking to be picked up, so Izuku grabbed her and put her back on his hip like last night. He was sure the poor girl was terrified of her new surroundings, but she was just too tired to process that right now, so she clung to the only thing that felt familiar. Izuku and Kota were the same kind of creature. She must sense it. As Shinso got a plate ready for Kota, Izuku fed Eri a pancake while he cooked. Hey, could you pour them some apple juice ... or wait, can wolves have apple juice? Izuku asked. I don't know. He's not really a normal wolf, is he? I don't know what he can eat or drink. Should he have had pancakes? Izuku sighed. I don't know. It's not like my mother ever allowed me any animals, and he's not exactly a regular wolf, as you said. The aforementioned wolf huffed angrily. The mist swirled and plumed around him, reappearing the child that was inside a moment later. You could just ask, you know. Kota grumbled. The kid went to the fridge himself and grabbed the bottle of apple juice. Then, expertly, he pushed the counter stool over and climbed up to reach the cabinets and get 2 plastic cups out. Skillfully, the 9-year-old poured 2 cups and handed one to Eri in Izuku's arms. Thank you. She smiled. Kota grunted in reply. Izuku and Shinso shared a look. Trauma often makes people grow up way too fast. Izuku knew that all too well, and from the look in Shinso's eyes, he knew it too. Katsuki had mentioned Shinso's quirk in passing. Brainwashing. Izuku imagined he didn't have a good childhood with a quirk like that. Actually, he wondered if Eraserhead also had a rough childhood because of his quirk. Maybe he should ask. Maybe he shouldn't. When Izuku turned around, the wolf was back, like a shadow beside him. He was going to have to get used to that. The second cup was already in the sink. Empty, along with the plate they'd given the little Grim. Izuku was just about to stuff a pancake in his mouth when the whole dorm roused to life with the thundering of students' feet coming down the stairs. It was a slow trickle at first. Then suddenly the whole common room was awash in life and his brain was going haywire from all the observation pings. Shinso moved around him and grabbed another pancake from the plate to stuff in his mouth. He shot Izuku a sly grin. They worked on cleaning up the kitchen as their classmates streamed around them. Ada and Momo both grabbed protein bars while discussing the English paper due at the end of the week. Takoyami and Kota came down chatting quietly while inspecting Takoyami's Nintendo Switch. Sue came hopping, literally, down the stairs and grabbed herself a bowl of cereal. All of this, and more, until Katsuki came thundering down the steps and stopped dead in his tracks at the sight of Izuku and Shinso munching on pancakes with a girl sitting on the counter and a black wolf leaning on Izuku's leg. Izuku didn't stop munching his breakfast while the blonde glared at him. He was expecting an answer, but none came. Then, someone screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear, though. It was a cry of elation. Mina rounded the corner and squealed when she caught sight of the kids. Or well, the one kid and the dog. Oh my god, Aizawa-sensei let us have a dog. The girl scurried towards them. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Izuku mumbled. Why not? He's not a pet. Izuku placed Eri on Kota's back. The wolf huffed at Mina and shook its head. Long black plumes of misty smoke ruffled around his neck in the action. Large red eyes lifted to face the pink teen. She stepped back. The rest of the class finally noticed. Ghost, it's highly irregular to have a canine in the dorms. Did you even pass this by Aizawa-sensei? He knows, class prees. Grim is here to stay, so is Eri. Huzo. Kota rounded the kitchen counter with Eri riding on his back. He walked right to the door and sat down. Eri rested her chin atop Kota's head, and Izuku's heart just absolutely burst. That was the cutest thing ever. The dog gestured his head to the door, barked once, and settled down on his stomach. Someone better start talking. Katsuki rubbed his face. Right now. It's fine, Kaken. They're just staying for a while. But I don't believe Eri likes all the attention. Can we all just take a breath and calm down? We are calm. Momo stepped around Ida. Hello there. I'm Momo. But you can call me Momo, okay. Eri nodded, still hiding in the misty fluff of her guardian's neck. I'm Ijiru Kirishima. Where did the redhead come from? Izuku was still not used to having so many people around him. I'm Mina. It's so lovely to meet you. Hey, I'm Ochako Uraraka. One by one, the whole class started introducing themselves. No one approached the toddler duo, likely because of Izuku's warning. Once they'd all said their names, Izuku felt a frustrated twitch in the back of his head. Names, power. He hated that burning acid in the back of his throat. Shaking his head, he tossed the spatula in the sink and grabbed his backpack. Shinsho followed suit and they headed for the door. Kota was on his feet in an instant and found his place at Izuku's side. Ghost, Katsuki called. Izuku stopped. You're not going to explain why we all just woke up to a toddler and a wolf in the dorms like it's a normal Wednesday morning. It is a normal Wednesday morning. We're about to be late for class. Sensei is not going to be happy about that. That's what got the students in gear. They rushed around Izuku like a flood, which he got a huge kick out of. Mostly because they all gave him pleasant good mornings or patted the mound of curls atop his head in passing. The more shy of his classmates bowed their heads or smiled. But it meant the same. Eri and Kota stayed by his side, waiting until most of the class had left before they moved as one with Izuku. Shinso was on his other side. So, are we best friends now? Izuku asked the other teen. We are both Aizawa's private students or whatever. We should stick together. Besides, I think I'm the only other person calm enough not to scare your new shadows. As if to emphasize that, Kota did a circle around them as they walked to class, brushing his side up against Shinso in passing. I think Grim agrees. Eri was hiding her smile in his fur. Yeah. Hey, what do you think Aizawa-sensei will do with them? What do you mean? Izuku asked. Well, Shinso reached down and scratched Kota's head. They need an education, right? And parents. Well, I guess maybe they do. But I'm not sure who'd understand their quirks, and getting adopted together would be difficult. So are you going to be their parent? Shinso seemed a bit unsure about that. Well, I did liberate them. Seems only fair I should take responsibility for them. Don't you think? Seems fair. Kota barked again. He trotted a few feet ahead of them. Kota says he doesn't like the class. They're too noisy and they stare too much. Izuku snorted. They do, don't they? I can feel it, too. Eyes, always on the back of my neck. Ugh, it makes my skin crawl. Kota huffed his agreement and Izuku chuckled. They'd made it across campus to the class, only a few feet behind the rest of the students in Class 2A. Just as they passed over the threshold, the first bell rang and they were settling in their seats. The wolf curled up beneath his desk, wrapped around his feet. Eri had told him she wanted to sit on the windowsill next to him. It was quite large, like everything in here. Why was the whole school so big? The rooms were big, the doors were huge, even the windowsills were large enough for Eri to sit on. Izuku took a notebook from his bag along with a set of colored pencils and gave them to Eri so she could draw. Aizawa walked in a moment later with his usual scowl and travel mug of coffee. He looked around, paused right on Izuku and the canine curled up around his legs, then faced the whole class. All right, Hellspawn, obviously you've met, he sighed. Yes, Ada-sensei, I find it highly inappropriate that this class now includes not only a toddler, but also a dog, said Canine borfed his disagreement with being called dog. A wolf. Kota settled back down. Yes, I'm well aware it's unorthodox, but Nenzu had agreed to let them stay. Considering Ghost rescued them, they're his responsibility. Now then, let's get to work. The first half of the day was devoted to their regular classes: English, math, science, hero civil law, geography, and art, among a few others. They swapped off every couple days to keep things lively. At least, that's what Izuku wanted to believe. School was boring if you had the same classes every day. But 3 times a week they had hero training for the second half of the day. He hadn't been allowed to participate on Monday, so today would be his first day actually training with the other students. Izuku might be just a touch nervous about that. Scratch that, he was incredibly nervous about the physical training. He didn't doubt his own abilities, which were mostly self-taught, though he did do pretty well every year in Jiren's annual fight night. He never won, of course, but the underground was always thrilled to see him show up and get through a few rounds with some of the nastiest villains. Did they maybe go easy on him at first because he was a kid? Yes. Did that end the first time he left a scar on some beefy bastard's face with his whip? Yep. So he had the skill and the lack of compassion to fight like a villain. But his quirk wasn't necessarily physical, so he was going to struggle against these cunning herolings. The challenge was exciting, but it made butterflies in his stomach. Are you alright, Ghost? Shinso waved a hand in front of his face. You haven't touched your lunch. You should at least get a few bites in before we head out for physical training. Alright, the purple teen sighed. You'll do fine. The other brats aren't even that good. Easy for you to say. You can just mind control them. Izuku argued. Yeah, about that. Shinso rolled his eyes. Only works if they answer my questions. And all of them know to keep their traps shut tight to avoid my quirk. Though, the support course did give me a new tool to help with that. I'll be testing it out today. So, you'll be the only one with the secret. No matter what, if you hear a question, do not answer. Izuku leaned back a little as Shinso punctuated each word with his chopsticks. Okay, then. Fair's fair. Don't freak out if I throw my head at you. Sorry, what? Nothing. He quickly grabbed his bag and ushered Kota and Eri to get up. The wolf was on his feet, grabbing Eri by the back of her dress. Kota, I can climb. Stop it. Eri giggled. Shinso followed suit. No. That's the second time today you mentioned this. I know you were serious about the Dullahan thing, but you can really detach your head. Izuku sighed. Yes, usually just at night. Though, I suppose if you knocked me hard enough it might pop off. Eraserhead managed that, but it was night when that happened. You're just ... one big enigma wrapped in a puzzle? Not on purpose. Izuku shrugged. Shinso sighed. Come on, we need to get changed. Did you bring your vigilante gear? Oh, yeah. Nedzu said he had the support department make me a redesigned model. It should be in my locker. Kodo chuffed. He'd changed back into his human form to eat lunch, but now he was bouncing on his paws to get moving. Eri was giggling on his back as she flopped around. Okay, we're going. They ended up jogging to the training grounds' locker rooms. Izuku was introduced to the incredible storage systems at UA High. When you approached the locker rooms, you went to a panel by the door. After pressing your hand and scanning your eye, it pulled your gear and equipment from the universal storage and handed it all to you in a briefcase within a locker. Izuku was reminded of those cool underground bike or car storage facilities in places like Tokyo. Kota sat with Eri outside the locker rooms while Izuku and Shinso changed. Izuku's new gear was actually pretty awesome. The set included a new pair of black cargo pants and a black dress shirt, both of which were made out of some fancy materials. The manual said they were fire-resistant and rip-resistant, which was nice. The forest green vest he strapped on over his shirt was brocade and embroidered, but also made from the same type of resistant fabric, as was the matching tie, which shocked Izuku. Why waste that much effort on a tie? Anyway, his new overcoat was the selling point. It had pockets for days, inside and outside, all of which were either super deep or zippered shut. His new belt had slots of 2 hunting knives and his whip, as well as a couple other pouches for additional gear. Once he was dressed and got his combat boots tied on tight, he felt like a whole new beast, and he hoped that was a good thing. Damn, Shinso ruffled his hair. Now you look like a vigilante. Izuku slid his face mask up and tossed his hood over his head. Looking like a flashy hero yourself, Insomniac. Shinso laughed. Izuku blushed behind his mask, realizing he'd never heard a sound he enjoyed quite like this. Shaking his head, he scurried out after the heroing. Shinso's gear was similar to his. Black cargo pants and a long-sleeved top with bulky boots and his capture scarf. There was also something strapped to his face that reminded Izuku of a medical mask, but a lot bulkier and more electronic. Was that the new gear he mentioned at lunch? Ghost, Eri called. I'm here, chickadee. She held her arms out and Izuku picked her up. She was still so quiet. He really hoped she wasn't terrified of the school. Kota appeared at his side in kid form, a grumpy look on his face. Something wasn't right. What happened? He asked. Some jerk tried to pet me. I told them no, but they didn't listen. Kota bit them. I didn't bite hard, no blood. Just didn't want them near Eri. Izuku sighed. Okay, what did they look like? I don't know. Blonde, tall, loud mouth. He didn't even see her until she spoke. Then he was going off about babies in high school and saying he was getting Netsu. Izuku could not guess a student from that baseline description, unfortunately. There were multiple blondes in their class alone, though he knew none of them would try that sit knowing Izuku was nearby, let alone after his warning in the dorms this morning. So it must have been some kid from another class, but who? Okay, we'll deal with it later. Right now, we have to get to class. You two will probably be hanging out with Eraserhead. Is that okay? He nodded. Kota ducked behind his legs on the left and reappeared as a wolf on his right, huffing his agreement. Izuku settled Eri back on Kota's shoulders and gave Shinso a look. I've got an idea who it might have been, but he's harmless, just a jerk. Izuku shrugged. Whatever. Netsu can deal with it if the guy goes that route. Sort of wish Grim had bitten him harder. Shinso chuckled. Kota snorted. Well, at least he got them all back in a good mood before they dove into class. Izuku was still nervous, but there was no way this could go horribly wrong, right? Wrong. Everything had been going great. Really, it had. They had paired up to work on hand-to-hand combat, switching off using quirks and fighting quirkless, which was fine. He'd been paired up with Zero, who was actually a pretty damn good fighter. Then they'd swapped and he got Uraraka. She could throw a damn punch. Apparently she spent her internship with Gunhead last year and she'd picked up some martial arts skills. But they swapped a third time and Izuku was paired up with Kirishima. That's when things started to go downhill. They were working on quirk fighting this round, which meant Izuku could actually utilize his quirk for its purpose, keeping him safe and alive. Did Izuku sometimes have a pretty flippant disregard for his life? Yes, but he blamed that on people like Katsuki, and there was no arguing that fact. So, when they'd been working on kick blocking, Izuku had been keeping up incredibly well. He even managed to get Kirishima on his ass a few times because Izuku simply didn't fight fair, and why should he? He wasn't a hero, and he really didn't have any plans to become one, despite Netsu's endorsements. But the fourth time Kirishima picked himself up off the ground, he decided to swap into his unbreakable form, which, for the record, was effing epic. But that's not really the issue. The issue was when he came bolting at Izuku with his unbreakable fist out. The vigilante's brain sort of short-circuited. He'd faced an ugly rhino villain in one of the fight nights Jurin hosted in the last few years. And that guy put a massive hole in his chest with just a fist. It effing hurt, but Izuku had recovered in a few hours while beaching, moaning, and cursing Jurin up and down. The poor supplier got a huge kick out of it, but Izuku had not. The other thought that occurred to him was a flash of red. Not Kirishima's red, but Katsuki's red. Those eyes, the rage and hate. Izuku was suddenly back in middle school, hiding in a corner, convincing himself not to speak the name that fist belonged to. He was begging himself to shut up, to keep his mouth tight like a vault. Against his will, his mouth opened, in scream or name, he didn't know. Ghost. That was Katsuki's voice. Why was he screaming? Oh, right. There was a huge rock-like fist coming directly at his face. He should move, but it was far too late to do that. Kirishima's fist hit him square on the left cheek. He felt his cheek and orbital bones shatter on impact. Blood filled his face mask in the split second before his neck decided it wasn't going to stay connected. Oh, well then, enough force would detach his head during the day. Actually, it was silly for him to have ever believed his head could only detach during the night. But he'd never lost his head accidentally during the day, which made sense, considering he was, using it during the day. So here he was, staring at his own legs, listening to his classmates scream and cry in panic while his body just stood there. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Eraserhead pinching the bridge of his nose. Kota and Eri were sharing devious little giggles in the gym corner, trying to hide their laughter. Shinso just looked entertained, or perhaps proven right. Sensei, what? I didn't HOW. Kirishima had collapsed to his knees. Izuku could hear him sobbing. Calm down, Kirishima. Ghost, put yourself back together, please. Did you not warn them this might happen? Eraser knew he couldn't answer. He did roll his eyes at their teacher. His body moved, finally. It took a moment to get to his head, but he managed it without too much trouble. Katsuki was already at Kirishima's side, trying to calm the redhead down and make him understand this was normal for Izuku. What the Momo gasped. Is he dead? Uraraka's voice was horrified, and also filled with tears. What a fascinating darkness. Takoyami mumbled off to the side. Izuku was not going to question that comment. Actually, there were several comments he wasn't going to address. Shinso walked over with his head tilted over to look at Izuku's face. Izuku's right, uninjured eye, witched. You were being serious. Izuku was getting tired of that phrase. But Shinso seemed to get a huge kick out of this whole situation. At least someone was having a fun time. Izuku wasn't. He grabbed his head with both hands and quickly slotted it back into place with a nasty crunchy crack. Reactions varied around the room. Uraraka's body dropped. though Zero caught her before she hit the ground. Anjiro looked ready to vomit, as did a few other students. Takoyami was purely fascinated. Kirishima had this hopeful sort of glint in his eyes, probably from the relief of not having actually ended another student. Izuku gasped air back into his lungs. That hurt. He yanked his mask down and spat blood on the mats. Shinso grabbed his chin gently to get a better look at him. Izuku winced and tried to brush the purple hero away. It's fine, Kiri. My head just does that. Yeah, he broke a few bones. You're gonna need a patch job. Shinso agreed. Izuku waved a hand. I'll be fine. It'll heal in a few hours. It's slower during the day, but I'll be fine. Effing hell. His voice was kind of slurred from the broken bones in his face not allowing him to speak right. Ghost. Izuku turned to Kirishima. You're not. No, I'm not dead. As I said, my head detaches. No, I can't die. Stop freaking out. He's an ass about it. Katsuki grumbled. But he's fine, city hair. Eraserhead lightly smacked the back of his head. You better not have done that on purpose, brat. I don't need my hellspawn getting new phobias. Oh, broken face here, what the sit. I didn't do it on purpose. I wasn't even sure my head could come off during the day. Their teacher sighed. Someone take Uraraka and Ghost to Recovery Girl. He glared at Izuku. I'll explain it to them this time, but we're going to have a chat about this later. His voice lowered. I don't like the idea of you freezing up. We're going to talk about why it happened. Well, Shinso tucked his shoulder under Izuku's arm and helped cart him off the mats. Eri came running when she caught sight of his bloody and bruised face. Kota bounded behind her. He had no desire to talk about why exactly he did freeze up. There were a few reasons, a few very familiar reasons, one of which was staring at him with panicked red eyes. Izuku ignored Katsuki for the moment. He could not face that trauma right now, or the fact that he'd come very close to saying someone's name, and he wasn't even sure whose it was. When Eri smacked into his legs, he let go of Shinso to calm the toddler, putting aside his thoughts of trauma and names so he wasn't distracted with a small child who needed assurance right in front of him. I'm all right, chickadee. She took his hand immediately while Kota circled his legs, sniffing him up and down like he was lying. No, you're not. You're bleeding. Chisaki-sama always made us bleed and it was bad. It hurt. You're hurting. Izuku nodded to Shinso, who backed off and crouched down so he could hug Eri to his chest, away from the blood. I know, sweetie. I know. It does hurt. But I promise I'm okay. I will be okay. My body is designed to withstand these injuries. I promise. Izuku sat back on his heels. Eri frowned. She put a hand to the wounded side of his face. It stung, but Izuku bit back the desire to wince or pull away. The horn on her head started to glow. Ooh, Izuku held up a hand to Shinso. Get Eraserhead. Sensei, Shinso called. The horn grew twice its size, glowing brighter. She clutched his face with both hands and Izuku twitched at the sensation of the bones in his face crunching and moving back into place. He stayed still as her quirk continued to work. So, Jiren was correct. Rewind. Eri was rewinding the damage to his face, but the look in her eyes was quickly becoming fearful. Eraserhead ran over right as Izuku was pulling Eri's hands from his face. Erase her, he ordered, his tone serious. It's okay, Eri. Look at me. You did really well. But, I can't stop. Ghost her quirk cut off when Eraser's quirk activated. Eri deflated enough that Kota had to scoot his muzzle under her arm to hold her upright. Sorry. Hey, no, none of that. You didn't hurt me. You helped me, see. What is her quirk, exactly? Eraser looked his face over carefully. She healed you. No, she rewound me before I was injured. Shinso was at his other side, giving Kota head scratches for his good work keeping Eri stable. Izuku released her hands, letting her cling to Kota instead. Zero, go, take Uraraka to Recovery Girl. Tell her we'll be bringing other students in a bit. Izuku stood back up to speak with Eraser and Shinso while Kota curled up on the mats with Eri, keeping her hidden from the rest of the room for the time being. She looked exhausted. Izuku wondered just how bad Overhaul actually hurt her. She clearly had no control or practice with her quirk, and she was obviously terrified of others getting hurt. I'm fine, Eraser. I don't need to see the nurse. Yes, you do. You just got your head scrambled by a rock, and then immediately after got it unscrambled by a toddler who doesn't know how to control her quirk. She also needs to get checked out. As I said, we're going to speak about this later. Shinso, make sure they get to RG. Izuku sighed, but Eraser put a hand up and walked back to the rest of the class before he could even reply. Shinso was standing there with an expectant look on his face and one eyebrow arched up. Oh, don't give me that look. Come on, let's get you both checked out. The team leaned down to try and pick Eri up and Kota started growling. Well, hey, it's okay. It's just me. It's okay, Kota. Can I pick Eri up? We need to have Recovery Girl give her a once-over to make sure her quirk didn't hurt her. Okay. The wolf grumbled, his chest rumbling, but he backed off and uncurled himself from around Eri's tired form. The girl yawned and rubbed her eyes as Shinso picked her up and settled her on his hip. Kota was right on Shinso's leg as soon as he stood up. I'm glad they're starting to trust you. Izuku brushed some hair from Eri's face. How are you feeling, chickadee? I'm okay. Tired. I'm not allowed to use my curse. The teen shared a concerned look and Izuku tried to smile. That's okay, Eri. Izuku really needed to get these two kids in therapy. Nedzu had sent him an email with a subject line related, so he knew it was on the docket, but he'd been too busy today to actually address it. Therapy was at the top of his list now. Hours later, he was relaxing on his dorm room balcony while Eri and Kota were curled up in bed, napping. He had a bag of frozen peas pressed to his head. Recovery girl cleared them all medically, and had a field day with Kota because apparently no one told her they had another mythical creature on campus. Actually, she had a field day with both of them. Izuku did not like being the subject of study, but RG asked nicely, so he detached his head for her just once. Shinso was leaning his back and elbows on the railing next to him. They were both still in their full gear since they never had the time to change. Izuku was comfortable in his vigilante gear anyway. Shinso just seemed comfortable as he was, watching the sun go down past the campus walls. You good? The purple teen asked quietly. Massive headache. I'm just glad Eri's okay. He sighed. I don't even know what I was thinking, picking them up. I moved without thinking. They needed help. I should have just told the police. Yeah, that would have gone absolutely nowhere. What? Izuku turned to him, horrified. Ghost, be real about it. That was the last sect of the Yakuza, you said so yourself. There's no way the police would have gotten approval for a raid just because someone told them there were kids in there, without proof. You did the right thing. But I can't expect to just be a parent to them when I didn't even have good parents of my own. Izuku pressed the frozen peas to his head harder, groaning in frustration. Yeah, but you can learn that's it. What you can't learn is how to be a good person. It wasn't your business, and yet you stuck your detachable head right into that problem and saved a couple kids from growing up abused. A hurt child is the business of anyone who knows about it, anyone who can act. Izuku looked back into the room and frowned. Those children needed so much more than he could give them, but he'd do his best, and he knew he had help. I just saw red. I had to do something. I knew I could do something, so I did. Shinso nudged him, shoulder to shoulder. They both ended up smiling after the taller teen gave him an look. Okay, I did the right thing. Izuku gave in. There you go. Izuku chuckled. Fine, but they've adopted you as much as me, so you're going to have to deal with that. Are you saying I'm their second parent? EP. Izuku smirked, which would mean we're together. Wait, what? Sputter, grind. The gears in his head popped out of his brain machine. Shinso leaned in closer. Their whole arms were touching. Izuku was facing the campus and Shinso was facing back towards the building, but they were shoulder to shoulder on the balcony railing. Their foreheads were almost touching. I said, that would mean we were together. If we're co-parenting, that is. What did one say to that? Sure, they'd been friendly and a little flirty since they met. Izuku did sleep in his lap last night, but only because his bed was taken and the couch was only so big. Well, okay, that was a half lie. Part of him had wanted to do it. And Izuku was a bold mother effer when he was tired as sit. A knock came to his bedroom door. Shinso lifted his head and moved back a few inches. Izuku looked off to the left, pressing the whole bag of peas to his face to hide the blush creeping across his cheek. Come in, he called, not loud enough to disturb the napping toddlers in the room. Eraser joined them on the balcony a moment later. He let out a long sigh and took out a pack of cigarettes. Before Izuku could even argue the fact that he was smoking around children, the teacher held up a hand and just stuck the unlit cigarette between his lips. All right, talk. Why'd you freeze up? Eraser, seriously. I thought you two were close. Do you want him to leave? Izuku sighed. No, never mind. It's fine, Ghost. I can leave. Shinso stood up off the balcony. Izuku grabbed his arm. No, it's fine. I want you to stay. I'm just not used to all this. The tension. What I heard was you're not used to people giving a crap about you. Eraserhead faked the action of taking a drag and putting the cigarette between his fingers, dangling his hand off the balcony railing. Izuku assumed the habit was just a comfort. Same thing. But yeah, I froze up. I just got reminded of some stuff. Their teacher made a go-on gesture. Izuku ground his teeth. Jurin hosts these fight clubs once a year. It's a big event. The whole underground takes like a week off every year for these tournaments. There's crazy prizes and whatever. I usually participate, at least for the last few years. Wait, they let a minor participate? You think I'm the only minor who participates? Izuku laughed. Right, anyway. Last year, I was up against this massive rhino quirk. The guy was huge. Now, when sit starts, they usually go easy on me because I'm a kid. You know, villains aren't all bad. Most of them have kids themselves. Then I go and leave scars on them with my whip or my knife and they leave the sentiment behind. So this rhino got over you being young? Shinso asked. Oh yeah, big time. He left a fist-sized hole in my damn chest. Jiren got a damn good laugh at my hours of cussing and groaning, but whatever. I effing saw that guy coming at me when Kiri started charging. Eraserhead winced a little. Okay, that ... at least makes sense. The freezing, not you being in some yearly fight night insanity. When is this fight competition, anyway? No idea. Ghost. Okay, first of all, why would I tell the most prolific underground hero where and when the most infamous fight tournament in the underground happens? Eraserhead shrugged. Secondly, it changes location and dates every single year. No one knows until 2 nights before it begins, for the most part. Izuku was usually given an extra day or 2 to prepare since he actually helped Jiren set the whole thing up. But he didn't say that. Fair enough. Eraserhead nodded. I should trust you won't be participating this year. Izuku sucked his teeth. Heh, right. Again, I never agreed to that. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. You're not going to have any bridges left by the time you graduate, kid. Izuku shrugged. Did he really need all the bridges? Probably not. Nagant made a similar comment, but he wasn't afraid of fire, nor was he afraid of swimming across the rivers that lacked bridges. Not anymore. All right. Nedzu asked me to remind you to work out a treatment schedule for the little ones. Email him tonight, please. Will do, sensei. Get some rest, both of you. The class will want more answers than I can provide tomorrow. He left after putting his cigarette back in the box and giving them both a behaved look. As he walked out, he tucked a blanket over the sleeping wolf on the bed curled up around her protectively. Kota woke up. Deep red eyes stared up at Eraserhead. When he realized the teacher was only doing him a kindness, the wolf went back to sleep with a soft borf sound under his breath. For a canine, he certainly had a wide range of emotions. Izuku smiled. Did Nedzu say when Cementos was going to add a room for them? Oh, Izuku blinked a few times and turned back to the campus. Tomorrow, I think. I don't remember if he said where he was adding the room, though I'd prefer if it was close to my room. They did pronounce the kids my responsibility since I liberated them. It'd be easier to do so if they were here. True. Ugh, you really stirred the pot by joining our class, didn't you? Someone had to. What's high school without a little drama and excitement? Normal, Shinso groused. Izuku chuckled. Yeah, normal is boring. Ugh, he sighed. We should crash. Couch again. My room is just down the hall. Tell Kota where we are. I don't think Yuri's waking up till morning. She was out of it after using her quirk. Izuku nodded. He gave Kota a head scratch as they left and made sure the wolf nodded before he left, understanding where they'd be. Shinso promised to leave the door cracked in case they needed Izuku. The moment they got into Shinso's room, Izuku flopped on the bed after shucking his overcoat, tie, and vest. He didn't even have the energy to kick off his shoes, so he just let his feet hang off the bed. Shinso actually grabbed his feet a moment later and took off his boots, then tossed his legs onto the bed and shoved him to the side. Back. Hey, move over. These beds aren't designed for 2 people. No sit, Sherlock. Izuku scooted himself over a little. Shinso rolled his eyes and shoved him again. Izuku was crowded against the wall with Shinso's whole body over him, the taller teen's arm pressed to the wall. Izuku blinked. Wait, when did that happen? He swallowed hard and tried to think of something witty or sassy to say, but nothing came to mind. Instead, he found himself staring at Shinso's lips for far too long. They split into a grin after a moment. That's what I thought. Izuku had no idea what that meant. Shinso's free hand sunk into his curls and pulled his head back so his chin was pointed upwards. Izuku could barely see the hair rolling through his lashes as he dipped down against Izuku's neck. Hot breath on cool skin made him shiver. Can I kiss you? Shinso asked. Yes, he gasped, not even actually thinking about it. The sweetest feather-like kiss touched right where his head and neck met. Izuku had no idea his neck was so sensitive, but even that faint brush of lips sent goosebumps across his whole body. His eyes fluttered closed. Just as he was letting himself relax into the warmth of their private moment, something woke his brain back up, each gear finding its correct place in a half-second. A wave of dread swelled in his gut. It sang the song of death, death, death. Izuku grabbed Shinso by the shoulder and rolled them both to the side, tossing them both on the ground. The teen cried out, having knocked his head on the wall. Izuku had smacked his wrist off the bed frame in the process, likely fractured. The scent of burning fabric hit his nose in an instant. Where they'd been laying was a scorch march, the comforter still smoldering. Izuku snapped his eyes to the other side of the room. There stood Dabai in front of a swirling purpose portal. Of course, he did expect there would be consequences for ending Shigaraki, but he hadn't expected them to come so soon, nor in the form of Dabai. The burnt villain had appeared to hate Shigaraki, so why was he seeking vengeance? Damn, you've got great instincts, brat. Come along now, time for you to settle your debts. I don't owe you anything, Dabai. F off before the fire alarms go off. Shinso groaned again, rubbed his bleeding head as he came around. He froze when he found Dabai in the room, though. You did end Shigaraki, though. Did I? Can you prove that? Security cameras don't lie, little hero. I told you, I'm not like them, and I'm certainly not like you. Dabai sighed. Just get in the damn portal so I don't have to set this whole building on fire, okay? I'm not in the mood for this bullshit. The real boss wants to speak with you. Come along, and all your herolings get to sleep soundly tonight. Izuku could end him. He knew Dabai's true name. It was on the tip of his tongue, so tempting. But that would only cause more trouble, wouldn't it? He got himself into this mess by using his quirk to end. And now he was going to have to face the problem, or risk making it messier. You leave everyone alone. Hand to God. Dabai raised a hand while wiggling his fingers. Izuku did not trust him one bit, but he also didn't want any of his new friends and classmates to get burned. He was also thinking of Eri and Kota sleeping down the hall. He would not risk their safety. What are you doing? Shinzo asked. You can't go with them. I have to. This is my fault. They'll end you. Somehow, no one heard their clattering roll across the room. Their neighbors likely thought they were just having a go of each other in a good way. The bed hadn't produced enough smoke to cause the alarms to go off. Why? Fireproof sheets. Izuku had never once in his life considered them when picking out a comforter. But this school had so many quirks to deal with. They likely had specially made quirk-resistant sheets for the dorms. Hell, the uniforms were stronger than his middle school set by a long shot. Izuku ground his jaw and stood up. Shinzo grabbed his wrist. Let go. I need you to take care of the kids. You're not walking to your death, ghost. Shinzo held him firm. Dabai cut Izuku off. Actually, he's not walking at all. The villain grabbed a fistful of his hair and put a boot to his chest, shoving his body backwards while holding his head, effectively separating them in all of 5 seconds. Izuku's vision spun as his head flopped side to side in Dabai's grip. Could this effer not hold him straight? Christ. Izuku was going to give him an earful when he got his effing body back. No, Shinzo screamed. He dove after them while Dabai backed into the portal. The tired teen was faster than he appeared, though. Darkness swallowed them, all 3 of them. When it vanished, Izuku found them in a bar. Dabai stumbled to the side, still holding Izuku, followed by Shinzo tumbling through just as the portal closed. Oh, for FS sake, put the extra brat back, Dabai shouted. The boss only wanted the head, not a whole extra body. I'm afraid that's not possible, Dabai. Kurogiri held out his hands as he spoke. Dabai tossed Izuku's head haphazardly at the Misty Warp Gate villain. Izuku couldn't feel nauseous without his stomach, which was weird, yet useful. But that didn't stop his brain from getting stupidly dizzy when his head made somersaults in the air. Kurogiri caught him carefully and made sure he was upright and secure once caught. At least one of them had manners. Well, why the F not? Dabai collapsed into a bar stool. The school alarms activated. They turned on their defense system. I cannot open another portal there at this time, or I will be caught. Shinzo stood up with Izuku's hunting knife in hand. He must have grabbed that from Izuku's belt on the way to the portal. Quick thinking. Give him back. Nice try, kid. But you're out of your element. Dabai tapped the bar. Kurogiri moved to the bar and placed Izuku's head down on the counter. He was stuck. He couldn't move, he couldn't speak, he couldn't even turn his head. All he could do was move his eyes and blink. I'm afraid you are trapped, young hero. Kurogiri began pouring Dabai a drink. Though valiant, your attempts are futile. Please sit down. I will make you some tea. Oh, tea. Well, at least he was a polite villain. Izuku rolled his eyes. Now, what? Izuku wished he could at least sigh, but he lacked lungs right now. I'm not having effing tea with you, Shinzo cried. Oh. He rubbed his head. But do you happen to have an ice pack? Of course, little hero. Sit down. I will get the first aid kit. Kurogiri left the room, ignoring Dabai who called after him, fussing about the Misty villain. Don't parent him, Misty. Dabai growled. He's a captive. You didn't even want me here, burnt bacon. Shinzo smirked. What did you just call me? Dabai stood up, squaring off with Shinzo. They actually weren't that far apart in height, shockingly. Say that again. Shinzo used the knife to poke the villain in the chest after each word. Burnt bacon. What are you gonna do about it? I'll show you. Dabai's eyes glazed over, his body went limp. Shinzo slumped a little, breathing easier. But Izuku could see the pain in his eyes. He stabbed the knife into the counter and rubbed the side of his head. I can't hold him for long. I appreciate you making sure I didn't get burnt, but I'm fairly sure I knocked my brain in circles. Great, he had a concussion. Izuku would blame himself for that later. Dabai, sleep for the next 12 hours. Ignore anyone who tries to wake you. The villain collapsed to the floor, unconscious. So that's what Shinzo could do. Well, Izuku knew what his quirk was, but he'd never seen it in action, exactly. So, this was a lesson in power. Izuku was fascinated, and perhaps a little scared of just how amazing mental quirks could really be. Shinzo was quick to bolt towards him and grab his head. Izuku's vision blurred again as he was shoved into the teen's armpit. Okay, blindness was new. At least he could still hear. Speaking of which, he did hear a door open and shut and Shinzo's feet slapping on concrete. And Shinzo's heavy breathing as he ran. Shouto was half asleep when the sound of scratching and whimpering started waking him up. He figured one of the cats was trying to get in their room, but when he cracked his eyes open, he realized both cats were in the bed. Bastard. The old black fluffball was curled up by his head, and Lady, an old orange beach of a cat, was sleeping soundly at the end of the bed. Also, that scratching was too far away to be their bedroom door. Woof. Shouto sat bolt upright. Kota. He was out of bed before he realized something was even wrong. Hazashi was groaning at the sudden disturbance, groggily waking up, but Shouto was out of the room before his husband had even become alert of the waking world. He threw the door open just as the big wolf let out another loud bark. What happened? The dog growled, tossed himself back to the hall, and ran off. Shouto followed, barefoot, but he'd grabbed his capture scarf from the hook by the door as he left. Something was wrong. Something was off. He could feel it. No, he could smell it. Smoke. He smelled burning fabric. Here he was by Shinso's door, rubbing her already tear-filled eyes. Shouto skidded to a stop and scooped her up, placing her on Kota's shoulders. Do not leave her side, he ordered, knowing full well that was not likely to happen anyway, not unless, like this, Kota was getting help. When he slammed through the bedroom, what he found broke his iron heart. The room was a wreck. Shelves and books turned over, clothing everywhere. Shinso was not an untidy student. The bed was charred, thin wisps of smoke still ghosting to the ceiling. There was no sign of Shinso, but on the floor, half resting against the bed, was their resident vigilante's headless body. Everything was still fresh, smoldering. It must have happened seconds ago. He quickly jerked his body across the hallway and broke the alarm cover with his fist. Immediately it screeched to life. The whole campus would be in lockdown in minutes. Someone tapped him on the shoulder, probably one of the students, asking what was going on, and they didn't want to shout over him. But he was wrong. Instead, he found Izuku's body, standing in front of him, still headless, with its arms crossed and its foot tapping. Oh, was he annoyed? Great. Well, at least one of them had time for a sense of effing humor. Where do you think you're going? Hitoshi's feet caught on the asphalt, but not because he willed them to stop. Something made him stop, like he'd been lassoed by an invisible force or rope that had drug him to a dead stop. His whole body was rigid, and his headache was only growing worse by the second. The voice that spoke was like needles on the back of his neck. He'd never considered himself intuitive when it came to people. He didn't get vibes or gut feelings about others. But when that voice called out to him from somewhere nearby, he got the distinct feeling that if he were to try and run from this person, he'd end up dead. Granted, at present, he couldn't move a single muscle, so that wasn't much of a concern anyway. The heavy footfalls of something monstrous rounded the end of the alleyway Hitoshi had been running down. The bar they'd been in, the villain's hideout, had been at the very end of an incredibly long alley for some awful reason. But he never made it to the end. Izuku's head was silent and motionless, but Hitoshi knew he was awake and alert, hearing everything even if he couldn't reply or react more than to glare or blink. I was only expecting a little vigilante. You are a surprise, but you have my little vigilante with you. Thank you. Hitoshi's eyes just about bulged out of his head when he saw the 7-foot beast walking towards him. That wasn't a villain. That was a monster. That was death, evil incarnate. Dread poured off him in waves. This so-called man wore one of the most well-tailored suits Hitoshi had ever seen. But his face was what stood out, even compared to his $1,000 dress. The top half of his face was all scar. No eyes, no hair, just a round lump of marred flesh. Despite the lack of eyes, the monster for a man walked down the alley like he owned the place, and Hitoshi was damn sure he did. Oh, what an interesting quirk you have. How could this guy see his quirk? Let alone anything without eyes. Shame I have no use for a quirk with such limitations. It only works when someone answers your questions. I wonder if you could evolve it past that. I'll keep an eye on you. Now then, come along. That little vigilante is late for a meeting with me. Oh, that's who Ghost was brought here to meet. Lovely. Perfect. Hitoshi wanted to pass out. Instead, he clutched the voiceless head in his arms tighter. His body moved on its own, against his will. It marched him back down the alley behind the giant, right back into the bar where Kurogiri stood patiently behind the counter. Dabai was nowhere to be seen. The portal villain must have plopped him in a bed somewhere to be out of the way. Hitoshi was forced to sit down at the counter and place Izuku's head down, facing the room. He couldn't speak yet. His mouth was sealed shut by some unseen force. This was going to be a long night. In the midst of being transported around like a sack of potatoes, Izuku kept getting conflicting information. His mind and attention were still very much focused on the villain hideout and Shinso frozen in the chair beside him. But he could hear. No, that wasn't the right word. He could sense something else, somewhere else, too. What are we going to do, sensei? Where are Ghost and Shinso? There were too many words and questions filtering through. It was the class and Eraserhead. He could tell that much, but he couldn't figure out if this was real or just imagined. There was no way his body could hear the world around itself, right? Well, Izuku had never left his body somewhere away from his head. He'd always been in hearing range of his body. His head had always been within arm's reach of his body. Should his body be following you around, sensei? I have no idea. He can't hear us, don't bother. But Izuku could hear them, and he felt that. He felt that. Someone touched him. Instinct made his hand reach out and grab whatever hand had tried to touch him. The hand was familiar. Warm, so warm and soft as butter. That was Katsuki's hand, wasn't it? He squeezed. It squeezed back. Nerd, can you understand me? Squeeze once for yes, two for no. Izuku convinced his body to work again, squeezing once, and felt his shoulders jump just a little in excitement. But that world faded into the background when a large face loomed into view, a face without eyes and a devious grin. The person made Izuku's death alarms blare to life so hard he felt his body collapse on the ground somewhere else, and scurry away from this beast, even if he couldn't actually move his head. Hello Izuku, it's so nice to finally meet you. The boy with all the gifts, who is this a hole? Forgive me, I failed to introduce myself properly. I am all for one. I'd like to talk about Tamura Shigaraki, my prodigy, my adopted son. Double F. The bar door burst open and Jiren's ugly mug appeared with a large briefcase in hand. Delivery. He paused, looked around the room, letting his eyes land on each of the 4 people in the bar's interior, then clicked his tongue. Well, wasn't expecting to find that. Where's Dabai? Kurogiri answered. I'm afraid he's indisposed at present. I can take the requested items, Jiren. Yeah, sounds good. Question. He waved to all for one. Hey, a big man. Why do you have Ghost's head on your bar counter? Just curious. You know me. Gotta stick my damn nose in everything. We're having a chat. But he can't ... He can't chat without the rest of his body. I'm well aware of that, Jiren. He doesn't need to speak, only listen. Right. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this is about Shigaraki beating the dust. Was that you, kiddo? Izuku glared at the supplier, like Jiren didn't know Izuku ended Shigaraki. Right. Welp. Thanks for handling Overhaul for me. Good thing he didn't have a bigger baddie backing him up, too. Oh, if only Izuku had his lungs so he could sigh. So, you're not gonna help the teenagers in the villain lair? Shinzo asked. He was speaking through gritted teeth, and Izuku wasn't sure if that was purposeful or because he was fighting a quirk. The latter seemed more likely, giving the giant beast still looming over Izuku wafting gloom and death at him like it was his damn job. Jiren slapped his thigh. You're a character. No, that's not in my job description. Ghost knows the rules, don'tcha, spook. Izuku continued to glare at him. Yeah, he knows. I'm a supplier, kid. I don't interfere. I might stick my nose in it, but it ain't my business to be acting on. Kurogiri rounded the bar after he finished putting glasses away and held out his hand for the briefcase which Jiren handed over. The supplier saluted with 2 fingers and left with 2 angry teenagers growling at his back. Izuku was flipping him off, mentally. Or wait, did his body actually do that? Sit. Eraserhead was going to have a lot of questions for him later. Once the door slammed shut behind Jiren, All for One snapped his fingers, pulling everyone's attention back to him. Now then, back to business. Shouto was losing his mind. He was absolutely, 100%, without a doubt, going stark raving mad. Their resident vigilante might be headless, but he certainly wasn't lifeless. At first, it just followed him around with its arms crossed. Shouto could swear by the light of the moon the kid was wearing his best death glare and cussing up a storm in his head. Then he'd started reacting to things. He grabbed Katsuki's hand when the explosive blonde asked if Ghost could hear him, so maybe his body could sense the world around them. Then it was just a confusing mess of emotions they couldn't interpret. His body fell and pushed itself into a corner, clearly panicked. Then he was back to his annoyed stance, following Shouto around the dorm common area. At some point he'd flipped off the wall, which must have been intended for someone where his head was. Shouto rubbed at his temples. How are we going to find them? Hisashi asked. They were in the dorm room kitchen with Netsu and Midnight. The Chimera had locked down the whole campus, leaving students stuck in their dorms with their teachers for the most part. Ghost's body was currently leaning on the kitchen counter next to him with its arms crossed yet again. The way his fingers were tapping on his arm made Shouto think he was incredibly nervous and listening intently to something. Well, there's 2 major options as to where he even is. Shouto grabbed a nearby notepad and pen, writing out the options as he weighed them in his mind. The League of Villains, because he took out Shigaraki. Or the Shy Hisekai, since he took out Overhaul. My bet is on the League, since we know they have a financier. Overhaul was the dragon's head of the Yakuza. They're defunct now, floundering. But the League isn't. They've just been biding their time. We have a few possible locations for their hideout, but nothing's confirmed. I'll call Detective Tsukachi. Netsu jumped down to the counter from Shouto's shoulder to do just that. Okay, so who's the financier for the League? Midnight asked. We don't know, but the reports we've gotten and the information I've managed to scrounge up from the underground point to Ghost. The vigilante's body tapped Shouto on the shoulder. He wasn't sure why, or even if it knew who it was getting attention from. Both hands started moving. That wasn't any form of sign language, Shouta knew, but he tried to read it anyway. I think he wants a pen and paper. Ghost's body pointed at Midnight, then gave a thumbs up. Right. Shouta took Ghost's hands and put the pen in one and pressed the other to the notepad he had after he ripped off the used page. Okay, go ahead. Hazashi was giving him a weird look. I'm well aware of the maddening hilarity of this situation. I'm not addressing it. We're not addressing his crazy quirk right now. Got it. Hazashi nodded, his eyebrows knitted together. But how is hearing us? Can he hear us? I have no idea, Zashi. Obviously he knows something. Once more, the body tapped Shouta's shoulder. He took the notepad from it. Ew, all, the number 4, the number 1. What does that mean? What did you just say? Netsu snatched the notepad from his grasp. It just says all, the number 4 and the number 1. No, it doesn't. It says all for 1. Of LLFORONE. He wrote in shorthand. The chimera crumpled the paper up in his paw and growled. Damn it. The word was ground out through his teeth. Shouta had not seen Netsu this angry in almost a decade. He stepped back, and Midnight and Hazashi followed suit. The chimera growled into the phone in his other paw. Tsukachi, tell All Might his arch-rival is alive, and he's who's holding our students. Then call in the damn cavalry. We're going to need a miracle. Shouta sighed. He was really regretting ever capturing their headless vigilante. Don't get him wrong, he was always in support of protecting and saving the kids in their city. But how did this lead to the revival of the arch-rival to the country's #1 hero? Shouta had a splitting headache. We're going to need a miracle. Netsu's voice echoed around Izuku's head in circles. He'd heard the rumors of All for One, of course. You couldn't exist in the underground for 5 minutes without hearing the old rumors and myths about the Boogaman who secretly ran the whole underground from the shadows. But he wasn't supposed to be real. He was just a story, a nightmare villains told each other in dark alleys or at bar counters. But here Izuku was, a detached head on a bar counter, staring down the gruesomely toothy grin of a madman with half a face. It was both a blessing and a problem to have Shinso here with him. Izuku had no desire to be facing this monster alone. But he also knew that Shinso, unlike Izuku, was incredibly mortal. Now then, back to business. Izuku focused back on the beast in front of him, trying not to show any emotion on his face. But he could feel his hands wringing themselves out. Focus, Izuku, focus. Stay calm, breathe, and don't piss off the psychopath. Izuku gave one sidelong glance to the door where Jiren vanished and wished the supplier would break the rules, just once. So, little vigilante, you managed to end my Pertigi. And that is not an easy task given his quirk is so destructive. I truly hope you didn't come out of that unscathed. Izuku couldn't respond. It was probably better that he was unable to, actually. His usual level of brute force retorts and repetitive use of the word F would likely only afford him a boot to the face in this state. Anyway, it is of little consequence. I've had our good doctor sequence his DNA. I should have a copy of his quirk by month's end. Why was he telling them this? I know what you're thinking. Did he, though? Why am I telling you this? Apparently he did know. It's largely because I don't plan for either of you to leave. He looked over at Shinso. You have an incredibly useful quirk that I could utilize quite well if tweaked just slightly. And he turned back to Izuku. You owe me a debt. I might not have cared for the boy's life, but the years of work I put into Tamura were wasted. Now, Izuku desperately wished he could lean backwards. His body probably was, but having that ugly mug in his face made him feel nauseous, or at least, he got the desire to gag or maybe run and hide. I want to know how you did it. What? How did such a puny little vigilante manage to end my masterpiece? Your quirk is nothing but parlor tricks according to mine. You can pull off your head and bypass locks. How utilitarian. He can't answer you. Everyone turned to Shinso. Izuku was begging him to shut the F up in his head and glaring at him with just as much vigor. He can't speak. He doesn't have lungs right now. Yes, well, you see, that's why you're here. You weren't even trying to kidnap me. Speak, boy. The room shook. Izuku's vision warbled from the force of it. If he was standing somewhere in the world, his body just took a nasty tumble. Shinso shifted uncomfortably in his chair and tugged at his shirt collar. Right. He cleared his throat. His teeth no longer clenched when he spoke. Look, Mr. AFO or whatever your name is, I don't know everything about his quirk. All I know is that he's a Dullahan, like his name. He's literally a headless horseman. I'm aware of that, child. No, listen. He has the powers of one, too. Apparently, if he knows a person's true name and speaks it aloud, they die instantly. No take-backs, no second chances. That's how he ended that overhaul guy in Shigaraki. All for One's finger tapped on the counter next to Izuku's face. Was he thinking, or was that bottled rage? Izuku couldn't tell. His dissatisfied frown was slowly shifting upwards into that nasty grin once more, which didn't bode well for any of them. Kurogiri didn't seem all that bothered by his master's emotions, though. Well, then, I think I've got an idea. There was no way any idea this monster came up with would be good for him. Shouta's hands were almost shaking. Almost. He was half a wreck while strapping on his boots. The police had the locations of several hideouts that could be where the League of Villains was holed up, but they didn't have a definite answer on location. So, he was getting in full gear, ready to spend the rest of the night and probably the morning raiding hideouts and hunting down his students. Well, 1.5 students. Did a head count as half? Shoo. He looked up to find Zashi tugging on his neck speaker. The blonde was doing about as good as he was, which was to say not at all. Their students were kidnapped and possibly being hurt and interrogated, while they floundered to find the right location. Ghost's body was still having very physical reactions, and they weren't sure if that meant he was being tortured, or that he was just being his usual bratty self. They'll be okay. All right. He shook his head, dismissing the awful thoughts that were quickly filling it. His phone buzzed in his pocket, nearly making him jump. What? Whoa, youch, you're in a foul mood. Who is this? Hazashi was giving him a weird look. Shouta waved a hand. Aw, come on, Eraser, don't tell me you don't know the Underground's most infamous supplier. Shouta growled, low in the back of his throat. What do you want, Jurin? How did you get this number? That's not important. What is important, what might interest you, is where your little herolings are, where our favorite little spook is being held. How did Jurin know that? Correction, why did Jurin know that? Shouta shoved past Hazashi and grabbed his capture scarf on the way out of the locker room and back towards Nenzu's office. Speak. Now, I want to be clear. I don't interfere in the Underground's affairs. I'm only doing this because Spook's business is far more reliable than the bastard who has him. So, if you'll agree to owe me one small, tiny little favor, I'll send you the location pin. Did he really want to owe Jurin a favor? Absolutely not. That sounded like a very poor decision. But did he desperately need any kind of hint as to where Ghost and Shinso were? Yes, Shouta sighed as he shoved Nenzu's office door open. In the office were the Chimera himself and All Might. Deal. Send it. You might want to bring backup. The big man's in a foul mood since Spook ended his plaything. Tamura was useful to him. Spook isn't. Don't dawdle. We both know if Spook glares at someone enough, he could send even the most patient of nuns into a rage. Unfortunately, the supplier had a point. The longer Ghost spent in the care of people he didn't like, the higher his chances were of getting his head squished under a boot. Shouta, Nenzu asked. I've got their location. We need to move. Don't ask me how. You can lecture me later. All Might. Eraserhead. All Might looked frustrated and just a little bit angry. I assume you were given the case details. Yes. Unfortunately, it appears an old enemy I believe dead has resurfaced. Right. Let's go. We're going to need more backup. Nenzu, I'm calling Tsuki. Get on comms and run go between. Shouta turned on his heel and marched back out of the Chimera's office. Understood. Be safe out there. Bring our boys home. Oh, he would. There was no doubt about that. If there was one thing Shouta refused to do in this life, it was to let his students down. Izuku ground his teeth, as if that might actually help him relieve some small part of the stress and panic filling his mind right now. All for one had carted them down to some basement laboratory. There they were handed off to Kyudai Garaki, another monster, but this one had a medical license. Izuku was going to do his absolute best to abolish that once he got home. There was no way this man should be anywhere near medical equipment, not if the rumors in the underground were true. They were placed in some kind of cell, made of clear acrylic on all sides in the center of the room. It wasn't hooked up to anything, so at the very least he didn't need to worry about them gassing Shinso. The doctor was taking a bunch of scans of their bodies and quirks while they were stuck in the cell. No sound filtered in unless the intercom was on, so they had no idea what Garaki and AFO were discussing. How are we getting out of this? Shinso asked, but he wasn't looking at Izuku, so he was likely asking himself. Oh wait, the purple teen turned to him. I know you can't answer, but I really hope you have some ideas because I'm at a loss. Actually, Izuku was at a loss for ideas. He closed his eyes and tried to put his mind back into his body like earlier. It was incredibly hard this time, and he figured that it's something to do with being so far underground. Or maybe this cell was treated with some kind of quirk-resistant coating like that cell they found in Overhaul's lab area. Still, he caught little glimpses of words, phrases, the brush of a hand on his arm. Ghost. That was Eri's voice. Can you hear me? Yes, he could hear her. His body knelt on the ground, searching for the girl. Her hands found him and gripped them as tightly as any 7-year-old could. She was right there, holding him tightly, and Izuku wanted to cry. He'd promised her no one would hurt her anymore, and here he was, leaving her without his protection. He felt like the worst parent in the world. He'd even dragged Shinso into this. What a effing mess. Kota said he can smell you. He said he can feel you. Here, come here. What did she mean? Smell him, feel him. Eri took his hand and pulled his arm out. She splayed his fingers, and a moment later, something soft and furry pressed to his hand, Kota's head. A bolt of something like electricity shot through his hand, up his arm, and clear across town to his skull. Clarity was instantaneous. His eyes shot open, his mouth gaped open with a gasp of air. Shinso scurried backwards, crying out in surprise. Izuku's eyes felt like they were burning, and he knew without ever seeing his reflection that his eyes were burning red like Kota's. But a moment later it was gone. His eyes and mouth closed and he looked like he was sleeping. No one but Shinso had seen it. "What are you screaming about?" Garaki asked over the intercom. "And nothing, he just ... His eyes snapped open. "I thought he was screaming." "Sit still. This will be easier if you cooperate." Izuku ignored them. His whole world just shifted to the side and turned upside down. Kota wasn't a church grim at all. He was only appearing as one because Eri needed a protective wolf to guard her, to save her from the dangers of her young life. He appeared as a wolf because Eri had asked for one. But it's not what he was. No, he could appear as almost anything he wanted to be, because he wasn't a church grim. He was a Koist Bodhar. Kota was a death coach, a familiar to the Dullahan. But a death coach wasn't just a familiar to the Dullahan. They're familiar to the Banshee as well. Izuku could feel himself smiling. Of course, she wasn't just some special little girl with a rewind quirk. She was a wailing woman. She could predict death, and she would mourn it. She mourned it so well that she could even reverse it. Izuku was so stupid. Why didn't he see it before? While it wasn't unheard of for a church grim to choose a person instead of a holy site, it was incredibly rare. He should have considered it when Eri was crying for his wounds in the gym, when she cried and rewound his face, for fear he might die. "Come to me, Kota," he called his familiar. The wolf's teeth grabbed his hand and pulled him forward. Izuku couldn't tell where they were, but they stopped for a moment and Izuku realized they were at the top of a set of stairs. Eri put his hand on the railing and they descended. Faster, faster still, they pulled his body along. The moment his feet slapped on the pavement, they were running. But even that didn't last long. He couldn't see it. But suddenly his body was enveloped in something thick and weighted like a foggy morning in the woods. Eri was lifted into his arms and a moment later they were rushing through the streets. Izuku could hear the passing cars screeching and honking as they flew past, a death coach flying down the city streets. Nothing could stop it. Nothing in the human world could stop the heralder of death from its duty, from its path towards the source of its power, Izuku's head. Once more Izuku's eyes snapped open. He found Shinso staring at him, fear in his eyes. "I have a plan." "Okay." Shinso picked up his head and hid him from view. "Great, cool. You got new powers. Sit. What's your plan?" He was keeping his voice low, watching the villains talking at a table nearby, gesturing at the test results they'd printed out and spread across the top. "You were right, I do have a familiar." "What?" "Kota. He's not a church grim. He's my familiar. He's my death coach. He took the form of a wolf because that's what Eri needed, a protective beast to save her. They're coming." "Coming what?" "What do you mean they're coming? They don't know where we are." "Kota can sense me. I have a plan." Shinso huffed a sigh. "My head is still screaming. Can you just dumb this down for me? Does your quirk work through an intercom?" Izuku strained his eyes to get a better look at the hero student worriedly hiding Izuku against his chest. "I don't know, maybe. I've never tried." "Well, start. I need his name." "Dr. Garaki." Shinso held his head up and looked at him, confused. "That would be great. His is fake, too. But no, I need all for one's name. I have a hunch that Garaki knows it." "You're insane." The teen grumbled. "Utterly insane. Even if I manage to get Garaki under my control, AFO is here, he'd just they're coming back." Shinso placed Izuku's head back under his arm. Izuku could feel his body getting closer. Eri was humming a haunting song in his arms. Kota wasn't a wolf anymore, that much he knew, but he couldn't quite tell if they were in a car or an actual coach of some kind. He focused back on the lab when the villains approached the cell. "Well, you've got some interesting readings. I am quite satisfied that I can effectively dampen your quirk, so that your words wouldn't be a hazard, if only long enough to get your head back on so we can copy your quirk." "What the hell does that even mean, copy his quirk?" Shinso asked. Izuku could almost feel the power of the heraling's quirk behind his words. Garaki stared at him for a second, then looked at All for One. "He really thinks I'll reply to him, doesn't he? Well, you should at least give him credit for trying, Doctor." "I suppose so." "Right, then, let's get to work." "Shinso, that was your name, wasn't it? Please place the head on the ground and step away from it. Thank you." Izuku blinked, blankly staring at the villains when Shinso turned his head around. Wow, he absolutely hated being bodiless. This was the longest he'd ever been separated from his hands. And the desire to flip these aholes the bird was irresistibly strong. He did resist, though, since his body was with Eri and Kota currently. Even so, he really needed All for One's name, so he couldn't piss them off enough that they would want to tape both teens' mouths shut. "Yeah, I think I'll just keep hanging on to his head. Thanks. You don't actually think I trust either of you, right?" No one answered Shinso again. Izuku clenched his jaw. There had to be a way to trick them into answering a question. The villains were effectively ignoring them as they readied whatever test or experiment they were about to do. "Damn it," Shinso mumbled to him. "This isn't going to work. Keep trying." Izuku whispered back. Just don't push hard enough to get us ended. No sit. Izuku still couldn't sigh, no matter how bad he wanted to. Speaking was a force of his nature, raw power being shoved across his tongue. It wasn't real speech. He'd have to wait just a little bit longer. His body was close, but the last few blocks were the toughest. The lab was buried under a ridiculous amount of concrete and dirt. Locating the exact location of his body was like trying to find a needle in a pile of other needles. Where are you? Eri clung to him. He could feel her nails digging into his skin as she worried. Kota kept running, round and round the prefecture. Izuku could almost hear the sound of a horse baying in the night air. Izuku's eyes fluttered open, his attention once more returning to the present moment. They're close. Wait, what? Shinso pulled his head up so they were eye to eye. Izuku blinked a few times to clear his blurry vision from the sudden movement. Who? I told you, Eri and Kota. You were, Sir. Shinso sighed at himself. Of course you were. You always are. But this is no place for two kids. They're not just children, Shinso. Something shifted in the heroling's eyes. His face scrunched up. Izuku arched a brow, asking without speaking what was on his mind. You used my name. He paused. You used Kota's name. Why? Not now. Get Garaki to speak. I'll explain later. Fine, fine. Let the one with legs do all the work. You know, you're a lot more bossy when you're just ahead. Izuku glared at Shinso. And you're a lot more energetic when you're under duress, insomniac. The teen mocked his words, mumbling them as he tucked Izuku's head back under his head. Yeah. Shut up before they notice. I'll see what I can do. So Izuku shut up and focused on trying to get his body closer to his head. It was a difficult task, especially since he was essentially focusing on two separate existences, two separate worlds and consciousnesses. There was certainly going to be an adjustment period for getting used to this. He much preferred having both halves of himself within arm's reach. What are you going to do with him? Put the head down. We're going to start in a moment. I'll return later, Doctor. If you have any issues, have Dabai wrangle them. Closer. His body was closer. Every moment they were circling closer to him, but it was like circling around a giant red X on a map. The search area was far too big, too vague. He had to narrow it down. What did he see? What did he see? An alleyway, long, straight. The bar, warehouses to both sides. There. The coach screeched to a halt. Izuku's eyes snapped open again. What do you want with Ghost? The doctor was silent. Why are you doing this? Silence. Why is his quirk important? Izuku knew that answer. The ability to end with just the voicing of a name. That was a power he'd protect until his death. Why won't you talk to me? Did I not just say to put down the head? It wasn't enough. He had to directly answer the question or it wouldn't work. No, I'm not putting him down until you tell me why. That wasn't a question. Karaki sighed into the intercom. Since you asked so nicely, I'm going to make a copy of his quirk for my good master to enjoy. It's going to be unpleasant and likely painful, but it shouldn't be difficult. Now, unless I what? Shinso muttered under his breath between Garaki's words. You put him down. Huh. Shinso thrust his fist into the air. Izuku's vision bounced again, rattling his brain around in his skull. If I had a stomach, I'd be vomiting. Can you please hold me steady? Oh, sit, sorry. Shinso steadied his head, tucking it under his arm. Right, Garaki. The foggy eyes of the doctor tilted upwards at the command. Unlock the cell, and tell us all for one's true name. With one click of a button on the panel by the door, the cell opened. Shinso was quick to usher them out. Garaki stood there, brainwashed, staring at the floor. They could see him fighting the quirk, but the effort was futile. Shinso's power was terrifyingly strong. Izuku could really use a power like that by his side. A moment later, the words Garaki spoke washed over Izuku like a cooling salve to a harsh burn. Yahiko Shigaraki. Before Izuku could take relief in the name he'd just received, his body was suddenly careening towards them at high speed. Sit, Shinso, duck. Wah, get down. Just as Shinso took his direction and ducked them down behind one of the metal work tables, the room erupted in noise. The wall burst open, concrete, wood, and dust flew everywhere, splattering them with debris. The clattering of metal hooves and iron wheels against stone squealed angrily against the ground as the old stagecoach skid across the room to a stop with the huffing of a horse's snout. What the FFF? You were serious? Why do you keep asking that? Izuku grumbled. Because this is impossible. Toshi. There she sat, atop the driver's bench of a Victorian stagecoach, covered in Gothic architecture edging the black curtain coach walls. It was larger than any coach Izuku had ever seen in history books, twice the size, actually. At the front stood one broad-shouldered horse with a coat as black as night. Its eyes were blazing red, steam pouring from its nose as it clopped a foot against the ground in annoyance. Its mane and tail both trailed behind its head, caught in some unfelt wind, and vanished into that oh-so-familiar wispy black smoke. Yuri jumped down carefully, aided by Izuku's body. She ran to Shinso and crashed into his legs. Izuku's body was quick to grab for his head, which the purple teen offered happily so he could pick Yuri up. Crack, crunch, Izuku's vision flipped sideways, twisted upright, and finally the world righted itself. He gasped back into his body. His mind snapped back together as one, no longer split between two places. Oh, sit, that sucked so much. Izuku snapped the heel of his hand against the back of Garaki's neck, knocking the villain unconscious into a heap on the ground. But that felt good. Are you back together, Ghost? Eri asked, holding out a hand which Izuku took. She was settled on Shinso's hip and clutching his shirt with her other hand. I am, Eri-chan. I'm all right now. You need to go. Shinso, get on the coach. You that. Right. That's Kota. It's just Kota. The horse huffed in Shinso's face and nuzzled his snout against the teen's shoulder. Oh, hey. Right, you're not scary, you're just Kota. I'm not freaked out. Promise. Move. Izuku ordered. Shinso did as directed. He placed Eri on the driver's bench and climbed up after her. He held out a hand to Izuku, but the Dullahan waved it away. Kota, take them back to campus. Nothing stops you. Understood. He slid his hands down the sleek black fur of the horse's side. The horse tapped his foot on the concrete. The familiar's head butted against Izuku's shoulder. Izuku could finally understand him without speech. Actually, he'd always understood. Now he could hear it somewhere in their bond like it had always been there. I know, your place is at my side. But right now, you must protect your sister and Shinso. Absolutely not. You are not staying here. Not without me. Izuku stopped him before he could get off the coach. Ghost, I mean it. You need my quirk. What I need is for you to get Eri and Kota to safety. And for Kota to get you to safety. No arguing. I'm the vigilante here. This isn't the place for a hero student without his gear or backup. Backup is coming. Eri peeked around Shinso's shoulder. The heroes were on their way before we left. The sound of clattering wood and stone echoed from above their head. That would explain why no one came downstairs when the coach broke through the damn wall. The heroes were upstairs, fighting his fight. Izuku's muscles tensed. Go, he commanded. Kota reared up, sparks flying from his metal horseshoes smacking on concrete when he crashed back down. Izuku had to dive out of the way as the coach spun sideways and turned to head back out the hole they'd made coming down here. In a flurry of black mist and the sound of Kota neighing angrily, the coach vanished back into the night, taking his friends, his adopted family, to safety. He spared one look for the doctor who had been planning to pry him apart for his quirk, and spat on his unconscious face. Izuku would ruin him later, that's for sure. Jiren would have a field day with a lab like this, copying quirks. That was almost worse than what Overhaul did. Almost, just for good measure. He grabbed the short man by the back of his collar and dragged him into the cell, locking it behind him. There were several things Izuku wanted to do right now, the first of which was to scream the name of the man who'd planned to rip him apart for his quirk, to call him to heel, to death. There was nothing in this world that could stop the Dullahan from completing its duty, and even worse, no bars or locks could hold against the creature ready to bring death upon those who had wronged the world. Izuku rolled his neck and cracked his knuckles. All these years, he'd been denying what he was in small ways. No one around him believed he had a quirk, and maybe some small part of him actually agreed with them. But he could not deny it now that he'd just spent a whole night away from his body. Not when his very own death coach came crashing through a wall for him. No, he could not deny what he was, and he would never deny it again. A black wispy smoke began to leak from his neck and hands. It trailed behind him, caught by some unseen breeze that kept it out of his face. Izuku smiled. He was a Dullahan. Izuku Midoriya, once a quirkless child, walked out of the basement with his chin up and his dark green eyes focused. Death walked beside him, a friend and companion, ready to take whomever he called into its embrace. What he found was a ruined bar, half the walls crashed through, broken, or still smoldering from what remained of Dabai's blue flames licking at the shattered edges. The fire villain himself was hiding behind a couch, clutching his ribs. When he caught Izuku's eyes, the villain choked on his breath. Izuku was curious if that was from seeing him out of the cage they put him in, or the fact that he had his body, or the fact that he didn't quite look human right now. Darkened eyes, so deep forest green they were almost black, scanned what remained of the room. Kurogiri was unconscious on the floor with Ed Shot and Kamui Woods chaining him up. They hadn't yet noticed the fire user hiding nearby, but Izuku saw no reason to harm Dabai. He might have cinched Shinso's bed and kidnapped them, but at present, he hadn't done anything that would be worth ending him for. Perhaps one could make that same argument about Tamura Shigaraki. Did his villainous deeds warrant death? Izuku would likely be fighting that moral argument until his own death. But he had made a choice that day and he'd stand by it. Today, he decided to make another choice. Izuku jerked his head towards the broken wall and turned to the heroes, ignoring the escape he just offered to Dabai. Ed Shot, Kamui Woods. What happened? He scurried over, stumbling across the debris with a faux look of horror on his face. Ghost. Ed Shot looked up, grabbing him as he nearly fell into the hero after slipping on a large chunk of the bar counter laying on the floor. Where's Shinso? He's fine. He's safe. What happened? Where's All for One? The two heroes shared a concerned look before staring out the giant hole in the wall. Izuku finally took in more than just the room around him. He'd been a bit too focused on just getting past the basement stairs. He did notice that Dabai was gone now, and hoped he'd made the right choice to let that happen. But outside the destroyed walls of the villain bar, he found what might have been mistaken for a wasteland. At least 2 miles of buildings and roads had been flattened. It was just before sunrise, the darkest part of the night. Izuku could still see the destruction. He could feel it. Names began filtering through his mind as if he knew them intimately. Names of each person who fell inside those buildings. He wanted to scream. He wanted to rip something apart with his bare teeth. The horrified rage that washed over him was like a tsunami taking out a city, and all he could do was hang on for dear life as it devoured him. "Ghost?" Kamui Woods asked, his voice hesitant. The disgusted sneer that peeled Izuku's lip up must have warned the heroes Izuku was not in the mood for talk. They both backed away from the vigilante, knowing full well he wasn't some hero student to coddle after a kidnapping. When he spoke, his voice caught between the four winds, sopranos and baritones crashing over each like waves on the beach. He could feel the rage bubbling over his eyes, not in the form of tears, but in a black smoke that poured down his face as if his very soul were crying. "Leave this place." Edshot stumbled backwards, only to trip over Kirigiri's prone form. Kamui Woods was quick to grab their captive, toss him over his shoulder, and start dragging the folding hero out of the wrecked building with him. Izuku watched them leave, fists clenched at his side and teeth grinding inside his jaw. The ground shook. 2 titans were fighting out there, making a bigger mess than they'd already made. Another wave of rage coursed through the Dullahan's veins. This destruction, all this death, for what? None of those people had reached their time. Those names were screaming in the back of his head. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of them, crying out for their unfortunate endings that should not have come this soon. Black smoke fogged around him, pooled and spilled down his back, forming his long cloak and hood, wisping away from him by the ground and around his face. He was barefoot, stepping through the debris with sure footing. His feet simply phased through anything in his way, leaving no effect on his body nor disturbance to the world he was walking through. After all, nothing on this earth could stop the Dullahan. No locks, not doors, not even debris. Embracing his true nature unleashed a whole new degree of darkness that ensured him, allowing his body to simply walk through what stood within his way. All Might stood on the battlefield, bloody and gasping for breath, his body barely holding itself upright. Izuku could see him beginning to fail. He might not yet be in his true, skinny form, but he was fighting a losing battle with his already destroyed body. All for One stood hunched over himself across from the hero, clutching his destroyed left arm, or what remained of it anyway. Both of them wore masks of rage and indignance and bared their teeth across the crater they'd made of the city. "What a pitiful mess the both of you have made," Izuku growled. "How the hell did you get your body back?" Silence. Izuku was not accepting commentary, especially not from either of these monsters. His tone split again, 4 crashing over 1 as smoke billowed around his body and shook from the weight of his voice. All Might just stared at him while catching his breath. He appeared to be speechless. He likely didn't recognize Izuku. And that was perfectly fine, as the little vigilante did not want to revisit that dark time in his childhood right now. All for One sneered at him, lashing out a quirk in an effort to stab several red spikes through Izuku. They passed through him, leaving no mark. He stepped through the rubble towards the villain, unhindered by the quirk use or crumbled buildings between them. He was sure that if the man had eyes, they'd be blown wide in shock. "You have taken the lives of those who were not yet called to death. You have made a massacre of this childish grudge match. Enough is enough." "Who are you?" All Might gasped. The older hero fell to his knees. So close, and yet so far from death. Izuku could smell it on him like a tainted cologne. "Get out of here, before you get hurt." Izuku crouched beside All Might and smiled. Though it went unseen behind his mask of black mist, he placed a gentle hand on All Might's chin, but the man wouldn't feel it. Izuku's fingers ghosted right through the man's frail skin. He tried to have compassion for the hero. Really, he did. But Izuku didn't have any left while those voices, those names, still echoed in his mind. "You cannot hurt me anymore, and neither can you." Izuku stood up and rounded on the villain, the black mist surrounding his legs roiling into a raging storm at his feet. "You have the weight of 1,000 deaths on your soul, and you must pay for those crimes." All for One burst out laughing. He stumbled forward in his laughter, as if the absurdity of what Izuku said made him lose his balance. The Dullahan rolled his eyes. In a split second, his body flung itself forward on ghostly trails of black, unhindered by silly things like physics. He grabbed the villain by the throat and squeezed as he made his hand physical again. Even if he couldn't lift All for One off his feet, he could see the man was struggling just as much as All Might to stay upright. They'd beaten each other harder than they'd beaten the crushed concrete around them. The villain glared at him and tried to grab him continuously, only to fail each time his fingers slipped through Izuku's arm. "You will pay for those crimes, Ghost." Izuku flicked his eyes across the rubble, finding Eraserhead sprinting towards him. He released All for One, letting him choke his breath back into his lungs for a moment. Gee, Ghost. Eraserhead slid to a stop a few feet away from him, his eyes blown wide with his quirk active. It did nothing to Izuku, but it was keeping All for One contained, well enough anyway. Izuku tilted his head to his teacher, but Eraserhead seemed speechless at the sight of him. He turned back to All for One, finding the villain grinning madly at him. So that's all it takes to stop you. A little humanity from your hero. The faceless villain stood up, as if his injuries no longer mattered. Izuku's whole body shivered. This feeling of slithering dread, identical to the sensation Tamura Shigaraki gave him back in that interrogation room. Izuku's whole body felt violated by fear, choking on it. But he didn't freeze. Not this time. The racer. Several happened at once. Izuku's body flung itself forward in a rush of black smoke. He crashed into Eraserhead, knocking the man back a couple feet with an angry thud as both their bodies tumbled across the trench. At the same time he threw his body, All for One lashed out his quirk. His arm bulged and twisted, thrusting several quirks out through the limit once like a giant war pike. All Might had struggled to his feet and charged All for One when Izuku took after his teacher. Ghost. No, Izuku coughed. The aforementioned war pike was currently skewering him straight through his stomach. Fine. The blood pouring from his mouth might prove him wrong, but he was, actually, okay. Or he would be, when he got this damn fist out of his gut. Effing sit, you are not okay, kid. Come on, up you get. Izuku screamed. As soon as he stood up, All for One's fist was forcibly ripped from his body when All Might crashed into the monster and they were once again fighting like titans. Wind rippled around them, sending both Izuku and Eraserhead into a nearby pile of rubble. Thankfully, with the removal of the quirk-enhanced fist, his body had already started to rapidly stitch itself back together. It was nearly dawn. He really hoped this would heal before the sun rose and his healing factor slowed down. Come on, we gotta get you back to the medics. No, Izuku groaned. Ghost, shut up, Shouta. That put an end to the conversation. Izuku had never, not once, referred to Eraserhead by his given name. The hero let his shoulders fall and waited for Izuku to explain. The Dullahan took a few breaths and clutched his stomach, as if that might help it heal faster. Is All Might on comms? Wah, Shouta. Izuku barked, wincing at the pain it caused. Is he on effing comms? Yes. Why? Tell him. Izuku coughed up another mouthful of blood. Tell him to bring All for One to me. Ghost, you have a hole in your gut. You do not need to be on this battlefield, and I am not letting you fight that monster. Why on earth would you want me to? The inky black smoke around his face faded away, revealing the wild grin on his face. Despite the blood pooling down his chin, Izuku had a maddening hunger in his eyes and the desire to scream one singular name to the heavens. Eraserhead put his hand to the comm on his ear with the slightest hint of fear in his eyes. All Might, bring AFO over here. A pause, silence. Then, it doesn't matter why, just do it. Now, the hero must have agreed because Eraserhead nodded to Izuku. I hope you know what you're doing, kid. I do. With every fiber of my being, Shouta. I know what I'm about to do. I hate it. His smile turned gentle and reassuring. But I've already made the choice. Shouta nodded, slowly, then nodded again. After a moment, he grabbed Izuku by the shoulders and pulled him in for a hug. At first, Izuku wasn't really sure what to do with that. After all, he'd rarely been shown affection from adults, and never from a teacher. The shoulder pats and hair ruffles were one thing, but a hug was completely another. I'm proud of you. Shouta pulled away and grabbed his face. The two fighting monsters were closing in. All Might was pulling AFO towards them. I am so proud of you, Izuku. The tears that fell from his eyes were clear, devoid of the black smoke he'd been venting for the last hour. These tears were peaceful, happy. He'd never heard anyone tell him they were proud of him. He didn't realize just how much he needed to hear it. Time appeared to slow around him. Shouta gave him a single nod and stepped back. Izuku turned to face the raging monstrosity that was All for One as he threw punch after punch and beat All Might back towards Izuku. Izuku held up one hand, palm towards the sky, and let himself sink back into his true nature. Black mist once more spilled around him, larger than ever before. A puddle formed around his feet, black mixing with blood and forming something deep crimson and vibrating with the force of each wave from the fight in front of him. Izuku took a deep breath and opened his eyes. All Might threw one last punch, caught himself on the ground, stumbled, and collapsed. All for One's laugh was manic, but in Izuku's perceived slow motion, the laugh sounded like someone strangling underwater. The man stepped forward once. Izuku narrowed his eyes. All for One took another step, but he would not take another. Yahiko Shigaraki. All for One's body froze at the sound of his twisting and folding multi-toned voice. You have committed countless crimes against humanity. In their defense and pursuit of their justice, I call you to your death. Just like that, it was over, without eyes to witness the loss of light. They watched his body slowly sink to the ground like the thousands of collapsed bricks around them. All for One was dead. Exhaustion overtook Izuku's mind. And in the moment before he lost consciousness, he watched Shouta catch him and saw his lips moving. Perhaps he was calling Izuku's name. What a nice thought. The first time Izuku truly accepted himself as the heralder of death had brought the world's foremost nightmare to his knees. And he'd never even planned for that to happen. He had no intention of meeting All for One. Hell, the whole underground thought he was a myth. But he'd done it, and now he could finally sleep. Izuku cracked his left eye open only to regret that decision immediately. The light hurt. His whole body hurt. The sound of the stupid heart monitor next to him was giving him an even worse headache. He groaned, annoyed that he was even awake. This, of course, was also a bad decision, because the bed shook as something jumped onto it and suddenly there was a giant tongue lapping at the side of his head. Ugh, Kota, stop, please. His voice was raw, gravely. The wolf whined, but he settled down at the end of the bed and Izuku finally opened his eyes. He didn't realize he wasn't alone. Or rather, he didn't realize there was more than just his familiar in the room. Eri was curled up in a big comfy chair in the corner with a blanket over her. Actually, all he could see of her was a little splash of white hair and her horn. This made him smile just a little. Hey kiddo. Shouta was leaning on the doorframe with a stupid half-hearted grin on his face. Kota's head perked up as he let out a reserved borf. Oh, don't get upset. I just saw you earlier. He still walked over and gave the wolf a head scratch, which made Kota incredibly happy. I feel like Sid. His head fell back on the bed. Yeah, the doc said that would likely be the case for a couple weeks. Apparently, your quirk never fully manifested. Eri told us about what happened in the dorms, which, by the way, you are all in serious trouble for. Kota was smart enough to duck his head and whine. Anyway, the doc said your quirk likely didn't manifest because you'd never used its full capacity before coming to UA. Your healing factor is latent. Almost like a mutation, which makes sense, as I can't erase most of your quirk. Okay, you do realize I am getting none of this. Oh yeah, I know. Izuku rolled his eyes and flipped to his side. He clicked his tongue and Kota shuffled himself up on the bed to curl up next to him. The canine did afford one glance to Eri's sleeping form, but she was safe, so he settled back down and Izuku put an arm around him. So, Shouta settled down in a chair next to the bed. Do you want to explain what happened? Well, you just said, my quirk manifested. You know what I mean. The tired hero jerked his chin towards all three of them. Izuku sighed. Kota isn't a church grim. I figured that much. Right, he's a Koist Bodhar. I'm sorry, what? Shouta blinked a few times. Ooh, Izuku chuckled. Think of it like a witch's familiar. But for a Dullahan, he's the horse for the headless horseman. Sort of. He's also the coach. Wait, did you see the... Yes, the whole dorm saw a Victorian-style horse and buggy pull Eri and Shinso into the yard. As I said, serious trouble. Right, Izuku sighed. He can shapeshift. Eri might also be a banshee, which would explain why they bonded. Banshee are also known to ride on a Koist Bodhar to herald death. They are also said to be able to mourn death so deeply it can even reverse the suffering. Shouta pinched the bridge of his nose. You know, as far as crazy things go, that's actually not the most insane thing that's come out of your mouth. Fair enough. Shouta's phone rang. The man sighed and checked it. Izuku couldn't see it from his bed and he didn't bother asking yet. The teacher held up a finger to him and walked out of the room to answer it. When he looked down, Kota was sitting beside him on the bed, inspecting his hand that had been draped over the canine beside him. Do you think they'll take us back after this? Why would you think they wouldn't? Izuku sat himself upright, and that made his whole head spin sideways, so he took a moment to breathe through the vertigo before checking on Eri and looking back at Kota. Besides, Shouta wouldn't have said we're in trouble if they were kicking us out. But wouldn't that mean he's kicking us out? Izuku chuckled. Maybe for normal people, but I don't think anyone at UA is normal. Yeah, Kota made a face. They're really annoying. When you're not around, they're too loud. And not scared of me, so bite them. He made a fake scary face, clawed his hands and fake attacked Kota with a growling roar. The toddler broke into laughter, rolling sideways right off the bed. In a puff of black smoke, he tumbled to the floor. Izuku quickly leaned over to check on him, finding the wolf staring up at him with an annoyed scrunch to his brows. Izuku couldn't help but laugh, which made Kota bark several times. Okay, sorry. But really, if they bother you, just nip their ankles. You better not be giving your dog Air Wolf permission to bite your classmates. Shouta grumbled as he walked back in. Absolutely no ... Yeah, Shouta sighed. Alright, that was Netsu. The police have to chat with you before you can get released, but it's mostly just a formality since they have a record of your quirk. Obviously. Oh right, Tsukachi had seen him and Shigaraki. Izuku shrugged a little. Kota was worried you might kick us out. Gotta say, I wasn't so sure you'd want to take us back after ... Well, you know, ending a third villain. Kitty struggled for words and had to wipe a hand over his mouth before going on. I don't condone murder, but I can't lie to you and say I'm not grateful that the demon overlord of the Japanese underground is gone for good. and most of his lackeys were rounded up as well. Shinso told me he took out Garaki, though it's going to take us a while to secure all his research. Izuku really needed to get to his phone to make sure Jiren got that research. Wait, hold up, how did you know where we were? The heroes came busting in right before we managed to break out. How did you know where they were holding us? About that. Izuku watched the hero bashfully rub the back of his head. Shouta. His voice was a little insistent. Hey, why are you suddenly using names? That wasn't subtle, old man. But if you must know, I can tell the difference now. Like, I know when my intent is there, and when it's not. I guess, when my quirk fully awakened I just understood it better. It's hard to explain. Now, your turn. How did you know? Ugh, fine. I made a deal with Jiren. Izuku looked scandalized. Hand to chest, mouth hung open, he gasped dramatically. Shouta rolled his eyes so big it might have rolled them right out of his head. You can never again pick on me for my underground connections. The hero, my favorite hero, has sunk so low. Izuku put the back of his hand to his forehead and feigned passing out on the bed. Kota snorted a laugh from the ground beside the bed. How far have you sunk? My poor soul. Oh please, Shouta groaned. I shall never recover from this scandal. I'm traumatized. You're full of shit. Izuku stuck out his tongue and chuckled. Yeah, just a little. Ghost. A little hand appeared out of the pile of blankets and rubbed at a sleepy face. Ari, my chickadee, you're awake. She mumbled. Kota was quick to trot across the room and curl up in the chair with her, huffing his snout in her face to convince her to go back to sleep. She hugged her arms around his muzzle and kissed his nose. Did he get bigger? He looked like he was dwarfing Uri. Are you okay? Shu said you got hurt. Oh, Izuku looked down at his stomach. It was aching, but once he pulled his shirt up, he could see the skin was almost completely healed. There was still an indent and some scarred flesh, but it should be healed up in another 6 or 8 hours. Yeah, I'm fine. Promise. Good. Kota licked her face, making her giggle. Okay, Kota. I know you're tired. Sleep. The wolf huffed in her face again and settled his giant head around her on the chair. His legs were hanging off the chair. He barely fit with all the blankets wrapped around Uri. The pair got comfortable and it didn't take long for them to fall asleep again. They haven't had any real sleep since they got picked up from the Yakuza. Izuku sighed. I know. I sort of made your lives a bit of a fever dream since I arrived. Just a little. But honestly, what's high school without a little excitement, anyway? Izuku clapped. That's what I said to Shinso. Shouta settled back into the chair. So what's going on there? Where? Don't act like I don't know. You were in Shinso's room when Dabai kidnapped you. Half that mess was made before he showed up, wasn't it? Not. Really? Izuku crossed his arms. There was no way he was admitting to the flirting they'd done. It wasn't even anything serious. Was it? We just We were literally about to pass out. I was exhausted. Nothing happened. I didn't say it did. I don't care if it did. I was just curious. You can keep your secrets. Just be upfront with him. What do you mean? Izuku sat up on the bed again. If you hadn't noticed, I'm not the lying type. You are frustratingly honest at times. Yes, I meant more just ... Don't lead him on. He's had a rough time trusting people. I don't want to see him get hurt. I also don't want to see you get hurt. You're a lot more open about who and what you are than he is. Don't expect that same kind of brutal honesty from others that you give so freely. Izuku deflated a little. Not because he was disappointed or hurt, but because he hadn't really thought about any of that yet. Flirting, or whatever it was still new. Izuku wasn't all that sure where it would lead. But Shouta was right. He should think about his expectations. And Shinso's, too. Thanks, Shouta. I'll keep that in mind. The older hero leaned over and ruffled his curls as he stood up. Just doing my job. Now, get some rest. Finally, Izuku asked, hopeful. Finally, kid. You've more than earned it. Izuku practically collapsed into the pillows. He felt like his life had been flipped upside down since his decision to stay at UA. Actually, it was since his decision to take the damn job of stealing from UA. Proper rest just hadn't been easy to find. But finally, he could just collapse into a bed and sleep as long as he wanted. In the end, even if it all started as an accident, he was happy that it led him here. Izuku had snuck himself up to the roof of the Tua dorms. It was sunset. He wanted to enjoy the last of the day's warmth. He'd only been back to the dorms for a couple days after spending 3 in the hospital. They ran every kind of test possible to ensure his quirk was stable and fully manifested. He also got an incredible amount of rest, which had done wonders for his health. Uri and Kota were also given a small battery of tests, if only to check they were healthy after the shift in their quirks as well. They were all given a clean bill of health after 3 days and sent back to school once they'd spoken to the police about the events of the Camino raid, as they were calling it. When they got back, Uri and Kota had their own room, which was specially designed for them to be able to share, and also split when they needed privacy as they got a little older. The school staff acknowledged that the 3 resident Fae couldn't really be separated. but they all needed their own space as they grew. Izuku appreciated the school's efforts, so Izuku had moved back into his own room. But he hadn't really spent much time there by himself at least. Hitoshi slipped his arms around Izuku's shoulders and put a chin on his shoulders. Izuku smiled and turned his head to the side. He pressed his forehead against Toshi's temple and took a few deep, calming breaths. Toshi's arms tightened around his shoulders. "Everyone's waiting on you, Spook." Toshi had picked up Jiren's nickname for him back in the bar, and he used it to perpetually tease Izuku only because he knew it annoyed the ex-vigilante. Now they're waiting on both of us. Hitoshi's laugh shook Izuku's shoulders and washed a warmth over him that he'd really come to love. Izuku's arms were draped over the railing. He desperately wanted a cigarette, but for now, he was satisfied just enjoying the dying light with his boyfriend wrapped around him. "So, are you ready to finally get started as an underground hero student?" Izuku pursed his lips. "I don't know. I think I could use some more excitement for my first semester of hero school." Hitoshi groaned and shoved himself off Izuku and back towards the roof door. "You can have your excitement, but leave me out of it." "Oh, come on, Toshi. You know you had fun." "Fun? Is that what you call kidnapping and then being tossed around on a death coach?" "Don't bring Kota into this argument." Izuku playfully shoved his boyfriend towards the door. Hitoshi grabbed both sides of his face just as the sun sank under the horizon. He wore a wide, devious grin on his face, and Izuku knew exactly what he planned to do. "Don't you dare." When the light blinked out of the sky, Hitoshi twisted, and with an ever-familiar crackling pop, Izuku's head came right off and got tossed under Hitoshi's arm. "What was that?" "Sorry, I think you lost your voice or something." Izuku ground his teeth. As they made their way down the stairs, Izuku's body following them with an angry cross-armed pose, he held Izuku's head up and kissed the edge of his lips. "You're cute when you're angry and headless." "Toshi, oh, I think I heard a ghost." "Spook, where are you?" "Toshi." He nipped his teeth on his boyfriend's hand, making the purple heroing yelp. "The ghosts are getting physical. How dangerous." His laughter filled the stairwell, and Izuku was so tempted to join him. Once they made it to the bottom of the steps, his head was settled back on his shoulders and Hitoshi gripped his chin between his finger and thumb. "Oh, I love your pouty face." Izuku quickly cracked his head back onto his neck and tried to snap his teeth right on Toshi's nose, but the taller teen was quick to back off and flip his middle finger. "Toshi, get back here." "Nope. Use those fancy spook skills and catch me." Izuku's body bolted forward with a burst of inky black smoke so he could corner Hitoshi against the wall with only one hand on his boyfriend's throat. "Spook skills, huh? Is that what you're calling it? Only in public." Izuku opened his mouth to retort but found he had absolutely no comeback for that. The tension between them was thick for a moment. Hitoshi was biting at his lower lip and Izuku was still trying to formulate words. Just as Hitoshi's eyes flicked to his mouth, the moment burst when an explosive blonde shoved himself right through it. "Are you two going to stand there all night gawking at each other, or are you coming to dinner?" Katsuki, in all his barefoot and kiss-the-cook apron glory, stood at the end of the hallway. Izuku pushed off the wall and made a valiant effort to stifle his laughter, but he failed miserably. Yeah, don't blast my head off, Kakin. I could. Don't test me." The blonde put up a finger. Izuku rolled his eyes. "Toshi already beat you to it. Don't antagonize the angry Pomeranian in my name, Spook. You two are idiots." Izuku and Hitoshi shared a grin and patted Katsuki on the shoulders as they passed. A moment later, he grabbed them both in a double headlock and started hauling them into the common room, much to their displeasure. Izuku complained the whole way and Toshi just hung like a dead weight, which didn't seem to bother Katsuki one bit. The only thing that stopped their progress was a white flash running directly into Katsuki's legs. "Cat," Iri cried. "Kota stole the last takoyaki from the counter." "Did he?" Izuku spotted his black snout poking around the kitchen counter, looking less than guilty but hiding anyway. "Well, we'll just have to make more." He finally released Izuku and Hitoshi so he could pick Iri up. She'd taken well to the angry blonde since they got back a few days ago, and Izuku wasn't sure why. Maybe because he didn't put up with anyone's sit. Iri could learn a few things from him about that. He'd already started training her in self-defense. Izuku rubbed his neck and watched his adopted daughter help pull down the ingredients with Katsuki's help. The rest of the class were spread out across the common room. Ida waved them over. Izuku lifted a hand to wave back and Hitoshi offered a quick temple kiss as he left the kitchen. Izuku didn't follow. Instead, he leaned on the counter and waited for Katsuki to turn around. "Need something, nerd?" "Yeah." Katsuki arched an eyebrow at his somber tone. He set Iri down and told her to stir the bowl for a moment so he could talk to Izuku. "What's up?" "I was just thinking, up on the roof." "Wanna elaborate on that a little?" "I can't read minds, idiot." Izuku chuckled. "Yeah." He rubbed the back of his neck nervously and smiled. "I guess I just wanted to say that I'm actually glad things happened the way they did. Not our childhood. I mean, coming here, reconciling with you, it's just good to know you're becoming a hero." Katsuki blinked, his eyes widening in shock. He opened his mouth but nothing came out. Instead, he wiped his hands on his apron and nodded to the counter for a few minutes. That means a lot, coming from you. Yeah, well, don't let it go to your head, Katsuki. Izuku winked. Katsuki snorted. Only if you're becoming a hero with me. Izuku. He offered out his flower-covered hand. Izuku took it and clasped their fingers together. Maybe our dream never died. Maybe we'll get to be heroes together. Yeah. Izuku knocked their foreheads together. Maybe we just put a new name to it. A new meaning, new power. You're still an idiot. Yeah, and you're still a jerk. I think you're both being too sappy. Eri exclaimed. Where did you learn a word like sappy? Izuku scurried around Katsuki to scoop Eri up and spin her around the kitchen. She giggled the whole time as the blonde took over making dessert. Kota. Izuku snapped his eyes up to find Shouta standing at the entrance of the common room, with a very chewed-up boot in his hand. The man was fuming, quirk already blazing in his eyes. The wolf whimpered and bolted for the door, followed by their teacher and his capture scarf. Eri wiggled out of his arms and jumped down to chase Kota and their teacher around the common room. A couple of their classmates joined in. Dark Shadow grabbed Kota up and played keep away while Shouta lectured her. Katsuki's arm on his shoulder drew his attention back to the kitchen. Remember what you told me the day you showed up here? Izuku looked up at Katsuki. His eyebrows were knit together in thought. That you could have ended me 100 times. That maybe you should have. That maybe you should have done that to a lot of people. Yeah, you picked right. Izuku tilted his head in confusion. You picked right. He nudged his chin towards the scene of their classmates and teachers still running around after Kota and Eri. I know you were scared of your power. And maybe you still are, but you've always picked right. You used your power right. Maybe one day, I can tell some idiot on TV that my best friend saved the whole world, and he did it by giving us all stupid nicknames. Izuku leaned his head on Katsuki's shoulder and smiled. It was an accident. Really, the first time was genuinely an accident, but every time after had mattered more than Izuku could have ever imagined. Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.